Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Scion Fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Had WARUDO Quirk. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. When it first happened, Izuku Midoriya was confused. He watched as his best friend, Katsuki Bakugo, tumbled off of the log bridge they were walking on. But when he reached out towards him, trying in vain to close the distance, he slowly stopped falling. There is a phenomenon that occurs when you focus so hard on something. Time will seem to slow, giving you more time to predict and react to whatever is happening around you. However, Izuku's perception of time slowed down so much that it stopped completely. For a moment, but only a moment, Katsuki was frozen in mid-air, an expression of surprise on his face. Everything felt incredibly heavy all of the sudden. Izuku strained himself to turn around and realized that not only was his friend frozen, so was everything else. But he could move, even if it was very difficult. Was this his quirk? He didn't have time to contemplate this thought as everything unfroze and Bakugo continued his plunge into the river below. The strange weight was lifted from his shoulders. Izuku thought about this the whole walk back. His mumbling caught the attention of Katsuki. "The hell you mumbling about, Deku?" Izuku snapped out of his trance and looked up at Katsuki. "Something happened when you fell, Kaken," he said. "You were falling, and then you were frozen in the air, but then you kept falling." He started to mumble again. "What the hell are you talking about?" Katsuki didn't understand what his friend was talking about at all. He had fallen straight into the river, he didn't freeze or stop on the way down. "We didn't see Katsuki stop at all, but there was a loud buzz and you moved really fast, Deku," one of Katsuki's minions said. "Yeah, it almost looked like you teleported, you moved so fast, but you didn't really move that far," the other minion mentioned. Now Katsuki was royally confused. Deku teleported, he thought. He stopped himself from yelling at the nerd for not saving him while he fell since he didn't want to be saved by him. But how did he teleport? Obviously it was his new quirk, he was overdue to get his for a while now. However, what he said and what the minions observed were different. His friend said that he froze while falling and that didn't have anything to do with teleportation. Unless his new quirk let him move so fast that time seemed to slow to a stop. "Hey Deku, did anything else freeze besides me?" "Yeah, everything around was frozen in place, but I could still move. I did feel really heavy though." The nerd was moving really fast, so fast that the rest of the world seemed to freeze. He wanted to talk about how cool that was, about how he was excited to have a proper rival in his journey to the top, but that wouldn't look very cool in front of the minions. That would have to wait a little while longer. As they walked back along the trail, Izuku continued to mumble every now and then. The minions bantered back and forth about nothing in particular. This sound would have annoyed Katsuki a few minutes ago, but now he was lost in thought, too. The sheer number of applications that Izuku's new quirk had was incredible. Katsuki's newfound rival was going to be a challenge, but that was the point of a rival in a story. He would use him as a stepping stone towards number one. He was so lost in his head that he didn't realize that the trail ended. Katsuki only snapped out of it when he heard the blaring of a car horn right next to him. Izuku also noticed this. His best friend had taken a step too far and was now in the street with a car barreling towards him. His body moved before he could think. The world froze again and he sprinted towards his friend as fast as his 4-year-old legs would let him. He felt heavy, but he kept pushing. Thankfully Katsuki was only a few feet in front of him. He grabbed his friend and pulled him to the ground. The car shot past, still blasting its horn. He looked down at his friend. He had gained a few more scratches but was otherwise unharmed. Katsuki pushed his way out from under his friend. He had almost died. He was going to die. Then he was on the ground having been shoved away by his rival. He turned and looked at the minions. They were still rooted in place, looking from Izuku to Katsuki fast enough to give themselves whiplash. Izuku got up and walked over to Katsuki who was still on the ground. He extended his hand and asked, "Are you okay?" The same thing he had done earlier at the river. But Katsuki didn't follow tradition and grabbed his hand and pulled himself up into a hug. They both were on the verge of tears. Katsuki realized how lame this looked and quickly broke it up. "We're still in the road, nerd," he said with little emotion, trying to cover up how close he was to breaking down. They both quickly walked back over to the side. The minions still just stared, mouths agape. A million questions ran through all of their minds. But none would be answered right now. They all silently walked off towards their houses in shock. To say his mom was upset would be an understatement. Izuku Midoriya cried her eyes out when Izuku told her what happened. She grabbed him and pulled him into a hug and held him there for a long time as they both cried. It was an accident and he had saved his best friend. She didn't know whether to be proud, scared, or angry. However, something still more important had occurred. "Izuku, sweetie, do you think that was your quirk?" she asked after they stopped crying. Izuku realized that it probably was and cheered up slightly at the thought. "Yeah, Mom, I think it was," he said as happily as he could. "We'll set up an appointment with a quirk counselor tomorrow and get everything in order." A few tear-filled phone calls with Mitsuki Bakugo later, and she felt a little more at peace. She set up an appointment so Izuku could have his quirk recorded and figure out how to use it and tried to go back to cooking dinner. She had to mostly start over since it had been a couple hours and she had forgotten about it. She sighed and got to work. The next day, Inko and Izuku went to the counselor and began the process. Over the course of the next few hours, Izuku learned that his quirk was a mutation of his mom's. Izuku Midoriya's quirk allowed her to pull small objects towards her. Izuku Midoriya's quirk was the complete opposite. It allowed him to pull on the biggest thing in reality, spacetime itself. The harsh buzzing sound that emanated from him was the result of this movement. Izuku seemed to be able to stop time. Only for a moment, a tenth of a second they all figured, but it was still incredible. The heavy sensation he felt was him trying to move through the frozen air. He could move perfectly fine otherwise and perform any action while time was stopped. His little mind had a hard time realizing how powerful it was, but he got the gist of it. His analytical mind went wild with each new development, thinking up new ways he could use this quirk to save people like All Might. As the next 10 years passed by, Izuku would slowly improve the duration he could stop time. Him and Katsuki got closer, the bullying turning into a friendly rivalry. They sparred regularly at a gym near their houses. Soon it was the beginning of their last year of junior high, one more year until high school. They both gunned for UA, the top. Nothing would stand in their way. Izuku wasn't a cheater. It definitely wasn't because his quirk made so much noise when he stopped time that he didn't use it to cheat. But, he just really wanted to sometimes. Then again, why would he need to cheat when he aced nearly every test? It was counterintuitive. He would probably end up doing worse unless he cheated off of Katsuki. Oh no, he wasn't even going to think about that. Katsuki would kill him in his sleep if he tried that. God Deku, shut the hell up? Izuku accidentally stopped time. He was so startled by Katsuki's scream. He couldn't help but laugh when he looked at him, though. Mouth wide open, eyes bulging out, and just spit everywhere. Time resumed fairly quickly and everyone obviously noticed that he had used his quirk. Did you need to stop time to change your pants or something? Katsuki started to laugh and the rest of the class including Izuku followed. No, just needed to wipe all of the spit off my desk. Katsuki stopped laughing, but still smirked at his friend. I'm not going to go easy on you this afternoon. Wouldn't have wanted you to anyways. They stared at each other, fire in their eyes until the teacher piped up. Okay, you boys settle down now. I have some career interest papers I need to pass out. Katsuki sat back down as the class groaned. But, you're all planning to be heroes anyway, so why bother? The class erupted into cheers as the teacher threw the papers into the air. Teach, don't lump me and Deku into the same group as these rejects. Izuku's eyes almost rolled out of his skull. Katsuki, don't you think you've made enough of a scene already? Oh, that first scene was your doing, Deku. Katsuki turned around and yelled. He planted a hand on Izuku's desk and almost blew it in half, along with all of his papers if he hadn't stopped time and grabbed them all. Bakugo, Midoriya, stop using your quirks in school or I'm going to send you both to the principal's, the teacher threatened, but it was mostly empty. Katsuki knew this but still turned back around and slouched into his chair. The rest of the school day went pretty smoothly for Izuku, no pop quizzes or outbursts from Katsuki. Overall, it was a pretty good day so far. He even got to see two new heroes early on his way to school. He joked around with Katsuki for a little while after classes ended and began walking home. Katsuki decided to be a show-off and blasted out the window and flew through the sky to his house, leaving Izuku to walk home. He's probably still upset I interrupted his rant earlier, he thought as he walked under a bridge. He knew how prideful his friend was, so of course he had to show off and fly home to get some of it back. Izuku rolled his eyes again. He needed to be knocked down a peg sometime. A noise behind him caught Izuku's attention. A medium-size invisibility cloak. Dark green sludge poured out of a manhole. It had eyes, too. This was a villain. It lunged at Izuku, but he simply stopped time and moved out of the way. It was pretty easy, he could stop time for double the time he was able to when he was a kid, a fifth of a second. The sludge villain looked up and saw that his target had evaded him. Missed me there, Sludgy, Izuku mocked him. I don't have time for this, the villain said as he tried again to envelop Izuku. But, Izuku just as easily teleported out of the way. If you stay still, I'll make sure that it doesn't hurt for too long. Man, you're in a rush to catch me. Is a hero chasing you? No. Izuku laughed, so he didn't even have to risk using his quirk to hurt the villain, he could just wait. After a few more teleports, he heard the manhole cover fly off. Took them long enough, he thought. But when he looked back to see who it was, he immediately took back his passive-aggressive comment. It was All Might. The villain was less excited to see the #1 hero and tried, in vain, to get a hold of Izuku one last time. He stopped time and moved out of the way again. Oh no you don't, villain. Izuku felt a gust of wind and heard a splat from where the villain was. He looked back and saw him coating the wall, having eaten one off All Might's punches. It was so fast he couldn't even react to it. All Might turned back to look at him. Do you have anything I could use to contain this villain, citizen? Oh, there are some bottles on the ground that you see could use, sir, Izuku stuttered slightly. Dang, he thought he got rid of that years ago. He was out of breath from dodging, so maybe that was it. Ah, thank you very much. All Might replied with boisterous energy. He walked over and grabbed 2 bottles and quickly scooped the sludge villain into them. Now that he is taken care of, are you okay? Yes I am, can I get your autograph? Izuku whipped out his hero analysis notebook, a pen, and presented a blank page. Why of course, All Might grabbed the notebook and pen. Can I get your name? Ah, it's Izuku Midoriya. Well, thank you very much young Midoriya for helping me catch that villain. You sure have an amazing quirk, teleporting around like that. All Might handed back the notebook and pen. Well it's not exactly teleportation. How intriguing, mind if I ask what it is then? Haha, my quirk lets me stop time for a fraction of a second. I can do pretty much anything during that time, such as dodge and attack. Pfft. All Might almost dropped out of his buff form when he heard that. What? Young Midoriya, you can stop time? Well only for about a quarter of a second, so it's not that impressive. All Might was dumbfounded. How could this kid think that a quirk like his wasn't the most incredible thing in the universe? Nonsense, with a quirk like that you could become a top hero or work your way up a business ladder. I don't know exactly how I could use my quirk for business, but I am aiming to become Japan's #1 hero, like you All Might. Izuku smiled brightly at his idol. How old are you, young Midoriya? I'm 14, I am going to try and get into UA's hero course for high school next year. Well, I can't wait to see you become an amazing hero, let me see your notebook again. Izuku took out his notebook and pen again. All Might quickly wrote something inside and gave it back. If you are interested, I wrote a number that will let you contact my agency for some training. Oh wow, thank you so much All Might. I will definitely be doing that. Izuku was ecstatic. All Might wanted to help him train? It was a dream come true. Well maybe not All Might himself, but it was still amazing. Well, I look forward to seeing you in the future, young Midoriya. I need to turn in this villain now. Call when you can. With that, he stepped out from under the bridge and jumped off. Izuku yelled more thank yous as he did. That kid is incredible, he thought as he was flying through the air. He had only seen the last move the kid made, but he had heard the yelling and that meant that the fight was going on for some time. Plus, he not only had a powerful quirk that could stop time, Izuku was also humble. He would be a prodigy if All Might trained him. And I need to make sure that he stays on the path to becoming a hero. I could only imagine the destruction a villain with a time-stopping quirk could cause. After another decent day at school, Izuku was walking towards Dagoba Beach where he would meet his trainer from All Might's agency. He had told Katsuki, who was jealous, and his mom, who was slightly worried but very proud, about the offer. Getting trained by someone close to All Might was a dream come true. His name was Toshinori Yagi. Izuku had never heard of him but he sounded very experienced with combat, although he did have a pretty nasty cough. Arriving on the beach, he saw a skinny man next to a pickup truck and assumed this was him. Hello, are you Toshinori Yagi? He walked over to the man and saw just how malnourished he actually looked. This couldn't be his trainer, right? Yes I am, and you must be Izuku Midoriya, correct? Toshinori spoke with a monotone voice. This was definitely the guy. Yes sir, I am. Okay good, I'll just jump straight into things then, he said as he opened the door to his truck and pulled out a clipboard. This is the Aim to Pass, American Dream plan. It should help you use your quirk more effectively, but I need to know a few more details about you and your quirk to finish it. Izuku was slightly surprised, this guy does know what he's talking about. Well my quirk simply lets me stop time for a short PRD, right now it's only a quarter of a second. During that time I can move and do anything I normally can, but it is a lot harder to move since I need to push the frozen air out of my way. Are there any major drawbacks to stopping time? Besides getting tired from all the extra energy I use, it takes about a second in between uses. Other than that, I can stop time as much as I want. Izuku smiled confidently. Geez, this kid is stupidly powerful, Toshinori thought to himself. Do you have any other training going on? Yeah, I usually go to the gym at least 3 times a week with my friend Katsuki and spar a little. Okay, I'll have this all ready for you after you finish today's training. But, this isn't anywhere near a gym, it's just a beach with garbage all over it. How am I supposed to train here? You will be moving that garbage up onto the street for cleaners to pick up over the next few months. Izuku's eyes widened. Cleaning up a whole beach. Was that even possible in that short of a time PRD? Why would that be any better than just going to a gym or sparring? He had gotten so far by just doing that, with a trainer he could progress even faster. Well, being a hero isn't all about beating up bad guys. A lot of heroes focus on community service and clean up work after a disaster. Since you already seem to have a good bit of combat experience, this should help you improve faster. I guess that makes sense. Plus, moving all the different kinds of trash will help work different muscle groups. Yeah, this makes a lot of sense. I'll get to work. With a buzz, Izuku teleported to the stairs and ran down them. Okay, good, he bought it. Toshinori sighed in relief, his overactive mind filled in most of the holes I left with that lame excuse. For the rest of the week, Izuku moved a lot of small objects, the biggest one being a metal folding table. Toshinori didn't want him to try anything bigger since it would cause him to overexert himself. He also wanted Izuku to be using his time stop as much as possible to work it out as well. However, Izuku's biggest weakness was how hard it was to move in his stop time. He couldn't move anything big or heavier than 15 kilograms, so strengthening his body overall was the #1 priority. After all, his time stop had only improved by 1/10 of a second over 10 years, so that was going to be very slow. Izuku finished carrying a microwave up to the street and teleported over to Toshinori, out of breath. Hey, Mr. Yagi, got a water bottle? Toshinori chuckled and threw him one. The kid practically inhaled it. Careful there, young Midoriya, don't drown yourself. His cover story was that he was simply a trainer scout for All Might's agency. He wanted to keep his hero identity a secret for a little while and get comfortable with the kid. That way he could see the kid's true colors when he wasn't talking to his childhood hero. All right, back to work. Izuku sprung up and ran over to the ledge that looked down at the beach. He stopped time just as he jumped off of it, tucked and rolled into the sand, and resumed time as he got up. This kid is full of too much energy, thought Toshinori. He walked over to the ledge and saw Izuku pull a piece of scrap metal from a large pile. Unfortunately, the pile began to tilt and fell over like a Jenga tower. Izuku looked up in shock, quickly stopping time and moving away from it. But when time resumed, something slammed into the pile, knocking it away. When the sand settled, he saw All Might standing there, worry in his eyes. DMN it, how'd I forget that he could just teleport out of the way? Wah, All Might? Izuku was bewildered. Where did he come from? White steam soon came out of the top hero and he reverted to Toshinori with a small cough. Well, I guess the cat is out of the bag. I am All Might. How, you're so skinny. To that Toshinori lifted up his shirt and showed his gruesome scar. I got this in a fight with a powerful villain about 6 years ago. The surgeries left me like this, only able to buff myself up for a few hours each day. Izuku's surprise only got larger. The #1 hero could only work for a few hours? But he was unbeatable. You've got to be kidding me, Izuku said as he collapsed into the sand. Toshinori walked over to the kid and knelt down. Unfortunately, I'm not. This is just the price I had to pay to keep society safe. He placed a hand onto his shoulder, unsure how to comfort him. Are you sure you want to become a hero if you know this is the price you might have to pay? Izuku wiped his forehead trying to process everything. I do, Mr. Yagi. Izuku smiled at his hero, his trainer. Toshinori returned it. With that bombshell out of the way, the next few months passed relatively quickly. No major villain attacks, Katsuki didn't blow up any of their classmates, so it was pretty good. Izuku upgraded from small appliances to things like dishwashers and large pieces of scrap metal. The beach was 60% cleaned by the time 4 months had passed. He was surprised with how fast it was going. He didn't feel that much stronger, but Katsuki had been saying that he was a lot faster in their sparring matches. So he was improving at least a little bit. Toshinori was also impressed by his student's progress. Ever since he accidentally outed himself as All Might, he sparred a little with Izuku to gauge his power. It was hard for him to even take a time-stop punch from the kid now. He would have no problems with the practical exam for UA. Katsuki also stopped by every now and then when Izuku was training. Sometimes he would help, other times he would just wait for Izuku to drop something and laugh. It just depended on his mood for the day. There were a few times when he almost caught Toshinori transforming, but they had kept it a secret for now. It was common knowledge that Izuku was being trained by someone from All Might's agency, but no one knew it was All Might himself. It probably wasn't a good idea to let the world know that All Might could only be a hero for a few hours each day. It was now 6 months since Izuku had started training. He was feeling great. Nothing could stop him today. A villain decided to test that. While he was walking to Dagobah Beach, he heard some struggling coming from an alleyway. His heroic nature obviously got the better of him and he charged into it. When he arrived he saw a girl, about his age, being threatened with a knife. Well, the knife was the guy's hand, but that didn't matter, at least he knew what the guy's quirk was. The villain noticed him. "Let her go," Izuku commanded. She looked utterly terrified, tears streamed down her rosy cheeks. "If you take a single step closer, her throat will be sliced open before you take your next one." The villain's voice was rough, like he didn't use it very much. He wore your standard mugger outfit, black hoodie, stained jeans, and some old beat-up sneakers. "Let her go, and I'll give you a head start on the heroes." Obviously he was bluffing. Izuku was going to knock this guy's lights out. "Oh, don't make me laugh or my hand might slip and cut her by accident," the villain chuckled. Well, it's time to see what his training has done for him. Izuku didn't give any indication. He just stopped time and began running. It was still difficult, but it did seem a bit easier. He grabbed the man's knife hand and pulled it away from the girl's throat. He then punched the villain as hard as he could and time started back up just as he did. The villain's nose crumpled and he went flying into a wall. Izuku wasted no time. He grabbed the girl's wrist and began to run away. The villain got up shakily, his nose bleeding profusely. He charged at the two kids, but was sent flying back by a time-stop kick from Izuku. They ran out of the alley and were met by a friendly face, All Might. "All Might, there's a villain in the alley." Izuku pointed down the alleyway. The villain stared back, wide-eyed. He tried to run. "Don't worry, he won't get far." Air rushed past Izuku and the girl as All Might chased down the villain and caught him. Izuku brought the girl over to a park bench and sat her down. She was shaking pretty bad. He saw All Might peer around the corner of the alley and look at him. Izuku gave the hero a thumbs up and he nodded, taking the villain and jumping off to the nearest police station. "Are you okay?" Izuku asked the girl. She shook her head. "No, but I'm starting to feel better," she said, her voice shaking. "Thank you so much." "It's okay, just try and calm down a little," he said, trying to comfort her. "What's your name?" "Achiko Uraraka." Izuku sat with Achiko on the bench, trying his best to take her mind off of what just happened. They talked about nothing in particular for a few minutes before All Might came flying back in. "You both need to give your statements about what happened." "I'm sorry that it must happen so quickly," he said with a solemn tone. Achiko didn't really want to think about it anymore, but she was forced to. Her and Izuku walked down to the police station and gave their statements. Izuku's mom was already there, looking very worried. Everyone gave their statements and they all walked outside together and stood near the entrance. Achiko's phone began to ring. She picked up and immediately pulled it away from her ear as the people on the other side screamed at her. "Achiko, are you okay?" Izuku heard that it was a woman's voice and assumed it was her mom. "We were so worried. Are you all right?" A man's voice came through this time. "Thank you so much for saving our daughter," Achiko's mom said. "It's fine," he smiled at her, "all that matters is that she's safe now." They parted ways, but not before the teens exchanged numbers awkwardly. Izuku walked back over to Dagobah Beach with his mom. Tashinori was waiting there. He walked over to them and gave Izuku a hug. "Don't ever scare me like that again, young Midoriya." "Sorry Tashinori, I can't stop myself from running into danger." Izuku realized what he had done a while ago. He had just run into a dangerous situation without thinking. He didn't call out for a hero or even try to catch the villain by surprise. Even though he was powerful, he still had limits. Speaking of those limits, I'm not sure what I did, but I feel like I stopped time for way longer than I should have been able to. Izuku had only expected to be able to pull the knife away and then punch after time resumed. But he had gotten both of them in during stop time. "Can you stop time for that long right now?" Izuku tried, but he couldn't. It was still just a fifth of a second. "No, I can't." "Maybe, during a time of crisis, you can stop time for even longer than you would be able to normally?" That made sense, but why hasn't it happened before? Then Izuku remembered that day, back when he was 4 years old, when he first stopped time. Why hadn't he noticed sooner? There was no way that a 4-year-old could have moved that fast even outside of stop time. That makes sense, but why did it never happen when he sparred with Katsuki or with the sludge villain? Perhaps it is because you are the one in danger instead of someone else. Another good point from the number 1 hero. It could also seem to be why he can unconsciously activate time stop, but only when someone else is in danger. "Whenever I want to protect someone else, my quirk tries to give me the power to do it." "I would think so, but I'm not sure how your body will react to you going over your limit." Well, it seems to be fine, but I've only done it twice from what I can remember. Best to play it safe then, young Midoriya. To the side, Inko was having a hard time processing everything. Her baby had just risked his life and could have died, and now he wasn't finding out that he could be hurting himself when he does it. Izuku, honey, please don't push yourself too hard, she said. Your quirk is incredibly powerful, but it's going to be bad if you overdo it. Don't worry, Mom, I will make sure I don't go 2+ ultra, he smiled, and Inko couldn't help but laugh at him. Her son is so sweet, but he can be a little brat sometimes. Hanging out with Katsuki so much has corrupted him. Thanks for all the help, Mr. Yagi, Inko said. Your son is incredible, Mrs. Midoriya, it's an honor to train him. With that, Toshinori walked over to his truck and got inside. The Midoriyas hugged again and began walking home. Izuku slowed down his training for the last 4 months to let his body rest more before the UA entrance exam. He finished cleaning the beach 3 weeks before it was scheduled. Him and Achiko talked quite a bit after their encounter. It turns out that she was planning to go to UA, too. She had moved to Mustafa alone to get close to the school. They hadn't really had a chance to hang out since they were both busy training or studying, but they planned to see each other after the entrance exam was over. During these months, Izuku also tried to go beyond his time limit, but he couldn't seem to do it. He knew it was true, however it seemed the situation needed to be very real. He had to believe deep down that if he didn't push himself that the other person would get seriously hurt. The extension of his time limit was also a mystery. Did it double, triple his time stop? He wouldn't know until he did it again. However, Izuku did notice that his normal limit in stop time seemed to have improved. He tried his best to measure it and came to the conclusion that he could stop time for 1/4 of a second now. His mom and Toshinori were overjoyed to hear that he had improved. Honestly, it was a miracle that he could improve at all in only a few months. But right now he has the entrance exam to worry about. Izuku stood on the ledge overlooking much of Dagoba Beach the morning of the exam. It was as clean as a whistle. Toshinori stood behind him smiling at his student. He was so proud. He knew that this kid would become one of, if not the best hero in all of history. A question lingered in the back of his mind. One he's had since he met the young boy. But he shook it away. That could wait a little longer. Right now it was exam time. Thank you for everything, Toshinori, Izuku said. You already had all of this in you, young Midoriya, I just helped draw it out. Toshinori's smile grew wider when he saw how Izuku stood confidently. The kid was far from small when they began training, but now he had incredible muscles. He was still very lean, too, and fast. Even without his time stop, he could easily take on villains with his power alone. He was a force to be reckoned with. Well, I probably should get to UA early, don't want to throw it all away just because I'm late. Toshinori laughed. He nodded and got into his truck, Izuku following suit. They drove off to UA, making it there with plenty of time to spare. Walking through the massive UA gate, Izuku was surprised by the sheer amount of people. He knew the test would be popular, but did this many people actually believe they could get in? Maybe that was a little harsh, but he hoped that all these people applied to other schools. Walking around the campus for a little, he felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. He looked and saw a text from Achiko. 13 Lover, hey, are you already here? Living Jojo reference, yeah, I'm near the 3rd year entrance. 13 Lover, okay, 1 second. He waited for a minute before he heard her call his name. Midoriya. He missed the sound of her voice. Hey Uraraka. It's been a minute, hasn't it? Yeah, it has. Are you ready to do this? I'm a little nervous, but I'm going to try my best. She held her fist high in the air. Izuku laughed. Well, you better get in, so we can be in the same class, he said smugly. It was Achiko's turn to laugh. Nerd, quit flirting, let's get some seats, Katsuki's voice rang out. Wasn't really flirting, but okay. Izuku turned a little red. Let's go, Uraraka. She nodded. That's Katsuki, right? Yep, childhood best friend Kaken. Shut up, Deku. Izuku and Achiko both laughed. They walked into the massive lecture hall and got ready to take the written exam. The written exam was the easiest thing Izuku and Katsuki had ever done. The same could not be said for Achiko, who was having a small breakdown about it. I so failed that, she mumbled into her hands. They were sitting in the lecture hall again, waiting for the practical exam to start. She had her legs pulled up to her chest and was covering her face. Izuku had already pulled her down twice when she accidentally floated herself. No, you didn't, I'm sure you did fine. To his credit, there were plenty of other kids around looking much worse off than her, so she probably passed. Quiet down, lovebugs, it's starting, Katsuki yelled at them. Right after he said that, Present Mike walked out onto the stage. Izuku's eyes lit up and Achiko put her hands down. Everybody say HEY, he screamed. HEY, both Katsuki and Izuku echoed. Holy crap, I gotta tell Shoyuta that some kids actually responded this year, Present Mike thought with pride. Okay, listeners, it's time for the practical part of the UA entrance exam. He went on to explain the 3 different kinds of robots that gave you points. A hand shot up. Present Mike, sir, but there are 4 different kinds of robots printed on our pamphlets. If it is a misprint, I can understand the error. However, you two in the back. Why would you disrupt the students here by yelling back to a clearly rhetorical question? Tenya called out Katsuki and Izuku. Huh, you want to come up here and fight, glasses? Katsuki shouted back. Tenya looked hurt. Calm down, listeners. Present Mike tried to calm the two down. Katsuki slammed back into his seat and Tenya followed suit. Alright, you are correct, there are 4 different robots, but the last one is worth 0 points. It is meant to symbolize a threat that goes wild in a small area. You can defeat it, but it would probably be better to leave. Now get out there and go beyond. Plus Ultra. As it turns out, Achiko and Izuku had the same battle area, while Katsuki had to go somewhere else. You both better pass, he had said when they parted ways. Standing at the gate, Izuku and Achiko both waited for the exam to start. Izuku felt a tap on his shoulder and he turned around. I must apologize for my actions earlier. I assumed that Present Mike's question at the beginning was rhetorical when that was not the case. I am very sorry for calling out and your friend out like that when I was clearly in the wrong, Tenya said very quickly, bowing the whole time. It's fine, honestly we probably did freak some people out by yelling like that, Izuku also apologized. Don't worry about it, we need to focus on the exam now. Tenya walked away leaving Izuku and Achiko to just kind of stand there. What a weird guy, they both thought in unison. Alright listeners, you ready? Present Mike didn't even need the sound system. A few yes were heard, but most people were too nervous or focused to say anything. Alright, start. As soon as Izuku heard that, he stopped time and began running. He was out in front of the pack by a good few yards when time resumed. Everyone else started running as well. People with speed quirks darted out ahead. Izuku turned down a street and a one-pointer jumped out at him. When it got close, he stopped time, punched it, resumed time, and watched as it went flying. These things are meant to be broken, that barely hurt, he thought. Izuku ran off to get more points. At the same time, Achiko was darting between robots, making them float, and releasing them when they got high enough. She was starting to feel a bit sick around the 4-minute mark, but she was feeling good about her points so far. She'd also seen Tenya, she doesn't know his name yet, though, flying around and kicking robots' heads in. Katsuki was also doing well, easily destroying every bot that came near him. Things continued to go smoothly for Izuku and Achiko until the 8-minute mark. A low rumble was a pretty good sign that something bad was going to happen. Achiko barely had time to move when one of the buildings next to her collapsed and her leg was caught underneath some rubble. Normally, she would be able to float the rubble, but she was feeling so sick at this point she knew she wouldn't be able to. The cause of all this destruction rose out of the ground soon after. The 0-pointer. Izuku saw it stand high above the skyline of the fake city. Isn't that a little overkill? He asked nobody but himself. People ran away from it like rats. But he didn't move because he saw Achiko trapped underneath some of the rubble. He ran over to her, the 0-pointer getting dangerously close, and tried to pull the rubble off. It started to work until he heard the massive robot stop and make a beeping noise. It raised up one of its fists, ready to strike. Izuku quickly moved the piece of rubble he was holding, but there was still some on Achiko's leg that kept her from moving. It threw its fist at both of them. He wouldn't let her get hurt. Izuku stopped time just as the fist was about to hit them. He screamed and started to punch the robot's massive fist, over and over and over and over. His knuckles started bleeding. He didn't know how long he had stopped time, but the instant he couldn't swing his fists anymore, it resumed. The 0-pointer's fist crumpled like tissue paper, shock waves flowing up its arm and ripping it to pieces as well. The massive robot fell backwards and collapsed. Izuku also collapsed, not because he was too tired to stand, but because his whole body seized up. He could barely move, much less balance himself. Achiko was close enough that she was able to touch him and make him float, so he didn't have to deal with a broken nose, too. She threw up, but was able to wiggle her way out eventually. That's time. Present Mike's voice boomed. Recovery Girl was soon out healing people. She found Achiko trying to sit Izuku up. Her leg was preventing her from doing it effectively. My, you sure hurt yourself with your quirk. She planted a kiss on both of them. Izuku was able to move again and Achiko's leg felt much better. They both stood up and began walking back to the entrance. Man, that was tough, that 0-pointer almost got us, Izuku tried to lighten the mood. Yeah it did, but you were awesome. You completely blew it away. Achiko mimicked a punch. Well, the collapsing part wasn't very awesome, but at least now I know what happens if I push myself too far. They both made it to the entrance and were greeted by Katsuki. The hell happened to you guys? He asked. Long story, let's talk and walk, Izuku replied. As they walked around UA towards the gate, he told Katsuki what happened. You did what? You heard him, he completely destroyed that zero-pointer, Ochako cheered. Izuku scratched his head nervously. That thing was massive. How'd you take it down like that? Well, I kind of went too far with my time stop, ended up mostly paralyzed afterwards. Gonna have to talk with Toshinori about that. Well, just don't go doing that in a fight, Deku, 'cause I'm not saving you, but if you do. Izuku laughed. Don't worry, I'll be fine. By the way, when are both of you free next? Izuku changed the topic to something he wouldn't get yelled at or embarrassed over. I'm free most of next week now that this is over, Ochako replied. Same here, Katsuki said. We should definitely all hang out sometime then. Yeah. Sure, whatever. They reached the gate and went their separate ways. They would hang out next week and get something to eat. Izuku got back into Toshinori's truck, who was nice enough to come and pick him up, and completely collapsed out of exhaustion. They agreed to meet up after school that day. Toshinori had informed Izuku that he was going to be away for a while, so there wouldn't be any training. Katsuki and Izuku walked together from school towards the park where they all planned to meet. Ochako got out of her school around the same time, but she had farther to travel. So, Izuku and Katsuki found a bench to chill on and waited. It was only a few minutes later when they heard her call out to them. They both got up and walked over. Hey Uraraka. Sup, round face. Ochiko's eyes widened. What is that nickname? She asked. Oh, don't mind him, Izuku replied, he gives nicknames to everyone he's friends with. He gave Katsuki a tap with his elbow on his side. Surprisingly though, Katsuki only looked at him, no retaliation. Shitty Deku, he mumbled under his breath and began walking away. Izuku and Ochako laughed and ran to catch up with him. They walked around a little bit, talking about the school day, and soon found the restaurant they would be eating at. It was a little early, but they would get their food fast. Izuku found a booth to sit in and they all went over. Katsuki threw himself onto one side and put his feet up so no one would be able to sit next to him. This forced Izuku and Ochako to sit on the same side, both blushing a little bit when they did. Katsuki laughed to himself. They all ordered, Izuku getting katsudon, Ochako getting mochi, and Katsuki getting the hottest thing mixed with the hottest sauce that the place had. Izuku decided to try a piece and instantly regretted it when his whole mouth practically lit on fire. He ran off to the bathroom for a few minutes while Katsuki laughed his butt off at his friend's pain. Ochako felt bad but couldn't help laughing a little, too. On his way back, Izuku grabbed and paid for another bag of mochi. He secretly slipped it into Ochiko's bag when she wasn't looking. Katsuki may have noticed, but didn't mention it. They all finished their meals and realized that they hadn't decided how to pay. This instantly broke out into an argument with Izuku trying to pay for all of it, Katsuki trying to split it. Between Izuku and Ochako trying to just split it evenly. Ochako eventually won out and they paid. Walking out, they decided to go to Dagoba Beach and walk around some more. Ah, I forgot, the hag wanted me to do some sheet today, Katsuki said as they walked. He quickly split ways, but not before giving Izuku an elbow to the side and a wink. Well, that's random, Ochako said. Katsuki gave them no time to even question what he had to do. Oh well, his loss. Izuku turned around and started walking again. They eventually made it to Dagoba Beach and sat down for a moment. Hey Midoriya, I have a question. Shoot. Why does Bakugo call you Deku? Is it just another nickname? Ochako asked, curiously. Ah well, it was actually an old insult from when we were kids. He said it meant a person who couldn't do anything. But now, it's more just him messing with me, since my quirk makes me anything but useless. Izuku was surprised how easily he spilled all of that. Oh, I thought that it might have been a play on Dikairu, like, you can do it. Huh, I never really thought of it like that. It also sounds kind of cute, Ochako mumbled. Izuku heard it, but to avoid turning into a tomato he decided to ignore it. Well, you can call me Deku if you want. He smiled at her. She smiled back. Okay Deku, she beamed at him. They got up and started to walk down the now clean beach. She was so surprised that he had cleaned all of this. It was a couple of hours later by the time they felt like they should go home. Saying their goodbyes they parted ways. A week later and 2 weeks after the entrance exams, there was a knock at Midoriya's door. Inko walked over and opened it. She was surprised to see Toshinori standing there with a letter in his hand. I have some good news for young Midoriya, he said with a smile. Inko let him in and called out to Izuku that his trainer was here with something for him. It had been since the entrance exam that they had talked. But Toshinori just told Izuku to take the letter into his room and open it. Confused, but not one to argue with the number one hero, he did just that. He found that it contained a small, metal disc inside. He knew exactly what this was. He placed it down and sure enough, a large hologram of UA's logo appeared. And so did All Might? I am here in the form of a projection, his voice echoed through Izuku's room. He rolled his eyes but was confused as to what his mentor was doing on his UA exam results. Young Midoriya, I am sorry that I haven't been able to contact you, but that is for good reason. I am going to be working here at UA. What? Izuku couldn't help but yell at the projection. All Might was going to be one of his teachers? But, there is something even more important to tell you. Your exam results. A video popped up showing Izuku teleporting around and smashing robots. Young Midoriya, you easily passed the written part of the exam. I'm sure you had no doubt about that. But your practical exam was even more amazing. The video then showed Izuku simply staring at the zero-pointer. Then, its whole arm ripped open and it fell over along with Izuku. Holy shit. Izuku muttered. Katsuki sneezed. You got 43 villain points, that alone was already enough to pass the exam. However, there was a second way to earn points as well. Rescue points, flashed on the screen in bright, bold text. You earned 55 of these as well, thanks to your amazing performance against that zero-pointer, saving that young girl. A scoreboard showed the top 36 students. Izuku was number, now come, young Midoriya, this is your hero academia. Izuku jumped up, ran out of his room, and pulled both his mom and Toshinori into a hug. He told them he passed. The Midoriyas started crying and Toshinori felt the most proud he's ever been. The massive gate of UA was still just as impressive as the first time Izuku had seen it. I'm going to be walking through here every day for the next 3 years, he thought to himself in amazement. Katsuki was stoked as well, but he hid it behind his normal angry face. They had met up before coming to school, it used to be a tradition in middle school. But over the last year, Izuku ended up going to school a lot later since he would see Toshinori some mornings. But now, they could walk to school together again. Katsuki would never admit it, but he enjoyed just walking with Izuku. It helped him slow down and relax a little. He wasn't very relaxed today though, it was the first day of high school, the first day of UA, the first day on his true path to becoming the best hero. They walked down the halls and saw so many other people. Most were first years like themselves, but some second and third years were there, too. They greeted the greenies and helped with directions. Katsuki and Izuku eventually found their room. Class 1A. The door was massive. Walking in, they were instantly rushed by someone. It was the guy with glasses from the entrance exam. He bowed in front of them. Excuse me, I must again apologize to you Dash. Get out of our way glasses, Katsuki yelled, although he tried to keep his voice and language in check. Tenya looked frustrated. Chill out Katsuki, he was literally apologizing. Let him speak, Izuku tried to calm his friend down. A signature, TCH, was all the boy gave. I must again apologize to you both for my actions during the entrance exam. It was extremely uncalled for to call you out in that manner. Tenya's viscous hand waving only made the situation even weirder. Sure, just get out of my way, Katsuki said as he pushed past him. Don't mind Katsuki, he can be a massive beach sometimes, my name's Izuku Midoriya. He held his hand out in front of him. Hello Midoriya, I am Tenya Ida, I hope you, Katsuki, and I can start off on a better foot now that we are classmates. Call me Bakugu, not Katsuki. That scream rattled nearly everyone in the room. Oh yeah, Katsuki is his first name. We're just good friends, so I call him that. Izuku rubbed the back of his head out of embarrassment for not correcting his friend's name. I must apologize for that misunderstanding, thank you Midoriya. Tenya was already across the room trying in vain to talk to Katsuki by the time Izuku tried to respond. He began walking towards his seat, but was stopped again when he heard a very familiar voice behind him. Hey Deku, Ochiko said. Music to his ears. Hey Uraraka. I'm so glad we both got in the same class. Yeah, it's Gria Dash. Izuku noticed something just behind Ochiko, who was still in the doorway slightly. Some weird yellow caterpillar man had slithered in behind her. What the, he mumbled. Ochiko also turned around and started to freak out a little. Hello, welcome to UA's hero course, it said while taking a pouch of something out and drinking from it. What is that thing? Both Izuku and Ochiko thought at the same time. It stood up and unzipped its, oh, that's a sleeping bag, that made a lot more sense. It took you 6 seconds to notice me, not bad, not good. I'll keep my eye on you. Now, get to your seats before I expel you. Izuku teleported towards his seat, scaring a few people with the loud buzz. Ochiko tried to quickly get to hers, but only succeeded in ramming a guy with sparkling hair's desk. She apologized and got to her seat a little slower. "Welcome to Class 1A, I'm your teacher, Mr. Izawa. Put these on," he held up a gym uniform, "and go to the track outside. You have 10 minutes or you're expelled." Mr. Izawa? Don't we have orientation or something to go to on the first day?" Achiko questioned. "I'm skipping that in favor of a surprise assessment of your individual abilities. You have 8 minutes now." Izuku instantly sprung up and teleported towards the door, beating nearly everyone out. He had only been in the classroom for a few minutes, he didn't even know how many people were in his class, let alone their names. "That's UA for you, never a dull moment," he thought as he ran towards the lockers to change. He got there first, a combination of teleporting and his incredible straight-line speed helping him. Tenya was second, with Katsuki not too far behind. They all started to change. Izuku noticed that one boy, who was the last one to enter, was checking out the walls instead of changing. The boy stopped and a creepy smile appeared on his face. "Hey guys, check this out," he said. A few people, not including Izuku, went over, but he still heard what the short guy was saying. "I noticed how close the girls' and boys' locker rooms were, so I started looking a little bit and bingo, a peephole." This made Izuku pay a lot more attention. Tenya also heard this and started walking over, yelling about how this was wrong and demeaning to the girls. Izuku teleported over, menacingly standing over the boy. He didn't seem to care or even notice. The boy suddenly started to name off all of the girls. How did he even know their names already? Describing their physical attributes at the same time. He was already on the edge, but hearing Achiko's name made him snap. "Ahhhhh!" screamed Kyoka, who had been listening through the wall. The rest of the girls looked up. The whole wall shook from whatever happened on the other side. I hope that was the pervert getting what he deserved. Back with the boys, everyone was looking between Izuku and the short boy. When he snapped, Izuku had stopped time and punched him with everything he had. This had sent him flying into the wall, leaving his silhouette indented into the wall. "Do not mess with the broccoli boy," everyone thought at the same time. Minoru went to the nurses. When Izuku got outside, still fuming, he told Mr. Izawa what had happened. He expected to be punished, but to his surprise, his teacher just told him to not do it again and walked over to the front of the group. "As I said before, you will all be taking a standard physical exam, but this time you will be able to use your quirks. It is entirely irrational to prevent future heroes from using a part of themselves in an exam that aims to test the limits of their physical capabilities." He said all of this with the most tired, yet stern voice Izuku had ever heard. "Midoriya," he threw a ball at the student who caught it. "You scored highest on the entrance exam. What was your highest ball throw in junior high?" "Around 58 meters. Try now but with your quirk." Izuku nodded. He stepped into the circle. He'd thought about how to do these tests with his quirk before. With the ball throw, he decided stopping time and just throwing the ball would be fine. When time starts again, the ball gains all of the momentum in an instant, causing it to go much further than normal. Izuku reared his arm back and stopped time just as he began his throw. The ball traveled a short distance after he let go. Time resumed and the ball went flying. A small but noticeable gust from his throw rippled through the crowd. This is the way UA builds the best foundation for its students. Mr. Izawa held up the distance tracker. 363.5 meters. "Whoa, that's incredible," a boy with yellow hair yelled. "This is going to be so much fun," a girl with pink skin also yelled. "Fun, you say?" Mr. Izawa's mood instantly darkened. The air became so tense that Izuku had to check and make sure he wasn't in stop time. "Alright, let's make this fun. The person who comes in last after all 8 tests will be punished with expulsion." He had a smile that oozed SDSM. "What?" a good half of the students yelled. "That's not fair at all, we all worked so hard to get here, you can't just send one of yous home already," Achiko said. "You know what also isn't fair? Natural disasters. Villain attacks. People lose their lives from the world not being fair. To be a true hero, you have to overcome that unfairness. UA will keep throwing obstacles at you until you become true heroes. Go beyond, plus ultra. Overcome it with everything you've got." Everyone collectively gulped and Minoru, who had just come back in time to hear Mr. Izawa's speech, almost said himself. The test started with a 50-meter dash. Tenya easily beat everyone out with a 2.98, his quirk was very suited for running fast. Katsuki wasn't too far behind with a 3.76 by using explosions to propel himself. Izuku was able to get close with a 5.14, landing him in the top 5 by stopping time and running forward as much as possible. Achiko tried to lighten her clothes, but her physical strength was lacking, giving her a 7. Grip strength was next. Izuku stopped time and punched either side before gripping it again. He got 306 kilograms. Mizo was a standout. Using his dupli arms he almost crushed the device with 593 kilograms. Neither Tenya, Ochako, or Katsuki was able to do much with their quirk. Katsuki tried to create an explosion, but only succeeded in destroying the device and got a warning from Mr. Aizawa. All of them got below 100 kilograms. The standing long jump was an interesting test. Katsuki and Yuga both shot themselves out far beyond the box. Ochako made herself weightless, but didn't get too far out before having to stop. Tenya and Tsuyu both were able to jump pretty far but landed in the sand. Izuku decided to cheat a little. He stopped time and ran forward before jumping. He still landed in the sand, but it wasn't a terrible result. Repeated side steps was the only test where the pervert didn't do poorly. By bouncing himself back and forth off his ball he got a pretty good score. Katsuki used explosions to help himself. Tenya was able to go a little faster, but he barely had any time to accelerate. Ochako and Izuku had to rely mostly on their physical strength, only being able to use their quirks a little to help. Ochako made her clothes lighter again and Izuku teleported every time he could. Izuku's time stop, when activated, wouldn't allow him to start time back up manually, so he was forced to be in stop time for a quarter of a second every time. Only when his heroic boost kicked in could he stop it himself. Now it was the ball throw again. Izuku decided to try something different. Instead of just throwing the ball in stop time, he punched it as hard as he could. This launched the ball farther surprisingly, giving him 408.3 m. Tenya kicked the ball 239.8 m. Momo shot the ball 1207.3 m with a cannon. Katsuki added an explosion to his pitch and got 726.4 m. Ochako was by far the best. Infinitely better actually, since she removed the ball's gravity and threw it into space, getting a score of literally infinity. Next test, sit-ups. Katsuki used explosions to push himself up and down, almost killing his partner. Izuku, Ochako, and Tenya all had to rely mostly on their physical abilities yet again. Their quirks only giving them small boosts. Fumikage was able to use Dark Shadow to push and pull himself quite effectively. The seated toe touch was the most balanced of all the tests. Mizo extended his arm pretty far and Kyoka tried to convince Mr. Aizawa that her earphone jack counted, but was overruled. The last test was the long-distance run. Tenya, ever the speedster, came in first followed by Momo on a bike. Katsuki and Shoto were close, but Katsuki ultimately won out. Izuku did the same thing as he did in the 50-meter dash. Everyone was out of breath by the end. Of course Mr. Aizawa would leave, arguably the hardest test for last. Izuku wasn't very worried about his score. Neither was Tenya or Katsuki. Ochako though, much like the entrance exam, was another story. Izuku and Tenya tried to calm her down. She had gotten a score of infinity, how could she fail? A few other people were freaking out a little too, but none were as bad as Minoru. He had bombed every test besides the side steps. And sure enough, when the scores were shown he was dead last. I haven't even gotten to touch Yaoyorozu's melons yet, he cried as he collapsed to the ground, sobbing. Mr. Aizawa's face changed from one of slight happiness to a much darker one. Alright Mineta, come with me to pack your things. Minoru continued to sob as he walked away. He mumbled stuff about girls not liking him now and wanting to be cool. The students were left in a state of relief and pity. Not a lot of pity, but a little. I honestly thought that he was bluffing, Momo said, slightly in shock. Mr. Aizawa does have a history of expelling students, Izuku said. He expelled a whole class last year. This earned him a lot of shocked faces. They could be expelled whenever their teacher felt like it. This class was going to be hell. Mr. Aizawa eventually returned. To tell you all the truth, I wasn't expecting to expel anyone, you all showed good potential for future heroes. Now everyone was even more shocked. Their teacher continued, Mineta isn't fully expelled though, he's going to be transferred to general studies and given some extra lessons on how to treat his peers. The only reason I expelled him was the fact that he was being nasty towards the women and I won't let that happen in my class. Maybe our teacher isn't so bad after all, everyone thought together. Now go back inside and change before you get transferred, too. The class ran back inside. Man, what a rush for the first day, Izuku said. He walked home with his friends. UA has never and will never be a school to waste anyone's time, we can only assume that it'll get even more difficult from here on out. Tenya chopped the air while saying this. Katsuki always became visibly agitated anytime Tenya spoke for more than a few words. I don't know if I can take any more big scares like that, Ochako quietly said. What are you talking about, round face? You have a great quirk, don't go dogging yourself or I'll have to slap some sense into ya. Katsuki smiled intensely. Ochako wanted to disappear. Katsuki laughed at her reaction. He means it, both that you're going to be an amazing hero and that he'll beat you up, Izuku laughed. With Katsuki. Just don't be so hard on yourself, Uraraka, Izuku offered an honest smile. Achiko couldn't not smile back. Her friend was just so amazing and see you, no not that. Achiko and Tenya eventually split, saying their goodbyes. Katsuki and Izuku made their way back home. So, you really do like round face, huh? Izuku instantly turned red. What? I don't know what you're talking about, Katsuki. We're just really good friends. Oh please, he barely kept himself from laughing his butt off. She's the only girl you ever get flustered around. If it makes you feel better, she definitely likes you back. Don't make assumptions about people. The poor boy couldn't even look his friend in the eye anymore. I don't know how I feel yet, so don't push me or I might actually beat your butt into the ground next time we spar. This actually caused Katsuki to burst out laughing. Okay, whatever you say, Deku. Just don't let her get away from you. Katsuki safely retreated away from Izuku, who was now steaming both from embarrassment and anger. He slowly regained control of his emotions. I'm going to give him so much shit when he likes someone, he decided. If Class 1A thought that their first day was rough, they were in for a rude awakening. The first half of the day was pretty boring. No one liked normal classes. They were all waiting for their last class, Foundational Heroics. They had no idea what they would be doing, but it had heroics in the name, so it must be cool. When the time came, they all sat with nervous anticipation. Most of them whispered quietly, too nervous to talk any louder. They all stopped though, when a rumbling outside in the hallway caught their attention. I am coming through the door like a normal person. All Might shouted. His pose was not that of a normal person. Izuku's face lit up. He had already known that he would be the teacher for this class, but that didn't make him any less excited. Whoa, our heroics teacher is going to be All Might? Denki asked. That question earned him a stab in the side from Kyoka. Oh course, do you even look at your schedule, dumbass? Denki pouted for a second before All Might got their attention again. Yes, young Kaminari, I am your foundational heroics teacher. In this class you will learn about the foundations of being a great hero. He said the same thing twice, everyone thought. Now, let's see what we will be doing today, All Might said as he reached below his desk. He pulled up a sign that said, Battle. Today you all will be split into pairs for combat training. We're gonna be fighting each other on the second day of school? Toru asked. Finally, I can put you extras in the ground where you belong. Katsuki yelled. We'll see about that, Shoto mumbled. But of course, a hero isn't complete without their equipment. Take the case with your seat number and head to ground beta. 20 cases popped out of the wall after All Might finished. Izuku's suit was made for practicality. It was a sleek dark green tracksuit for the base, his red sneakers, a utility belt that held multiple small weights he could throw, and a respirator. He had originally wanted knives to be included, but something about giving children deadly weapons made him change it to the weights. It also had knee and elbow pads shaped like hearts. He was required to deny that it had anything to do with a specific series for copyright reasons. He walked out onto the training ground right in the middle of the pack. Katsuki was already there. He had his grenade gauntlets. Izuku wondered if they were actually made the way Katsuki wanted them. Tenya had a suit of armor that reminded Izuku of a certain hero, but he couldn't pin them down. He also noticed another student that he didn't recognize. Messy purple hair and a very lean frame was all he could see standing behind him. Izuku started to walk towards the boy, but a voice from behind him got his attention. Wow, your costume looks amazing, Deku, Achiko said. Izuku turned to look at her, but decided that looking at her might be a bad idea right now. I should have been more specific with what I wanted, this suit is skin tight. She scratched the back of her head. Izuku was trying his hardest to not catch fire. Well, since you want to become a support hero, it would make sense that why your costume would be tight. It prevents you from getting caught on debris, Izuku stammered. He was angry at himself for being that obvious with his crush. Katsuki, who had been listening, stifled a laugh. I never thought of it that way, thanks Deku. She smiled at him brightly. Izuku was still trying to not melt, but he smiled back. You're welcome, Uraraka. They walked over to the group. All Might wasn't there yet, so everyone just talked about their new costumes. They had been imagining them for a long time and now they were wearing them. After a few minutes, their teacher came soaring in. He landed in heroic fashion and began to address the class. Sorry for taking so long, class, I was busy creating the teams for the exercise. Wait, we aren't going to be able to choose our partners? Denki asked. He got another stab in the side from Kyoka and Tenya dragged him away and began lecturing him about respect and to never interrupt the teacher. Denki was confused since that was exactly what Tenya was doing right now. All Might just kind of stood there, his smile wavering a little bit due to the awkwardness. When Tenya was done, he dragged Denki back over and asked the teacher to continue. Well, yes, young Kaminari, you won't be choosing your partners for this exercise. You will be split into teams of 2 and given the designation of hero or villain. Depending on your role, you will either be tasked with defending or attacking. There will be 5 matches in total. All Might didn't say anything for a little too long and the class erupted with questions. Will the heroes be attacking or defending? Why can't we choose our partners? What are the pairings? Who's the new kid? Doesn't this cape make me look fabulous? All Might let out a strained yell. I will answer all of your questions, he said as he got out a script. The hero team will be tasked with infiltrating and capturing a nuclear device located in a building. They will have a rough layout, but not an exact one. The villains will be tasked with defending said nuclear device and will have an exact layout of the building. There will be a 5-minute preparation phase where villains can move the device and heroes can plan their attack. Opponents can be captured by wrapping this capture tape around them. All Might held up what looked like packing tape. The heroes will win by either capturing all of the villains or touching the device. Villains will win by capturing all of the heroes or letting the clock run down to 0. Each battle will last 20 minutes. All Might looked out at the class and saw that most of them were lost in thought, trying to figure out what was going on. Dang it, I thought I explained that well. Well, what are the matches? Izuku asked. Right. The matches are as follows. Achiko Uraraka and Shoto Todoroki vs Tenya Ida and Katsuki Bakugu. Hitoshi Shinso and Fumikage Tokoyami vs Momo Yaoyorozu and Izuku Midoriya. Denki Kaminari and Kyokujiro vs Mina Ashido and Hanta Siro. Koji Koda and Yuga Aoyama vs Mashareo Ojiro and Toru Hagakure. Tsuyu Azui and Mizo Shoji vs Rikido Sato and Eijiro Kirishima. Heroes first, villains second. And the new kid is from General Studies. His name is Hitoshi Shinso. You'll see quite a few people from other courses trying out for the hero course. When All Might was done explaining everything, most of the class understood what was going on. Achiko and Shoto began walking towards the front of their building while Katsuki and Tenya walked into it. The villain team went up to the top floor and the bomb was already there. I don't think that there is a better place for this thing, Katsuki commented. I agree, the top floor gives us the most time to defend against incoming attacks, Tenya said. I'm going to be a few floors down and fight them. You should stay here, though, and defend. We do have to worry about flanks from Uraraka as her quirk would let her get in through a window, but why do you want to rush Todoroki? If we let him get too close to the bomb he can just freeze us in place and touch it. I can take him on if I have some room to dodge. Tenya nodded and Katsuki began to head down to a more open room. The heroes were planning just as hard. I'll just freeze them all in place and get the bomb, you can stay out here if you want. What? Are you forgetting that Bakugu could just blast his way out? Also, I'm not staying outside, I'm coming in and fighting. Achiko was very hurt by Shoto's statement. Did he think she was useless? She wasn't, she would fight and win. That is a fair point, but I can just freeze him again. Achiko was getting angry with how lazily her partner was taking the exercise. You should never underestimate Katsuki. That is a horrible plan. Okay, since you are coming in, you can tie him up with the tape so he can't break out. I'm going to fight, but sure I'll do that, too. After the 5-minute prep phase was up, the heroes entered the building on the second story, using Achiko's quirk to get in through a window. Katsuki lurked on the third story and heard them start to come up the stairs. He ready to blast. The heroes walked up the stairs and turned the corner, Shoto in front. Katsuki almost took his head off with a surprise blast. Shoto instinctively raised an ice barrier to protect himself. Katsuki wasn't going to let up however, he used the explosion to get behind Shoto and blasted him in the back. Shoto fell onto his stomach, but still fired a glacier at Katsuki who avoided it. Achiko couldn't react fast enough to help. She saw Katsuki turn to look at her and she got into a fighting stance. While Shoto was trapped, he took this time to take out his partner. He blasted off at her so fast that she could barely react. Katsuki sent her flying into a wall with an explosion. Izuku decided to go a little overboard in their sparring session later in the week. Shoto got up and saw that Achiko had been knocked out. Katsuki tried to get the capture tape on her, but Shoto forced him to back off with a wall of ice. Katsuki decided to focus on beating Shoto, seeing that Achiko couldn't get back up for the time being. Katsuki fired himself at his opponent who formed an ice wall in front of him. He blasted through that, but he wasn't ready for Shoto to fire another blast of ice right behind it. He maneuvered to avoid it. Shoto fired another blast of ice and another and another. Katsuki was forced onto the defensive, destroying them as fast as he could. He was looking for an opening, but didn't see one for some time. He did notice that Shoto's speed was starting to drop. He had started to ice over. Katsuki decided to continue to be on the defensive for now and wait until he was worn out. Achiko struggled to her feet. She was angry at herself for being unable to defend herself. Why did she always need someone else to fight for her? She was a hero. If she couldn't even defend herself, she couldn't defend other people. Pushing herself, she ran towards Katsuki, who was busy fending off another ice blast. He saw her and tried to blast her away again, but Shoto covered for her by putting up an ice wall. Katsuki made the mistake of blasting through it. This gave Achiko a path straight towards him. She was able to touch him, making him lose his gravity. Shoto fired another ice blast at the now disoriented villain. Unsure if he would survive, Katsuki decided to go for broke. He pulled on the pin of one of his gauntlets. All Might yelled through his earpiece. "Young Bakugo, don't use that weapon in the building. It could call lapdash." Katsuki barely even heard him. Over the roar of fire that came out of his gauntlet, Shoto's attack absorbed most of the blast, turning the ice into water and steam. Achiko was flung away by the shockwave and landed hard on the ground. She was forced to release Katsuki from her quirk as she was about to throw up. The attack actually helped Shoto. Sure, he was burned, but now he wasn't iced over. Katsuki was shot upwards, but he was able to keep himself away from any walls by using more explosions. His gravity returning did throw him off balance for a second, and that second was all the newly de-iced Shoto needed. He decided to just go all out, much like Katsuki just did, and just end the fight. The villain barely even saw what hit him. A wave of ice that froze the water and steam in the air and on the ground shot towards him. He was instantly encased in ice. Wasting no time, Shoto slid towards his opponent and wrapped the capture tape around him. Katsuki Bakugo of the villain team has been captured, All Might said with some struggle. He couldn't believe that these students were capable of this power at such a young age. Achiko was also partially frozen, but could mostly move. Shoto apologized and melted the ice. Katsuki was in a slight amount of shock from losing. He was used to it, he sparred with someone who could stop time after all. But that was the thing, he only ever lost to someone who could bend a fundamental of reality. He would have been fine with losing to Achiko, since she also technically bent reality by removing someone's gravity. Never did he lose to anyone with a quirk as lame as making things cold or hot. And he didn't even bother making things hot. He had lost to someone using only half their powers. He would need time to process everything. Thankfully, he would have plenty of time, as the heroes ran up the stairs towards the device they were supposed to capture. Tenya had heard all of the fighting, but when he tried to contact his partner after he heard an especially massive explosion, he got no answer. Instead, he heard that his Katsuki had been captured. He realized that he would have to face both Achiko and Shoto at the same time. It wouldn't be easy, so he decided to play a little dirty. When the heroes inevitably found the room with the bomb, they entered carefully. Tenya sat in a corner behind a few assorted objects that hid him from their view. When Achiko and Shoto got far enough into the room, he sprung out. Achiko, once again, barely reacted. Tenya kicked her, sending her flying for the third time. He also used her to change direction and sent a roundhouse and Shoto. He got an ice wall up, but it just dampened the hit. He was also sent crashing to the ground. Tenya got ready for a follow-up kick, but he couldn't move his leg. He looked down and saw that it was covered in ice. "Shouldn't touch me on my right side," Shoto said emotionlessly. He froze the rest of Tenya up and went over to touch the bomb. Achiko couldn't get up this time. Not because she physically couldn't, but because she emotionally couldn't. She was useless, again. Hero team wins. All Might cheered through everyone's earpieces. She didn't hear it. Shoto helped her up and walked her out of the building. After a quick examination, she was deemed well enough to watch the rest of the fights. Izuku tried to talk to her. Tenya tried to talk to her. Even Katsuki and Shoto tried to talk to her. She didn't respond. She couldn't hear them over her own thoughts. Why am I a burden? Why can't I do anything? Should I even be a hero if I am the one that has to be saved? Izuku was the most adamant about trying to talk to her, but his match was next. After a quick review of the previous match, which gave Shoto the MVP, he walked towards his building with Momo. He still thought about the dead look in her eyes, even when they got inside and started to prepare their defense. "Hey Midoriya, help me put these metal bars on the door," Momo asked. Izuku shook himself out of his head and went over to help. Help, he thought. A hero should be able to help someone in need. Both of his best friends were suffering and he couldn't help them. Well, he knew that Katsuki would just need space right now, but Achiko was a completely different person. He didn't know what he should do. Leave her alone? Try and break her out of her head? He laid the last metal bar on the door with a clank and went back over to the center of the room to try and clear his head. Another thing a hero was supposed to be able to do was not let previous experiences negatively affect his current battle. He should leave these thoughts until after everything was done. Izuku walked back over to Momo, who was busy making some more metal bars. She looked up at him. "We know that Tokoyami's quirk is Dark Shadow, but we don't know Shinso's quirk yet," she said. Her voice was weaker compared to when she suggested using metal bars to reinforce the doors. "We should focus on countering Dark Shadow for now. Shinso's quirk we can work out during the battle," Izuku replied. Momo nodded pensively. Something was obviously different about her, he noted. She almost seemed to lack confidence, even though she was top of the class in their quirk assessment. He knew that wasn't a total reflection on someone's abilities, but everything about her screamed amazing to him. Her quirk and abilities were incredible from what he'd seen. So her being nervous right now made very little sense. Their time was almost up. Izuku stacked more metal bars on the last door. Their plan was simple defense that utilized Momo's quirk for barricading the room. A few other doors on the top floor were also barricaded as decoys. They were both close-range fighters. Izuku's range was limited and Momo was very proficient with a metal staff. Defending in a close room was their best option. They had also put sensors all around the building, so they should know where the heroes were at any given time. If she'd hit the fan, Izuku could easily keep anyone away from the bomb. However, he didn't know if the heroes would win if Dark Shadow touched the bomb. That quirk was powerful and needed to be dealt with quickly. But how would you fight a shadow? Yaoyorozu, I have an idea. A last-minute addition to their plan was some flashbangs. If Dark Shadow was weak to bright light, those would do the trick. Izuku debated with himself about asking Momo to make some knives. He wanted them with his costume originally and was pretty good at throwing them. He decided that she would probably say no. She could have made a gun instead of a staff and shot the heroes, so he guessed that she didn't want to make anything that could permanently harm anyone. Izuku didn't know if he could control himself if he was a walking illegal weapons factory like her. The 5-minute preparation phase is up. Heroes, begin your assault. All Might yelled through their earpieces. The villains had no idea what kind of fight they would have. Hitoshi's quirk was too much of a wildcard. Fumicage's quirk could be used at long or close range depending on the circumstance. He seemed to prefer long range though. Momo's tracker pinged. The heroes had tripped one of the sensors on the first floor. Izuku wanted to head down and meet them halfway, but Katsuki's attempt at that strategy made him think twice. Once again, Hitoshi's quirk being unknown was too unpredictable. The pings from the sensors made their way up to the second story, then the third story. This building, unlike the first one, only had 4 floors. Sometimes, they would split up or a third sensor would ping at the same time. Dark Shadow seemed to trigger the sensors. The villains couldn't really identify any strategy from their opponents' movements. The heroes didn't seem to know that they were being tracked, though. The sensor at the top of the 4th floor stairs pinged. The heroes were here. They could hear footsteps and doors being opened outside. They must have tried to open a barricaded door this time, since Izuku and Momo heard one of them yell something. Suddenly, the building shook. Momo and Izuku were both thrown off balance. They heard more shouting from outside, but still couldn't figure out who it was or what they were saying. The shaking continued for a little bit longer, but subsided. It sounded and felt like a portion of the building was destroyed. Katsuki and Achiko's match had given them a taste of that with the final massive explosion the enraged blonde had let loose. Izuku asked Momo to make a floodlight in case the lights went out. While she was making that, the hero team continued to try doors and eventually only had a couple left. Momo finished making and setting up the floodlight when someone hit the door. Since it was a lot more reinforced compared to the decoy, the door didn't move. They doubt that it could stop whatever shook the whole building early, though. This time they could hear the yelling much clearer. Hitoshi yelled that the door was locked. Izuku wanted to yell back, but that could give away their positioning in the room. That wouldn't matter very much though, as the whole wall, not just the door, the whole wall exploded. The lights overhead shattered and both villains were forced to take cover as dust covered the room. Izuku stopped time and peeked up to make sure they weren't blitzing in. Sure enough, they weren't. He did see a massive shadowy arm and red eyes and assumed they belonged to a powered-up Dark Shadow. When time resumed he heard more crashing as Dark Shadow ripped the area around the wall up, too. Hitoshi yelled something again and it all stopped in an instant. Izuku and Momo both came out of cover and saw that most of the floor had been opened up into one room. However, they could barely see anything beyond where the wall used to be. Yaoyorozu, turn on the floodlight, Izuku asked. Momo nodded and ran over to it. She dusted it off and turned it on. Now that they could see, they looked at the destruction in front of them. A few supporting pillars still stood, but other than that only piles of rubble that used to be walls laid around. There was no sign of Fumikage or Hitoshi. Izuku prepped a flashbang in case one of them tried something. A bonus of the floodlight was that it made it next to impossible to see into the room. Momo had made an incredibly bright one. That should slow down any rush into the room that the heroes might have planned. They wouldn't have to wait long as a section of the wall on the right blew open and Dark Shadow, now a normal size with yellow eyes, came flying in. The floodlight slowed it down enough that Momo was able to land a hit. It lacked power compared to what Izuku had seen she was capable of, but it did the trick. The villains changed cover. Izuku ran closer to the destroyed wall and crouched next to a large piece of rubble that hid his whole body. Momo moved towards the bomb and floodlight. She turned it so that it pointed at the new opening. Stopping time again, Izuku peeked around the newly illuminated corner. He saw a shadowy trail that he knew connected Dark Shadow to Fumikage. It was snaking close to the ground and seemed to be headed for the other half of the wall. Time resumed as Izuku crouched back down and figured out what was going on. Fumikage was going to use Dark Shadow to scout ahead and try to disable any tools they had. Hitoshi must have a more support-based quirk since he hadn't tried to fight yet. Izuku also realized why Dark Shadow seemed to be going to the other side of the wall. "Yaoyorozu, watch out for the wall," he yelled to his partner. She looked up just as the wall busted open. She was able to avoid any rubble, but the floodlight was less lucky. Some of the debris hit it and shattered the bulb. Dark Shadow entered the dark room with his eyes turning red, but he quickly disappeared back into the hole. Izuku jumped up and threw a flashbang at where he'd seen the trail come from. He heard one of the heroes yelp as it went off. He jumped back up and looked around, his eyes struggling to adjust to the darkness. He saw what he thought was movement and stopped time. Staying at range like they were did keep them safe from Izuku's punches and kicks, but it didn't keep them safe from objects he threw. He pulled out one of his weights and threw it at the movement. Time resumed and it went flying with bang when it hit a wall. He kept looking as Momo debated with herself about making another floodlight. She was running low on lipids, but light seemed to weaken Dark Shadow. She didn't know what to do. Izuku shook her from her thoughts. "Yaoyorozu, watch out," he called out to her. She looked up and saw red eyes approaching. Thinking quickly, she threw a flashbang and ducked into cover. Dark Shadow hissed and retreated at the bright flash. The flash also illuminated enough of the area for Izuku to see where he was coming from. He stooped time once more and threw another weight. It went straight through the pillar that Fumikage and Hitoshi were hiding behind and hit one of them hard in the side. With a cry they were sent sprawling to the ground. Izuku saw Hitoshi take off running towards the less damaged area of the building. So he'd hit Fumikage. He attempted to throw a weight but it didn't have enough momentum to reach that far since he couldn't stop time yet. He ran towards the downed Fumikage with a flashbang in one hand and the capture tape in the other. When he reached his opponent he saw that he had effectively surrendered, putting his hands in the air. "I understand that this is just a training exercise and I don't want to risk hurting you in this consuming darkness," he said cryptically. Izuku wrapped his hands up in the capture tape just as Momo ran over. "Hey, thanks for the flashbang Yaoyorozu," Izuku said with a smile and thumbs up. All Might called out over the radio that Fumikage had been captured. "No, I didn't do anything besides be unintentional bait," she said quietly. Izuku was taken aback slightly. Did she really not know how much of a help she's been? He walked over to her and put a comforting hand on her shoulder. "It was thanks to your quick thinking with that flashbang that I was able to see Tokoyami and capture him. Don't discredit yourself Yaoyorozu," he said gently. She looked at him and her face relaxed a little. A small smile crept onto her face. "Thanks Midoriya. Now, let's go get the last hero." A full smile was on her face by that point. Izuku mirrored it and they ran off towards where they'd seen Hitoshi go. "A light in the dark," murmured Fumikage. They knew that there were no stairs over on this side of the floor, so he had to be in one of the few rooms left standing. There was no way that he had a mobility-based quirk or a fighting-based quirk based on the way he ran away. They could afford to advance on him and leave the bomb behind. He was cornered. "You DMN villains think that you have me in a bad spot, don't you?" Hitoshi yelled from a room. Izuku smirked. He was seriously trash-talking in his position? He even gave away his position. What an idiot. "You're not getting out of here Ali Izuku suddenly felt his control over his body ripped away from him. He couldn't move, speak, or use his quirk. The world was fuzzy and it was hard to think straight. Then he heard Hitoshi speak to him. His voice didn't come from the room, but instead from directly in his head. "Go and bring Tokoyami over here and cut him loose," he commanded. Izuku felt his body start to move without his permission. He struggled to stop himself as he slowly shambled over to Fumikage. He had some time before he reached him, a minute or two from his best guess. He tried everything he could think of to break free from the control Hitoshi somehow had on him, but nothing worked. Momo was confused. 1 second her partner was yelling back at Hitoshi and the next, he was shambling back towards Fumikage. She walked over to him cautiously and tried to get his attention. She was going to touch him until she heard footsteps rapidly approaching from behind her. She turned around with her staff ready and saw Hitoshi running towards her. She swung at him but missed when he sidestepped her. He swung a punch into her side and she jumped back with a grunt and swung again to get some distance between them. That was a pathetic excuse for an attack, he bad-mouthed her. She was going to respond, but hesitated. There had to be some reason he was yelling those things. He had given away his position and lost the element of surprise earlier just to yell and insult. Izuku had tried to respond, but was stopped halfway through. His quirk must have something to do with a person talking to them. Hitoshi shrugged at her and ran towards her again. This time she swung and landed a glancing blow on the shoulder and he ducked under the swing. It knocked him off balance slightly, but he continued his attack and swung another punch at her. She avoided it and tried to back away, but Hitoshi kept pressing his attack. She tried to get him to back off with a series of swings from her staff. He avoided most of them and was able to land a few more punches in her side. Momo's technique was sloppy and she wasn't focusing at all and Hitoshi was taking full advantage of it. A few more bad swings and good punches and she lost her footing on some rubble. She fell over and landed on the ground. Hitoshi pressed his attack even harder and hit her with a clean cross to the jaw. She was sent sprawling to the ground. She used her momentum to roll on the ground away from him though, so he wasn't able to wrap the capture tape around him. You know, heels might not be the best choice of footwear for a pro hero. Then again, doesn't seem like you'll make it there if you get laid out like this. No way you'll graduate if you crumble under pressure that easily. Hitoshi's words cut deep into her. She didn't want to believe any of it, but it all sounded too true. She reflexively snapped back. She felt her control being torn away and Hitoshi smiled. Thank you for cooperation. Izuku meanwhile, was busy trying to stop himself from bringing Fumikage over. He had reached his tied-up opponent a bit ago and was walking him back towards Hitoshi. He was vaguely aware of the fight that was happening. All he could do was hope Momo won. She should be able to, but her self-doubt might be too much to handle. Then he felt the iron grip on his mind loosen a little bit. His vision became much clearer and he saw that Momo was on the ground with Hitoshi getting ready to capture her. He pushed himself as hard as he could to do something. He knew this was training and that she wasn't in any actual danger, so he couldn't get a heroic boost from his quirk right now. But, he could keep pushing himself till he broke free. Then, everything stopped. His mind was flooded by thoughts and his eyes by light. He had activated his quirk and stopped time. But, it quickly resumed while he tried to orient himself. Sounds flooded his ears, but he was free from Hitoshi's quirk. As long as he didn't respond to anything, he would be fine. He looked over at his last opponent, dropping Fumikage's arm. Hitoshi was grabbing his forehead like he had a massive headache. How did you break out of that? He asked. Like hell Izuku was going to respond to that. He stopped time a final time and got the capture tape around him before it resumed. Both members of the hero team have been captured. The villain team wins. All Might cheered in their earpieces. Momo regained control of her body as Hitoshi deactivated his quirk. I assume that when you controlled Yaoyorozu, you lost some control on me and I was just able to break through with pure effort. That effort started to show as Izuku's nose started bleeding when he was done talking. Hitoshi laughed and shook his head. Man, I was really hoping that I would be able to compete with you guys. Seems like I do belong in Gen Ed, he sighed and looked over at Momo. Also, I'm very sorry for what I said to you. My quirk needs you to respond, so the best way to do that is to insult you. I think you're a great hero and you're here to help overcome your shortcomings. He bowed toward her and quickly turned and headed towards the stairs. Momo was taken aback. He was right about the purpose of her going to UA, but that didn't make her feel that much better. Fumikage also bowed, said thanks, and headed towards the stairs with his partner. Izuku helped Momo up and they began walking back, too. We're all here to improve. Even with my quirk I was still taken out due to inexperience. Let's keep improving and become great pro heroes Yaoyorozu, Izuku said as they walked. Momo rolled her eyes. Izuku had definitely been listening to a few too many All Might speeches. He sounded just as corny as the #1 hero. Still though, it made her feel more at ease. You're right Midoriya, let's go plus ultra, she raised her fist up in victory. Izuku copied her, also yelling, plus ultra. They walked down the stairs and began laughing even if it hurt Momo a little thanks to Hitsuhai's punches. Izuku had new resolve. If he was able to help Momo, then he should be able to help Achiko and Katsuki, too. He smiled. After all, a hero should be able to help anyone, no matter their struggle. So you want my permission to break a few walls? All Might asked the hero duo in front of him. They were supposed to be preparing for a tactical assault right now, but instead they were asking weird questions. Yes sir, answered Fumikage. Hitoshi looked like he knew how stupid the question it was. Well, as long as you don't do it randomly and bring the building down, it should be fine, he said. The hero team nodded and started to walk off towards the building. They discussed their plan now that they had permission to break some walls. Fumikage would be the main attacker. They learned through a little experimentation that if Hitoshi brainwashed Fumikage, Dark Shadow wouldn't freak out in darkness, but would still be as powerful. Hitoshi could only brainwash him for so long, so it would be mostly hit-and-run attacks. Also, brainwashing Fumikage while Dark Shadow was out would make him return to Fumikage. So that removed any danger of outbursts in the darkness. By attacking at range like this, they would be able to wear down Izuku and Momo so that they would slip up and talk to Hitoshi and he could make them freeze. From there, it's as simple as walking up to the bomb and touching it before they could break out. They heard All Might call time on the prep phase and they headed inside. I told them that they could strategically destroy walls, not to level a whole floor, All Might thought to himself. Dark Shadow had just cleared out the 4th floor of the training building. The students in the control room all had their jaws on the floor. That was incredible power. All Might debated on yelling at them through the radio, but he noticed something. Most of the load-bearing pillars still stood and they were on the top floor, so there wasn't much weight on top of them. He relaxed a little knowing that they were total psychopaths. Holy crap, Ejiro's jaw was the lowest out of all of the students, that is so manly. He held his fist up near his chest. Denki silently agreed with him and turned back to the massive TV. The screen suddenly went dark as the lights were knocked out, but the night vision turned on a second later. The hero team stalked around behind the few remaining pieces of cover as the villains stayed alert. From the corner of the room wrapped up in a heating blanket, Katsuki looked up at the screen. He was still emotionally destroyed from his match, but his friend was fighting. Watching Izuku only made him realize how badly he'd failed, though. The time stopper dove between pieces of cover, supported his teammate. And still managed to land a decisive hit while effectively being blind. Katsuki had only managed to seal his own defeat. Still, he was in better shape than his opponent. Achiko didn't even watch the fight playing out on the TV. She was still completely lost in her head. Negative thoughts flew around so violently she didn't even hear when Katsuki slid his way over. He was jerked back when the cable for the heating blanket ran out, so he ditched it in order to get closer. His bones were still frozen from his time in Shoto's ice, but he decided it was fine for just a moment. "Uraraka?" he asked lightly. She looked up, dead eyes met dead eyes. Katsuki knew that he couldn't help her, not when he was also dealing with his own problems. He might be able to help her just a little but, though, like a hero would. That didn't mean that he would choose his words carefully. "Why are you sulking around like you lost?" This pierced through the fog in Achiko's head. She felt another emotion other than despair fill her. Anger. Her face contorted slightly to display this new development, but Katsuki continued, "I'm the one that lost. I was beaten handedly by someone far below my level thanks to your gravity crap. So stop acting like being knocked down a few times is the same as being useless." He quickly moved back to the comfort of his blanket, hoping his words had at least managed to cut into her enough for someone else to finish helping her. Who was he kidding? He knew it would be Izuku. He slumped back against the wall, feeling warmth enter his body again, and continued to watch the ongoing fight. She didn't know how to feel now. Was Katsuki trying to compliment her or was it a backhanded way of making himself feel better? Achiko was finally starting to think about her match critically when a roar swept through the crowd of spectators. She remembered that Izuku was supposed to be fighting and looked up to see Fumikage laying on the ground clutching his side. Thoughts other than helplessness crept into her mind and she started to feel a bit better. She distracted herself with the match until the villain team came out on top. Izuku headed down the stairs of the building that now needed serious repairs. He'd gotten away with only a few scratches and minor bruising from debris flying around. Momo had been less lucky, having a possible cracked rib or two. Hitoshi hit surprisingly hard. Feeling an itch on his nose, Izuku rubbed it, but his hand came away bloody. The force of breaking out of his opponent's brainwashing had been too much apparently. He also noticed how his body felt tingly, like he'd been electrocuted recently. Maybe he had triggered a heroic boost, if only to break out of his brainwashed state. He would need to see Recovery Girl after this. A grunt followed by the sound of someone hitting something resonated through the stairwell. Izuku and Momo sped up their descent and saw that Hitoshi was leaning against the wall of the stairway. He clutched his head in pain while Fumikage tried to help him stand back up. Izuku almost met the same fate when his legs gave out and he was forced to catch himself with a railing. Momo and Fumikage both tried to help their respective partners up until they were also forced to start worrying about the pain in their sides. They would all need to see Recovery Girl after this. The rest of the matches weren't super eventful. A standout though was how Denki electrocuted everyone during his match, frying his own brain in the process. That match was a technical victory for the villains. The massive differences in Koji and Yuga's personalities caused them to run in without any real plan, another villain victory. Tsuyu and Mizo made a very good team in contrast, being able to gather intel on the enemy and using agility to dodge their opponents' attacks. Rikido and Ijiro were powerful and tough, but lacked the speed needed to fight Tsuyu effectively. She jumped straight past them and got the win. Izuku spent a good hour in the nurses getting his nose bleed and tingly sensation examined. Momo and Tokoyami were both healed by Recovery Girl and sent back with little fuss. Hitoshi was also being looked after, since this was the first time he had his quirk overwhelmed while in battle. This gave them a few minutes to talk. "You shouldn't say that you belong in Gen Ed," Izuku said bluntly. Hitoshi's head shot up and he looked at the other boy. "This was effectively a tryout," he replied, "and I failed it miserably." His shoulders fell and his eyelids threatened to close. "That is only a surface-level observation," Izuku spoke almost mechanically. "Sure, you did technically fail, but not the tryout. You were fighting an uphill battle against someone who can create any object they can think of and someone who can stop time, two of the most versatile and powerful quirks in our class. Even through all of that though, you were still able to take me out and almost capture Yaoyorozu. If you trained to control more than one person at a time, you could easily win in that situation next time. That's what the hero program is here for, you even said it yourself earlier." Hitoshi had said that. Maybe he still had a shot. But a hero class is for heroes, though. Why would they want a villain in there? This took Izuku aback. He thought of himself as a villain? Hitoshi continued, "I can force someone to do whatever I want. I'm surprised you're even talking to me given the risks. But you wouldn't ever do that, would you?" That wasn't a question, Izuku already knew the answer. Hitoshi stayed quiet and stared at the ground. He wanted to rebuttal, say that he would brainwash someone for his own desires. He could brainwash Izuku right now, but he couldn't. He wouldn't even brainwash a fly outside of a fight or harmless joke. It wasn't right and he was scared of the consequences. His peers already despised him enough, why should he give them any more of a reason to? Izuku wasn't done. "You apologized to Yaoyorozu after the match for using such harsh language at her. If you were a villain, there would be no need in your heart to say anything. People gave you the designation of a villain based on nothing more than looks. The way you act isn't villainous in the slightest. You are a good person, who deserves a chance to be a hero." Every word cut into Hitoshi. He knew it was true, he always had. It was just easier to keep wallowing in self-pity than to try to break free. "Thanks, Midoriya," was all he could manage. "Please, call me Izuku, Shinso." Hitoshi, Izuku. They both shared a smile. Achiko met back with Izuku after the matches were finished. He was still getting examined by Recovery Girl, so she stayed and talked for a little. Izuku was surprised that she was feeling better, judging by how the last time he'd seen her she was effectively comatose. When he heard that it was Katsuki of all people to help her, he tried to hold in a laugh. It didn't work. "What's so funny about that?" she asked, slightly angry. "Ahahaha, he couldn't have been, ahaha, comfortable doing that," he said in between fits of laughter. Man, he was going to give him so much shit for this later. But it didn't seem to rid all despair from Achiko, Izuku observed. Her shoulders were still slumped and she stared off into space for a bit too long. He wanted to help her now, but he was a little embarrassed to do that. He had just pried heavily into Hitoshi's life and this was a girl that he liked, so it would have to wait. Recovery Girl came back in and explained Izuku's current condition. This was actually the first time that he was able to push himself to the edge of breaking, but not over the edge. The tingling was due to his nerves frying themselves from the strain of breaking out of brainwashing. As it turns out, his nerves were incredibly sensitive due to an unknown side effect of overusing his quirk. When he goes over his time limit, his nerves start to be destroyed from the stress of functioning outside the flow of time. The stunt with the zero-pointer a few weeks had caused serious nerve damage that Recovery Girl hadn't been able to fully heal. "Think of it like split ends with your hair," she described. "I can't heal that since it isn't technically an injury, so you need to be careful with your limit or this could leave permanent damage." "Wait, does this happen every time he uses his quirk?" Achiko jumped up and almost yelled. Izuku motioned her to sit back down. "No sweetie, if it did someone would have noticed it a long time ago." Achiko let out a sigh. Izuku already knew that but he was relieved, too. That was the end of his stay. Recovery Girl shooed them out and wished them to never return. As they walked through the door, they noticed Katsuki leaning against the wall a short distance away. "You were listening, weren't you?" Izuku asked cheekily. "Only to make sure that my friend doesn't get himself paralyzed from using his quirk," Katsuki replied with his usual angry tone. Well, it's good to know that you're mostly back to normal, Achiko poked at him. What do you mean, mostly? He screamed. Achiko laughed and began to skip down the hall towards their classroom. Izuku's stuff was still in there. Oi, you don't need to get his stuff, Katsuki said as he gestured to Izuku's bag behind him, already packed up the nerd stuff. Let's get going. He turned in a huff and began walking away. Achiko skipped back over and Izuku grabbed his bag. They caught up to Katsuki and started home. Man, what a day, they all thought. If there is one thing that is constant through any high school, no matter if it's in a dystopian future or a dark age past, it is class elections. Class 1, as elections weren't the most streamlined, though. Pick me. I'm the best fit. I'll be a good leader. Everyone spoke over each other in a massive noise. They all wanted to get elected for a leadership role, which was commendable, but also incredibly noisy. This continued for several minutes until one voice cut through the rest. Enough, it shouted, we must figure out how to do this quickly and fairly. Everyone looked at the figure and saw one Tenya Ida standing up, bolt straight, chopping the air viciously. I suggest we do a simple voting system. The suggestion was good and led everyone to think for a moment. Wouldn't everyone just vote for themselves? Asked Kyoka. Yeah, we barely even know each other, spoke Ijiro. That's why it works the best, the person who gets the most votes would have already made an impression on the students here, Tenya rebutted. Everyone murmured their agreements and then got out some loose paper to put a name on. Izuku Midoriya, 4. Momo Yaoyorozu, 2. 1 or 0 vote totals were omitted. Who didn't vote for me? Screamed Katsuki. I think that's why no one voted for you, Katsuki, Izuku said as he patted the rabid animal on his back. He was risking permanent injury with this move. Screw off, nerd. Get up there and be congratulated or something, his friend said in a huff. Izuku and Momo promptly made their way up to the front of the class, careful to not step on the sleeping form of their teacher. How does he sleep with that much noise? They stood behind the podium and waited for the class to settle a little. Momo still looked nervous, as if she didn't think that her votes were deserved. Izuku debated on putting a comforting hand on her shoulder, but she was a good few inches taller than him. He landed on a pat on her back for moral support. She was calmed by this, knowing that he had faith in her. They both gave their acceptance speeches. Can you really call 2 sentences a speech? Classes progressed as normal for the next few hours until it was time for lunch. Izuku already had a little group ever since the first day of school. Him, Achiko, Katsuki, and Tenya all sat together at a table after they had gotten their food. There was a new addition this time, however. Momo came over and sat down next to Tenya. The topic eventually moved to the recent election. Yeah, I voted for you, Izuku said to a stunned Momo. I thought that you would have voted for yourself, she responded. Nope, to be honest I wasn't expecting to get any votes. He scratched the back of his neck in slight embarrassment. Don't try to be humble, Deku. You knew most of us would vote for you. Katsuki seemed displeased at this notion. Yeah, I voted for you of course, Achiko chimed in. I believe that you are a very effective leader with exceptional charisma, Tenya gave his reasoning as well. I agree with Ida, you helped me out a lot during training yesterday, Momo praised. I know Bakugo won't admit it, but he definitely voted for you, too. Achiko took a stab at Katsuki who had his arms crossed, defensively. He ignored the comment. I'm serious you guys, I didn't expect to get any votes. Izuku waved his arms in front of him. He wasn't even sure if he wanted the responsibility. Katsuki wanted to get mad, but he knew his friend was being genuine. He was incredibly cocky in a fight, but he barely functioned socially. During this small commotion, someone else made their way over to the table. The purple-haired boy walked up next to Izuku with a tray in his hand. Izuku noticed soon after his table and immediately knew who it was. Hitoshi, how are you? He asked his newest friend. The bags underneath Hitoshi's eyes had improved slightly from the last time they'd seen each other. Hey Izuku, I'm doing fine, he responded. Katsuki perked up hearing someone use his best friend's first name. Curiosity and a little bit of envy drove him to pay attention to the conversation at hand. Glad to hear, do you want to pull up a chair? The benches could only hold 6 people comfortably, but you could put a chair at the end for an added seat. No, I just wanted to drop by to say thanks. Hitsuhai's voice was very sincere, seeming not to care about the small audience he had. Katsuki internally wondered what Izuku had done to the poor boy. He continued, I'm feeling a lot better about my quirk, I'll try and take that empty seat in your class in the future. A smile painted itself on Izuku's face. You're gonna make it in, I just know it, Izuku said with extreme conviction. Everyone else nodded their agreements. Hitoshi smiled and waved a, see you later, to the table and left for his own. Izuku leaned back and stretched. Well, I guess I should also say a proper thanks for what you did yesterday, said Momo. Izuku shook his head. You really don't need to. You've already said thanks. But, she was part way through her rebuttal when a scream pierced through the air. They all recognized it, the school's alarm for intruders. Izuku's table stood up in a rush. Most of the lunchroom was already in a frenzy trying to make it towards one of the exits. There was a lot of pushing and shoving. The group of friends made their way to one of the exits, trying to stick together. They made it some distance down a hall before Momo and Tenya were split from the group. Forced to the side of the hallway to try and find their friends, they caught a glimpse of the outside through a window. The source of the alarm was an intrusion from the media, not a threat to the students, unless you consider getting interviewed being in mortal danger. We need to tell the rest of the students, yelled Momo. She started to formulate a plan while making sure that Tenya didn't get separated from her, too. They needed to get a stampeding student body's attention. How would they go about that, and then what would they say? It was hard to think while you were forced to focus on not getting trampled. We need to be louder than this crowd, she spoke out loud since it was too noisy for her to think in her head. An idea began to develop in her head. She pulled on Tenya's arm aggressively to get her attention. She used her quirk to create a bullhorn. Jump as high as you can, Ida, she yelled. Tenya more or less understood her and took the device and pushed his way to a more open area. He started yelling while moving through the crowd, but most didn't notice him. Although Momo wanted to help, she knew her voice wouldn't carry far enough, so she trusted Tenya with this task. A small clearing in the crowd opened up and Tenya wasted no time making his way over to it. He leapt up from the spot and promptly crashed into the ceiling. He was so preoccupied with finding an opening that he didn't realize that the ceiling had come down greatly in the area he had tried to jump in. This loud crash did open another opportunity for him, though. Multiple students had heard the noise and turned their attention to him. He used this to his advantage. Everyone, his voice carried across through the halls, getting the rest of the students' attention, there is no need to be alarmed. The alarm is going off because of the press outside harassing our teachers, not an intruder with malicious intent. This seemed to calm the crowd. Murmurs drifted around as Tenya continued to repeat his message again and again. A good portion of the student body was quelled thanks to his actions. After a few more minutes, a message came over the speakers and announced that there was no need to be alarmed and the intruding media had been dealt with. Most students returned to where they should be and the crisis was solved. Tenya and Momo regrouped with Izuku, Katsuki, and Achiko soon after. They heard Tenya's announcement and immediately began praising him. Oh no, I don't deserve any of this, he denied, I was merely following instructions from a plan developed by Yaoyorozu. He made a chopping motion towards her. She immediately became flustered. You're the one that carried it out. You deserve some credit for your part, she retorted. Tenya pondered this. It was indeed a team effort, but I hold my position in saying that you deserve the majority of the credit. Momo didn't deny this and instead braced herself for the cheers her friends and classmates were about to give her. She held up surprisingly well. Lunch soon ended and the group of friends headed back to class. Multiple classmates caught them during or after lunch and thanked Tenya for the clarification he'd given everyone. He pointed all of their gratitude to Momo, who started to take in strides, getting more comfortable with each person's thank you. Even the normally stoic Aizawa praised the two for their quick thinking during a moment of uncertainty. If there were any doubts about the normally passive Momo's ability to plan and lead, they were dispelled after that day. Izuku woke up the next day and immediately began smiling. The class was going on their first out-of-school activity today. His mom took notice to his excitement and simply told him to be careful. How ironic. He met Katsuki outside the same way they always did. Achiko also caught them on the way to school. They talked about the trip and it only added to their excitement. Thankfully there was no media to ruin the mood this time when they walked in. It only took a few more minutes before the rest of the class to arrive. The air was buzzing and only calmed down when their teacher told them to be quiet. He explained what would be taking place that day. Rescue exercises in realistic environments. It was a very important part of being a hero. He didn't even need a threat to get them all out to the buses on time. They all chatted away on the bus, some noticing a few minor changes to each other's costumes. Eventually arriving at the building, everyone stepped off the bus. A large figure in a spacesuit greeted them. It's 13. Achiko was ecstatic to see her favorite hero in person. There was someone missing, though. Izuku knew All Might was supposed to be here, and when he saw the teachers hold up 3 fingers, he knew why he wasn't. He'd gone over his time limit. The news had been talking about All Might's escapades this morning, so it wasn't all that surprising that the overly zealous hero had gone too overboard in his efforts. After a brief explanation about rescue work, Class 1A entered the building. Not all 19 students would leave the USJ unscathed. A black, misty portal began to open in the center plaza. Izuku hit the ground with an unceremonious thud. There was another one shortly after, although this one sounded more graceful. He stretched out his arms and attempted to get to his feet, but he quickly yanked his right one back towards him with a hiss. His right hand was burned slightly. Only then did he take the time to look at his new surroundings. Flames surrounded him. He was lucky to get dropped in a place that wasn't on fire. Getting up more carefully this time, Izuku decided to investigate the other noise he'd heard. It would find him first. "Hey Midoriya," croaked a female voice. Izuku quickly turned to his right out of surprise, but he knew who it was. Tsuyu Azui emerged from behind some rubble. She had no burns on her thankfully, though she did look quite dehydrated. "Hey there Azui," Izuku replied. They spoke in a hushed tone, knowing villains would be hunting them. The Black Mist Man, Kurojiiri, had said as such. "I thought I told you to call me Tsuyu." A short discussion on the bus trip here about flashy quirks, specifically Izuku and Katsuki's, led to Tsuyu asking to be called by her first name. "Alright, sorry Tsuyu," Izuku replied slightly unnerved. The girl seemed to be too nonchalant about the whole situation, but that was just a surface-level observation. A slight tremble could be seen and heard if you looked for it. Their whole class had been split apart, presumably spread across the USJ's different simulated environments, and were going to be hunted down by villains. They needed to move carefully and make it back to the central plaza or at least regroup with the rest of the class. The two of them moved as fast as they could towards the entrance to this specific zone. Of course, they also tried to stay as quiet as possible to avoid any lurking villains. This could only go for so long though. They were in a small clearing with a few crumpled walls and small fires, most likely the remnants of a courtyard, when a voice sliced through the smoky air. "Hey, I found the little BSTRDS," a shout from behind gave away their position. They turned and faced the voice and saw a tall, lanky villain with reptilian features staring at them. A smile developed along its snout. It was going to pounce on them. "Tsuyu, make sure no one sneaks up on us from the sides," Izuku commanded. A nod and "Karo" were the acknowledgement that his classmate gave before the villain made the first move. It lunged straight at them with impressive speed. But it wasn't fast enough. Stopping time, Izuku slugged them in the jaw. The hit was powerful enough to send them flying into a wall, unconscious. He was careful to not hit them into any fire, but the air blast from said punch caused the fires around them to spin around and swell in size for a moment. Tongues of fire licked at the two heroes' costumes before receding, although they were a little bigger than before. Izuku would have to be careful about the power of his attacks. "Midoriya, one on the right side," Tsuyu called out. She did a good job at keeping watch, spotting a villain making its way up one of their flanks. Izuku quickly teleported back over to Tsuyu and they began moving toward an exit again. The villain slowly made its way toward them and eventually cut them off in front of the exit to the courtyard. They were shorter, but also bulkier than the last. However, their mobility wasn't lacking due to this difference in build. Without saying a word, a punch was thrown at Tsuyu who leapt to the side of it. The fire in this area was less prominent, but would still limit their movement. The villain closed the distance and wound up another punch. Tsuyu was still slightly off balance and hesitated from the fire nearby. The punch would connect, but on the wrong target. Izuku teleported in between his classmate and the villain to block the attack. Tsuyu jumped away to safety as Izuku ducked under a punch. Attempting to sweep the villain's legs, Izuku kicked at the side of their knees, but nothing happened. There was too much muscle in between the attack and the joint to damage them. Izuku was forced to teleport away to dodge a haymaker aimed at his head. Of course, he wasn't able to travel very far, only a few feet. The villain lunged once again, this time with a kick. Izuku attempted to dodge, but he knew it was going to be a glancing blow on his ribs. Tsuyu would make the save this time. She had climbed up a nearby wall and struck the villain in the side of the head with a kick. It was enough to divert the attack, but it didn't do much more. This guy was built like a tank. Izuku knew he was going to have to hit him and stop time, but the risk of the fire spreading was too great. He would need to lure his opponent into a place with little fire. Carefully backpedaling, he made his way towards such an area. The villain got to their feet again. Tsuyu had already slipped away again, so his target was once again Izuku. They bounded towards the student in long but quick strides and prepared another punch. Izuku got ready to dodge with time stop, but he wouldn't have to. Tsuyu's tongue shot out from the smoke and wrapped around the villain's raised wrist. She yanked as hard as she could, successfully knocking them off balance. Izuku took this opportunity. Time froze around Izuku as he launched an uppercut straight into the villain's jaw. They were launched a few feet up in the air from the impact. The air blast excited a few fires that were still around them, but it wasn't catastrophic. The villain fell back down, completely unconscious and missing a few teeth. Izuku felt the tiniest bit of pity for them. "Thanks for the assist Tsuyu," he called out. She dropped down from the wall she had been perched on. She had accumulated a few burns and scratches from the fight, but it was nothing major. They continued to make haste towards the exit. It would have taken them only 3 minutes to make it out normally, but 4 more villain attacks kept them from making that pace. None of them were as challenging as the second villain they faced, but it was still a nuisance. A single well-placed kick for Tsuyu or a few normal punches from Izuku took them down no problem. Both students were incredibly agile and could avoid nearly any attack thrown at them. They were only a few dozen meters from the exit when a fireball shot towards Tsuyu from behind. Izuku dispelled it with a weight he threw in stop time. Turning to face their last opponent, they saw a man standing in a fire a fair distance away. A second fireball shot towards Tsuyu's back. There was a second enemy behind them. Izuku dispelled that one, too. A few pieces of it would make short contact with Tsuyu, leaving minor burns. Except when Izuku looked around, there was no other enemy. A third fireball, and a fourth, and a fifth, all came flying at the two heroes from radically different angles. Izuku got so fed up with not seeing the second enemy that he stopped time and threw his sixth weight at the enemy he could see. A spout of fire flew out from behind the distant man, melting the projectile before it could hit. This fire had originated from a hand though, and soon after a second figure emerged. However, this wasn't the man responsible for the fireballs that had been targeting them. His fire had melted the weight in nearly an instant, so it was way hotter and he seemed to have always been behind the first villain. So was there a third villain? There's no other villains around us, Tsuyu said between ragged breaths. She had been hit with a few too many wisps of fire and was incredibly tired from the heat. Her amphibious nature wasn't playing nicely with the fire. She continued, the first villain is waving his arms around just as the fireballs come flying at us. He's controlling the fire around us with his quirk. She looked ready to faint. What she said made sense, though. The villains knew both of them were close-range fighters, so the first villain would just whittle them down from range while the second villain would act as a shield against range attacks. Thanks Tsuyu, Izuku said with renewed confidence. He was tired, but could still fight at his maximum for a bit longer. A slight tingle ran through his body. He had definitely gone over his time limit when he'd blocked the second villain's attack aimed at Tsuyu and probably had pushed it with a couple fireballs. You should leave, I can hold them off, he offered. She nodded and began to leap towards the exit. Izuku ran in the opposite direction, towards the villain pair, in order to force them to make a choice. Stop Tsuyu's escape or defend themselves from Izuku. They chose Izuku. The second villain fired a blast of fire that then contorted with the first's arm movements. Izuku teleported a few feet forward once the blast was on top of him. The first villain didn't have the reaction time to turn the fire back around before Izuku was on top of him. The second tried to fire another blast, but Izuku threw a weight at him. Even out of stop time they would seriously hurt. His blast was spent destroying it. Izuku pulled back his fist, getting ready to punch the villain's lights out. This would be stopped by a fireball that impacted Izuku's left side. The first villain managed to control some fire nearby to hit him with one. It didn't burn as much as he'd thought it would, being more similar to a Katsuki explosion. He did still flinch though, and his punch would only graze the villain's face. Izuku tried to follow up, but the second villain shot a fire blast in between him and his target. He backed off. Don't touch my brother, the second villain screeched. He put his hands together and let rip a massive blast. His previous ones were only about the size of a basketball. This was enough to completely engulf Izuku. The heat was blistering. Stopping time, Izuku ran to the side to dodge, but he noticed something. He couldn't feel the insane heat anymore. Time soon resumed and the blast screamed past him. You hot-headed idiot, I can't control that much fire, the first villain yelled as he rubbed the side of his face. Right, sorry I got carried away there, the brother replied. Yep, these guys are siblings, Izuku remarked. He tried to take advantage of the slight argument, but he was forced back by another fireball from the first villain. The second also got ready to put another fire blast downrange. Izuku took a quick glance back while he dodged and saw that Tsuyu had successfully escaped. Now I only have to worry about myself, he screamed. The second villain fired and it froze soon after. Izuku punched through it just as time began to move again. It burned, but he carried his punch through this time and connected. The second villain stumbled back. The punch hadn't hit in stop time, but Izuku still hit hard. The fires around them roared, as the wind from Izuku even throwing a punch was enough to excite them. This was all according to plan, though. If Izuku made the fire around them big enough, then the first villain wouldn't be able to control it. The look on his face confirmed his theory, as the villain was forced to wait a moment until the fires died down. Izuku took this time to continue to pressure the second villain. Punches and kicks were thrown, but no fire. Izuku was always ready to quickly stop time and dodge a blast, however the villain didn't seem to be able to. Only when Izuku was forced back by another fireball from his brother did he fire again. He extended his arm out fully with his hand open. His arm needed to be extended, Izuku figured. If he could get close again he could finish it. Stopping time, Izuku jumped up and swung his leg in a full arc in front of him. This blew away the second villain's fire blast and also staggered both villains. Izuku closed the gap again. This larger air blast had also made the fires around the three combatants even bigger. Izuku would get enough time to use his quirk again and send his opponent flying. The fires swelled again with the punch and Izuku quickly changed targets. He tried to attack, but a blast would force him back again. The second villain was still conscious, but just barely. "Don't touch my brother," he wheezed out before collapsing back onto the ground. The first villain used this space and time provided to him to swing his arms quickly up in the air. Fire suddenly jumped around Izuku and surrounded him. It roared violently and gave Izuku very little room to move unless he wanted to be burned. "I may not be able to control this much fire for long, but I can use it to trap you and kill you." Izuku began to be pelted by fireballs. They weren't very hot or big, but they still hurt and tore at his costume. He also couldn't punch or throw anything in there since the fire would definitely envelop him. He only had one option. He stopped time and leapt through the roaring fire that encased him. He wasn't fast enough to avoid getting burned by it, but it was better than staying inside. He wiped the look of surprise right off the villain's face with a swift punch to the jaw. A follow-up kick and punch in stop time finished the fight. Izuku was exhausted, but he'd survived. He quickly made his way to the exit where he found Tsuyu in a river nursing her burns and waiting for him. Izuku dove in and relished in the feeling of cool water. They both waded their way over to the central plaza unaware of the danger that awaited them. "That DMN Misty BSTRD, Katsuki thought as he landed on the ground. His preemptive strike with Ijiro had been a complete failure. Well, maybe not a complete failure. They'd need to get in close again to test his new theory. A resounding crash echoed from not too far away from where he was. Making his way over, he peered into the small crater. It wasn't at all surprising when he saw spiky red hair in the center. "Hey man," Ijiro called out to him, "can you give me a hand? I landed a little harder than I was expecting." Katsuki leaned down with a massive roll of his eyes and grabbed his classmate's hand, pulling him out of the hole. "Lucky we got sent to the same place," Ijiro's cheerful voice tried to make the situation a little lighter. "We're lucky to be alive in the first place," Katsuki retorted. He was right. Why the villain didn't just teleport all the students into a meat grinder would remain a mystery. But they had to use this opportunity to escape or help. "Whoa!" exclaimed Ijiro. A sharp clang of metal hitting something hard shredded through the air. When Katsuki turned to look, he saw a spear trying to pierce the hard skin of his classmate. It was incredibly long, but not super wide. Tracing the pole back, he realized that it was connected to someone. A villain stood at the top of a small mound up ahead with their hand extended towards the heroes. Their spear-tipped fingers glinted in the light. Katsuki spun and fired an explosion at the spear finger that was extended at Ijiro. It retracted quickly back to its owner. "Of course the kids they send my way are a bad match for me," the villain rolled his eyes heavily. Ijiro wasn't even scratched by the long-ranged attack. It was fast though, so if he didn't react in time it could seriously injure him. Katsuki would never let the villain get close enough, however. A bad matchup indeed. Unfortunately, or fortunately depending on whose point of view you are looking through, the villain also had a partner. When Katsuki went to blast himself towards the villain, he realized that he couldn't move his right foot. Looking down, there was a sticky, spider web-like substance adhering his boot to the ground. He pointed his hand down to blast it off, but movement forced him to look elsewhere. A spear finger was closing in on him at rapid speed. He wouldn't be able to move in time. Thankfully, Ijiro had already leapt in front of him, blocking the attack with his hardened skin. The momentum of his leap did cause him to stumble and land on his side in the dirt. Katsuki blasted off the web on his foot, giving him his movement back. Not a moment later did another spear whiz by his face. Dodging it, he made his way over to his partner in this mess. "Get up and keep on the lookout for another villain," Katsuki commanded as he blasted away a few more spears. "What? There's another one?" Ijiro was genuinely surprised by this revelation. To be fair, they hadn't seen any other villains in the area. "You sure you didn't just step in some really old gum, dude?" "I'm sure. It's a simple strategy. Immobilize me and you and then pick us off from afar." More spears shot out and retracted around them. Katsuki tried to injure the villain since they were his fingers, but they were made of a strong metal and too thin to absorb enough of his explosion to damage in the short window he had. "AHH!" screamed Ijiro. He had been tripped by something. Another sticky web gripped his shoes and forced him to the ground. Spears bounced off of him as he hardened his skin. The webs were easy enough to cut through, so he was back on his feet in no time. When he unhardened his hand, he felt it go numb. The feeling slowly went away when he hardened it again. There were still pieces of the web on his hand. "Hey, something is up with this stuff," Ijiro began to explain when he and Katsuki were close together again. They were still being forced to weave around the spears flying through the air. "It's making my hand go numb." "Then don't let any more touch you," raged Katsuki, who was getting seriously tired of dodging and not attacking. Did these villains think they could keep him at bay for long enough to beat him? Not a chance. Fueled by raw anger from being underestimated, Katsuki darted forwards towards the spear villain. He covered the distance in only a few moments, but it wasn't fast enough. A web shot out from around the corner of a nearby cliff face and struck his hand. When he tried to detonate the nitroglycerin in his palm, it only half ignited. The explosion was unfocused and lacked power, dealing very little damage to the villain he had aimed at. Katsuki ripped off the web with his other hand and tried to fire again while his opponent was still stunned from the sudden rush and slight explosion. This time the explosion, if you could call it that, still barely made a puff of smoke. He tried his other hand, but it had a similar effect. The villain recovered enough to point his hand towards Katsuki again. There was quite a bit of smoke and dust blocking his vision, though, so it was a mostly unaimed attack. Spear fingers shot out and Katsuki was forced back. A grazed him, cutting into his costume and making shallow cuts. His hand was starting to get numb since his gloves were meant to let liquid and small particles in, so he could still fire explosions. His only choice was to use one of his gauntlets. Well, he had another choice, but retreating was absolutely not an option. Katsuki primed the handle back and he leapt away from the flurry of spears. "Wow, Kaken, that's an amazing way to use your quirk." Izuku raved about the genius behind it. He had just shown off his brand new costume design to his friend. The newly drafted gauntlets were specifically designed so Katsuki could use his full power with very little risk to himself. "But don't you think they're a little dangerous?" "Ha!" A questioning noise was directed towards his best friend. "Who cares if a villain gets hurt? They gave up their right to safety when they became a criminal. Villains still need to be in one piece so they can be properly punished." "You've heard all the drama that gets stirred up when a hero kills a villain," Izuku protested. "I think I have an idea though." It was a small change, but an important one. Instead of one massive tank holding all of the stored nitroglycerin, there were two. If he only opened one to fire, it wouldn't deal nearly as much damage. Izuku had originally wanted a full regulator, so you could control the power down to the percentage, but Katsuki forced him to find a middle ground since he thought it would take too long to mess with a precise dial in the heat of battle. During battle training, he had been forced to use only one tank no matter what, which was probably the only reason why that building was still mostly intact. With only one tank open, Katsuki pulled the pin on his left gauntlet. The explosion flung him backwards since he was still in the air. The villain was also shot backwards, the explosion burning him and ripping his clothes. Katsuki landed on his back near Ijiro, who ran over to help him. He tried to get up by pushing off the ground with his hands, but he fell back onto the ground. They were very numb with the feeling spreading up into his forearms by this point. He instead just sat up and accepted the fact that he was going to need help getting up. Ijiro did indeed help him up and Katsuki wiped off the sticky web onto his thicker pants and tank top. Feeling to his hand soon returned as they were given a moment to breathe. The two of them made their way to the newly flattened hill Katsuki had just created and saw the spear villain laying on the ground unconscious. "That'll teach Katsuki mumbled to himself. Ijiro picked up on it, but chose to not pry into whatever was troubling his partner. They still had to find and beat at least one other villain. "Hey," Ijiro broke the silence, "I think I saw where that last web came from." He lifted his hand and pointed. Katsuki looked in that direction and saw a small cliff face with a cave entrance carved into its side. A pair of 8 eyes glinted for a moment before disappearing back into the darkness. "So the spider made a den. Like hell, we're just gonna walk in there," Katsuki said with both anger and humor, a combination Ijiro had never heard before. They walked to the entrance and Katsuki pulled the spoon on his right gauntlet up, arming it for full power. He pointed it straight at the dark cave with a menacing smile. "Unless you want to be turned into paste by either my blast or the mountain falling, I would come out right now," Katsuki commanded as he rested his finger on the pin of his gauntlet. "Hey, you're not actually going to drop a mountain on someone, right?" Ijiro said nervously. A glance from Katsuki sent chills down his spine. He was dead serious. The nervous smile dropped off his face in an instant. The pleas that followed fell on seemingly deaf ears, with Katsuki continuing to threaten the cave and its occupant. Ijiro only stopped when he saw a white blur zoom past Katsuki. It was the paralyzing web. the explosive boy dodged, as if he was expecting it, and launched himself in the direction the shot came from. He found the villain who'd been harassing them trying to escape. An explosion that tore up some of the ground sent them flying into the air. Katsuki slammed them back to the ground, knocking them out. Amazing, was all Ijiro could muster up for the brilliant display of quirk control Katsuki had just demonstrated. No smart person would have only one entrance and exit to a room. You just wait until they try to surprise you and turn the tables on them, Katsuki explained, brimming with pride. Many more villains would try to beat the student duo, none would even come close. They even started to have fun toying with the helpless villains, throwing Ijiro like an explosive lawn dart. It was only when they heard a cry of pain that would stop their rampage. Katsuki would never forget the sound of his best friend wailing as his bones snapped like twigs. Denki screamed all the way from when he was surrounded by the black mist to when he had the wind knocked out of him by hitting the ship deck. Another resounding thud echoed across the ship. Kyoka only let out a short grunt when she landed. They were both lucky enough to land on the only solid ground in most of the zone. Bloodthirsty villains circled the two waiting for them to try and escape. "What the hell are we going to do?" Denki said in between sniffles. He was trying his best to look tough, or at least like he wasn't going to break down any second. Kyoka wasn't buying it. "Well, we have two options really," she surmised, "wait for rescue or try to get across the water and escape." "But there are villains down there," Denki pointed out the obvious. "Well, doesn't water conduct electricity well?" she asked with extreme sarcasm. "Oh, you're right." He ran over to the side of the boat and peered down. It was a decent fall, but a nice cannonball should do the trick. He backed up for a running start. "Wait. I didn't mean to fry yourself Aga dash." Denki was already leaping off the edge while she tried to plead. He hit the water in a sizable splash and the villain soon charged at him. "Take this, 13 million volts," he yelled as the water lit up a bright yellow. Sparks crackled and danced in the water and soon all of the villains in the water were unconscious. But so was Denki. Thankfully, he was still able to keep himself afloat in his brain-dead state. Kyoka threw a lifesaver ring and Denki grabbed it out of instinct. She reeled him in and pulled him up the side of the boat. She was going to give him one hell of an earful when he woke up. At least she wasn't electrocuted this time, too. They would remain there for the rest of the incident. Fumikage was used to darkness, so he embraced the black mist surrounding him and fell gracefully through the portal. He landed not so gracefully on the concrete of a rain-soaked sidewalk. Another thud was heard nearby with a quiet, almost inaudible, eep as well. Fumikage got to his feet and made his way over carefully. Koji was sitting on the ground trying to get his bearings when he found him. The timid boy's eyes filled with fear for a moment before relief that he wasn't alone set in. It was absolutely pouring in the area they had been dropped. The students made their way over to some shelter from the rain. In the first floor of this building, they began to formulate a plan. "Koda, are there any animals close by that you can talk to?" Fumikage asked. Koda shook his head, moving his arms in a way that said that there were only bugs in this area. "Can you not talk to them?" This question made Koji look uncomfortable. He slowly communicated that he could, but he was deathly afraid of bugs. Fumikage sighed. "Well, I can use my quirk for some light scouting. I don't know how easy he'll be to control in this darkness, however," he said while beginning to move towards the door. Koji stopped him before he made it all the way. He asked what he meant by how easy he'll be able to control in this darkness. "The more darkness envelopes me, the harder it becomes to keep Dark Shadow from going out of control." Koji still didn't fully get it. He asked why he was able to control him during battle training a few days ago. "Shinso was able to control him with his quirk. As soon as we were separated, I couldn't use Dark Shadow anymore." Koji did remember how Fumikage had seemingly given up after being separated from his partner. "We should try and find some light then," Koji signed. It would be easier said than done, however. The only sources of light were some dim street lights, only made dimmer by the torrential rain. The two students would tread carefully through the rain towards the exit. They spotted a few villains along the way, but a combination of the rain making it hard to hear and them both staying quiet allowed them to avoid all confrontation. It took some time, but they eventually made it to the exit. Unfortunately, there was a villain who seemed to be stationed at the exit to prevent their escape. There was no way around him if they wanted to leave through this exit. Going back and trying a different exit would only increase their chances of being discovered. It would be in their best interest to surprise this one villain and make an escape before the others can catch up. "Still no animals around, Koda?" Fumikage whispered. Koji was mildly startled from the first words they'd spoken since beginning their covert escape. They'd been using general and hand signals since then. Koji shook his head. Fumikage sighed, preparing himself for the struggle to come. He brought out Dark Shadow just to test the waters. His quirk's eyes flickered from yellow to red for a moment as he felt his control loosen, but it soon stabilized. He exhaled deeply. He could just barely maintain control here. The students crept as close as they dared to the villain. They had no exterior signs as to what their quirk was. It would be best if they were taken down as soon as possible. Just as HereToImagine prepared to strike, a deep rumble and shaking echoed across the zone. This prompted the villain to heighten his awareness, and by doing so he noticed the two crouched students and Dark Shadow. He pushed both his hands together and put in front of him, making a nozzle shape. HereToImagine jumped to his right, Koji jumped left, and Dark Shadow lunged forward. The villain shot a jet of water powerful enough to create deep gashes in the concrete at the rapidly approaching Dark Shadow. It forced the quirk back for a moment before he was able to land a decisive right swing. This knocked the villain into the door he was guarding. All this movement was too much for HereToImagine and Dark Shadow to handle, though. The quirk's eyes turned red and it began freaking out. The original plan was to slam the villain into and through the door, allowing light from outside to calm Dark Shadow. There wasn't enough force behind the actual attack to accomplish this goal. Dark Shadow began expanding, enveloping everything around him in darkness. If they couldn't get some light soon, HereToImagine worried that he would be taken by the encroaching darkness as well. Koji took shaking steps backwards away from the growing creature. It frightened him to no end. A dark claw slashed at him. He moved only on instinct, just barely getting out of the way. 3 thick, deep gouges were left in its wake. He would have been torn in half. HereToImagine struggled to move his body. A shaking jog was all he could manage. It felt like it was getting heavier with each step. He could feel the darkness growing over his legs, trying to prevent him from reaching the door. If he could open it, he could stop Dark Shadow's rampage. Another claw slashed out, this time at HereToImagine. He didn't have the strength to dodge on his own, so he dropped to the ground, letting gravity help him. He felt a few feathers from his head get torn away, followed quickly by a strong wind. Another close call. He got to his feet again and kept making his way to the door. He was sorry for putting Koji in this terrible situation. He should be able to control his own quirk better than this. Just a few more feet. The door was heavily dented from having the villain thrown into it. Said villain laid in a heap at the base of the door, completely unconscious. A small amount of light shone its way through cracks along the edge. HereToImagine felt the darkness shoot away from these thin beams of light. He threw himself against the door. It moved slightly, letting more light in. He did it again, and again, and again, until it fell open. Light poured in and Dark Shadow hissed in displeasure. He began to shrink in size until HereToImagine could pull him back in and fully regain control. He almost fell over from overexertion, but caught himself. He breathed heavily until he realized that Koji was still inside. He hoped his classmate was unharmed. He shakily made his way inside, pushing his body beyond what he thought capable. He found Koji making his way to the exit. He had found shelter from the rampaging Dark Shadow and hid until it was over. Koji helped HereToImagine walk back outside. Koji responded to every apology from his classmate by signing, "We both knew the risk. I'm just happy you're okay." Another massive rumble echoed from outside. When they made their way out, they saw the cause of it. 2 blurry masses slammed into each other at incredible speeds, kicking up massive amounts of wind and debris. The 2 students quickly made their way to cover to avoid other villains. They noted that the blurs had some color to them. One was a dark purple bordering black. The other was a mixture of yellow and white. Masahiro looked around at the landscape before him. There was a lot of debris scattered around. Most of it was buried under some dirt. He deduced that it was the landslide zone. He also quickly realized that he was alone. No one else had been warped anywhere near him. Hopefully that meant a lot of his classmates were able to avoid it altogether. Although Hagakure might be around here, he thought. She wasn't. Moving carefully, Masahiro made a game plan. He would need to just wait this all out. The debris provided adequate cover for him to avoid any possible threats. He wanted to try and exit his zone and make it back to the entrance, but something told him that it would be safer if he stayed and waited for help to arrive. Crouching behind cover, Masahiro found 2 villains wandering around. "That Misty guy said he'd teleport students out here for us to kill," one said. "Yeah, did they already fail?" the other replied. "Maybe they're hiding from us?" Masahiro didn't like the sound of that. "Maybe, but look around. There isn't much to hide behind." That's true. By this point the villains were only a few feet away from where Masahiro was hiding. He had started to hold his breath to avoid being heard. "This is so boring, holy shit," complained one of the villains. Masahiro didn't know if he wanted to make a sneak attack on them or not. "Come on, we haven't checked everywhere yet. Let's go over there." The 2 began to walk away and Masahiro was allowed to breathe again. By moving from cover to cover, he was able to completely avoid the detection of the villains around him. Eventually, they all gave up and left for other zones. How boring. Toru was genuinely afraid of the person in front of her. He wasn't a villain, though. Shoto had just frozen everything in his line of sight, including 6 villains up to their necks. He walked up to one in order to ask a simple question: "Why are you here?" It came out as cold as the ice they were encased in. We're here to kill All Might," the villain blurted out. Toru almost felt pity for them. Shoto rolled his eyes. "If you think you can kill that man, you're completely delusional." "No, we're not. We have this thing that will kill him." The villain became defensive. "Oh really?" Shoto held his right hand up to the villain's face. "Why don't you tell me about it then?" The villain shivered, not from the cold, but the threat just given to him. He's just a high school kid, a first year at that. How is he so terrifying? He internally screamed. Toru moved from her cover behind a wall into the open. Hey Todoroki, she called out to him. She didn't want to be turned into a popsicle by accident. Shoto turned around fast, pointing his right side at her, causing her to scream. He sighed. "Oh, it's you." "Why yeah," her classmate's words didn't put her at ease. She carefully approached, the icy floor causing her to lose her footing a little bit. "Watch my back for me while I interrogate this guy," Shoto commanded. Toru nodded even though he couldn't see it. Shoto turned back towards the villain. "Now, I think I asked you a question." In total, Shoto froze 17 villains making his way back to the plaza. If what they said was true, this creature they had cooked up was incredibly dangerous. He'd told Toru to just use her invisibility to get back to the entrance. It wasn't safe for her to come with him. The scream they heard only reinforced that point. This is bad, Momo thought to herself. She had just watched most of her class get swept away in a black mist, seemingly scattering them to the wind or worse. She dared not think of that. She would put her faith in them to survive this hell on their own. "Oh my, it seems many of you have avoided my first attack," Kurogiri said. There was seemingly no anger in his voice, as if he was simply doing his job as a taxi driver. "I wonder if you'll be able to avoid this one, too." Before the black mist could form a proper portal, it was SCKED away by 13. "Those two guys were right, it is stupid to talk about your plan in front of the enemy," commented Hanta. "I would hear their plan no matter where they said it," replied Mizo. "That trick won't work anymore," yelled 13. There was a lot of anger in her voice. Anger at the villain for attacking them and anger at herself for not being able to protect the students. She wouldn't let any harm come to anyone else. Any attempt to teleport was instantly neutralized by her quirk, Black Hole. Kurogiri became the tiniest bit frustrated at his consistent failings. He would need to come up with a plan. "We need to come up with a plan," said Tenya. He tried to keep his voice from being heard by the villain in front of him. Momo, Mina, Achiko, and Rikido all heard him. "While 13 distracts, one of us could make a break for it," Rikido gave an idea. A few of them nodded in agreement. Momo thought harder. "If we get too far out of 13's effective range, he'll be able to teleport us." This was a problem. They didn't know how Kurogiri's teleportation worked yet. If they did anything rash, they could be put in grave danger or worse. "We need to stay relatively close to 13. Could we get her to move with us?" This was Mina's idea. Not super complex, but it would require telling their teacher without alerting the villain. "A distraction," Okacho commented. "But who wants to be that distraction?" asked Momo, who glanced up at the small group. Just in the background, 13 was at a standstill. Neither her nor the villain could make a move yet. Hanta and Mizo were also near them. They had barely moved out of fear of getting teleported. Just the fact that they hadn't meant being near 13 was safe. Maybe they could use them to relay their plan. "I can distract him," said Momo. Her eyes flared with determination. "I can make things that'll help me, and I have some other ideas about the escape." Everyone leaned in closer. "Uraraka, can you make some of Ida's suit weightless?" Achiko nodded. Tenya opened his mouth to ask what this was about, but Momo continued, "Ida, we need the fastest person to get out of here and get help. Uraraka can help you get even faster. Do you think you can handle that?" "I think I can, though I must ask, how will 13 stay with me to prevent any portals from opening?" Momo shook her head with a slight smile. "The villain knows that we will try to use her as a safe zone. We can create a diversion by pretending to do the obvious, and when they're distracted, you get out of here." Tenya and the rest were amazed by her quick thinking. Momo amazed herself with her own confidence. She raised her hands to begin backtracking when Tenya spoke first. "I think that's a great plan, Yaoyorozu," he said. "Yeah, that's a great idea," Achiko also voiced her support. "Even if he does notice, we'll stop him in his tracks." Rikido punched his open palm. "Man, I wish I voted for you, Yaoyorozu," Mina cheered. Momo's confidence returned along with a smile. "Yeah, let's do this." Achiko lightened Tenya's suit and he prepared to move to the side. He needed to be far enough away when he began his dash, but not noticed when he split away from the main group. The group of students made their way towards 13. They all positioned themselves behind her. "What are you guys doing?" she asked in confusion. Momo went over to Hanta and Mizo and pulled them into the group, catching the two up to speed as well. Kurojire's eyes widened slightly at this development. He started to creep closer to the group and prepared to create portals. 13 heard the part where they would use her as a safe zone. Unfortunately, they couldn't risk telling her about how it was a diversion without Kurojire hearing. She agreed and they began moving to the side to circle the villain. Kurojire closed the gap to cut them off. "Do you really think I'm going to let you through?" he asked with a stale tone, but it was obviously sarcastic. The students and 13 stayed quiet. Momo prepared her gear. A portal opened to their left. 13 destroyed it. Several portals began opening up on all sides of them. 13 tried her best to get rid of them all, but two fully formed. One to the left and one behind. The group quickly dashed away as the portals grew to encompass them. "Glasses everyone!" Momo yelled. She and the rest of the students slapped a pair of specialized sunglasses on. 13's suit had a sun visor built in, just like a real spacesuit, so she used that. Momo pulled a pin and threw a flashbang at Kurojire. The villain opened a portal and teleported it away. However, he failed to notice the 3 other flashbangs the students had rolled towards him. They went off in a bright flash. The portals surrounding the students stopped growing. "Now!" Momo yelled again. She pulled out a net gun and fired at Kurojire. It wrapped around his real body and threw him off balance. Hanta shot multiple ropes of tape onto the villain's metal collar and stuck them to the floor. All the while, Tenya had his suit lightened and he got in a running stance. "Thank you everyone," he said before he took off in a dead sprint. 13 opened all of her finger covers, letting loose the full power of her quirk. Kurojire was heavily disoriented at this point, giving Tenya a very large head start. The portals around the students began to fade away. One more portal would begin opening though. It opened behind Kurojire where 13 not the students could see. He dropped to the ground once it fully formed. 13's quirk was redirected into the portal. A strong wind picked up behind the group. This was Kurojire's backup plan. "How does it feel to have your quirk used against you?" he asked, regaining his senses. 13 tried her best to get the students away from the portals around them. If they were there for any longer, her quirk would rip them to pieces. Hanta was able to get himself out by using more tape. Momo created a shield to protect herself, Mina, and Okacho, who were all nearby. 13 knocked over Rikido and Mizo, getting in between them and the portals. She was unable to deactivate her quirk in time, though. Her suit was shredded to pieces. She felt her skin was torn and she soon passed out from the pain. Everyone else only sustained minor injuries. "That's their teacher taken care of," Kurojire commented, as he began closing in on the students. It was only now that he noticed Tenya's absence. The villain turned towards the exit and saw him speeding straight at the door. "Should I stop to open it normally or do I have enough power to kick it in?" Tenya asked himself as he approached. A portal opened in front of him. He only had a second to react. Trying to avoid running straight into it, he threw himself to the side. He just barely missed. The portal didn't stop growing, though. Soon it would engulf him and this would all be for nothing. The students all saw this happening and knew they had to do something about it. Momo threw her remaining flashbang weakly at the distracted villain. It successfully went off, but blinded several students who had their protective glasses knocked off. One of the students who wasn't blinded was Rikido. He got up and charged at the disoriented villain. He threw a large left hook into the black mist where he thought the metal collar was. He made contact and felt the metal crack slightly. Kurojire grunted in pain and lashed out at his attacker, creating multiple portals around Rikido. Thankfully, the one closing in on Tenya faded. Hanta shot tape and Mina threw acid to try it fend off the villain. It worked as he became slightly distracted, giving Rikido enough time to barely make it away. Tenya kicked open the door, saying sorry as he did, and blasted down the street back towards the school. Kurojire realized that he had failed and sighed, "I must warn Tamura." He teleported away. The remaining students fell to the ground, mentally and physically exhausted. Momo began to apply as much medical aid to 13 as she could. Hanta also helped with his tape. The rest of the students couldn't do much to help. Mizo raised his head and several eyes and ears sprouted from his arms. "That villain is back in the central plaza," he reported. Achiko, Mina, and Rikido faced where their classmate was looking. "What the dash?" they all said simultaneously. There was another battle raging in the plaza. There was a beaked creature whose movements were too fast for them to follow, Kurojire, and another villain who was covered in what looked like hands. They also saw their teacher Deku, Midoriya, Azui, Tsuyu. The four of them said different names, but they all saw both people. Two of their classmates were in this battle, too. Izuku was fighting the beaked villains and Tsuyu looked to be supporting their homeroom teacher. As if this revelation wasn't overloading enough for them, a loud crash reverberated behind them. Thinking it was another villain, everyone turned ready to defend their wounded teacher. But it was the complete opposite. All Might was here and he wasn't smiling. The students were in shock, but it was out of joy and relief. They were safe now. The scream from Izuku behind them dispelled all of that in an instant. All Might rushed down the stairs to the plaza. Izuku and Tsuyu were the first to arrive. Wading through the water, they sat just on the edge of the central plaza and observed the current situation. Their teacher, Aizawa, was still in full hero mode, taking on villains left and right to stop them from getting close to the entrance. His presence down here meant that 13 was most certainly at the entrance defending against the misty villain. They saw the black mist swirling around, but could only hope that the hero could defeat them. The student's plan had been to see what was happening and act accordingly, at least that was what Izuku had told Tsuyu. He didn't like the slight lie he told, but he wouldn't force her to follow him. Truthfully, he wanted to help fight against the villains. There was a sense of duty inside him that would eat him alive if he didn't at least try. Something was wrong with Aizawa, though. Izuku saw that one of his arms hung limply next to him as he fought. Looking closer, he saw that there was a large patch of clothing and skin missing from his elbow. It was a nasty wound. Izuku hoped that the villain responsible for that damage had been defeated already. Slowly and quietly, they began to wade towards the entrance. Izuku kept a keen eye on his teacher and the two villains who just stood in the middle of the plaza. The one covered with hands gave Izuku a very bad feeling in his stomach. The other villain was huge, almost the size of All Might with muscles of a similar size as well. Tamura muttered to himself, scratching his neck violently. This pro-hero, Eraserhead, was tearing through his minions even with the decayed arm he'd given him. How cool, he thought to himself, as a creepy smile crept onto his face. A small splash nearby got his attention. The two students weren't quiet enough. Izuku and Tsuyu saw Tamura's head snap towards them and they locked eyes. Crimson red met viridescent green. The villain made his way over with long strides. It wasn't a run or even a fast walk, the strides for his normal walk were just unnaturally long. Izuku prepared to fight. Tsuyu was frozen, but mentally prepared to run. Well, what do we have here? Some of All Might's pride? Tamura's voice was scratching and unnerving to the students. His smile was just as unsettling. The villain continued, well, since he decided to not show up, I guess we'll have to settle for killing that instead. Time froze just before Tamura could reach Tsuyu's face. He was fast, but not fast enough. Izuku roared with rage, not only at the villain trying to hurt his classmate, but also at himself for putting her in this situation in the first place. He leapt out of the water and struck the outreached arm. He felt the bones fracture and break when time began to resume. Tamura was sent flying to the side from the blow. He screeched in pain, as his right arm was broken in multiple places. Aizawa heard the commotion and knocked out one more villain before making his way over to his students. What the hell are you two doing here? He sounded ungrateful for their current status of being not dead or too badly hurt, but he just wanted to make sure they stayed that way. Where they were right now was the worst place to ensure that. We were trying to get back to anywhere safe, but that villain saw us, Izuku partially lied. He got out of the water and crouched next to his teacher, who sighed at his response. Just get out of here now, Aizawa commanded. Izuku and Tsuyu nodded and began moving towards the entrance. At least Midoriya hurt their leader pretty badly, he tried to think on the bright side. Do you think that I'm the final boss, Eraserhead? Tamura spoke surprisingly calmly for how much pain he should be in. Get him, Nomu, and then the brat who hurt me. Izuku saw the large creature disappear and reappear next to his teacher, its arm pulled back ready to strike. Time froze once again and Izuku dashed over to push his teacher out of the way. He did so successfully, but he started to feel tingly. Overuse was beginning to set in. Nomu slapped the ground hard enough to crack and break apart the reinforced concrete. It was trying to pin Aizawa down. The teacher was both relieved and furious that Izuku had performed another save. He knew that he wouldn't have been able to dodge that attack by himself, but now Izuku was going to have to fight and Tsuyu was open. Fine, if he's going to keep getting in my way, just kill the brat. Bloodlust and rage oozed off of every word Tamura spoke. Izuku knew this was directed at him. Nomu fixed its dead eyes back on him and attacked again. Izuku teleported out of the way and tried to counterattack. He didn't expect to deal too much damage, but he felt his fist hit nothing. Nothing wasn't the right word, it was as if none of the force of his punch was transferred into Nomu. Its eyes found him again and the process repeated. Izuku didn't have enough time without a heroic boost to dodge and attack at the same time. He would need to wait for a proper opening if any of these attacks hit him. Aizawa was engaged in his own battle with Tamura. He was able to keep the dry hands of the villain away from him most of the time, using his quirk to make sure that he would start to decay again. Both of them were down an arm, though, so the battle was quite awkward and painful. Tsuyu sat in the water just off the edge of the plaza. She wanted to help, but also wanted to run. Her frozen state would be broken eventually. Trying to help his student in his mostly one-sided fight, Aizawa tried to erase the quirk of Nomu. It had no effect with it being just as fast and strong as before. He kept trying in the vain hope that maybe it was just a small difference that he couldn't detect that would eventually allow Izuku to escape or defeat the villain. However, splitting his attention like this would cause him to blink more often, much to Tamura's pleasure. The villain had figured out the pro-hero's weakness a while ago. It was how he landed his first decaying strike. Aizawa had just been doing a good job of not presenting this weakness so far, but now was his chance. The pro's hair dropped onto his shoulders when a cracked, dry hand reached out to grab his neck. It was too fast, too unnaturally long, he wouldn't be able to dodge it. Who the hell was this guy? Sharp pain shot through Tamura's broken arm as it was yanked backwards by something. He lost his balance and missed his attack, landing hard on his stomach. Tsuyu had grabbed the villain's arm with her tongue. She hopped out of the water towards Aizawa. "Thank you, Azui, but you should leave." Aizawa wanted it to sound like a command as a pro-hero and teacher, but it came out as a slight suggestion. Tsuyu shook her head. "The faster we take down this villain, the faster we can help Midoriya," she said. She still needed to repay the debt she was given when Izuku fought the two flame brothers alone earlier. Now was the perfect opportunity. Izuku teleported out of the way of another strike from Nomu. A few punches and kicks later, Nomu had found Izuku's position and launched another attack, which Izuku dodged again with time stop. It was a complete deadlock of a fight. He wanted to gamble with a time stop punch, but if it didn't work he would get hit. Any one of Nomu's attacks would render him unable to fight. For now he would continue to be patient and wait for an opening. Attack, dodge, counter, repeat. All the while, Izuku saw his teacher and Tsuyu engaged in a battle with Tamura. If he were there he could take that villain out in only a few seconds. But if he abandoned his fight here, Nomu would either kill him or someone else in the same amount of time. He was stalling, effectively. Even though it didn't feel like he was helping, he had given the others an opportunity to fight. Until Tamura yelled, "Nomu, get these BSTRDS away from me." Nomu vanished with incredible speed and lined up a swing that would hit both Aizawa and Tsuyu. Izuku had to get back into a fight with Nomu to continue his stalling. Tsuyu heard the command and immediately wrapped her tongue around her teacher and yanked them both to the ground. The wind from the attack blew them back multiple feet. They were lucky that Nomu had traveled so far to reach them. Izuku didn't think that he could force Nomu to fight him directly since he was nothing more than a nuisance to it. He would have to threaten his master to get its attention. "Hey!" he yelled. This caught Tamura's attention as he saw the student rapidly approaching. He didn't want his other arm broken, too. "Nomu," he commanded again. Nomu was on top of Izuku in an instant and they began their dangerous dance for a second round. Tsuyu and Aizawa got to their feet and stared down Tamura. "What do you think you'll accomplish here?" the teacher asked. He was just trying to stall for some time in order to get his students out of here. Maybe get some backup soon as well. "Didn't Kurogiri already explain this to you? We're here to kill All Might," Tamura spoke with obvious irritation. "But what good does it do to try and harm his students? You'll only get beaten faster and harder." Aizawa didn't taunt very often. It usually wasn't rational to make your opponent angry since it made them unpredictable. But if he was going to stall, engaging with words rather than fists would be smart since his arm was in immense pain by this point. As expected, this did increase Tamura's irritation even further. He looked like he was going to explode into an attack until, "Oh, you still think I'm the final boss here?" Tamura's excitement was palpable. A complete 180 in emotions. Aizawa absolutely did not like this. The situation only got worse when some black mist began to materialize next to Tamura. "Kurogiri, did you kill any of the kids up there?" he asked. Great tension filled the air. Aizawa didn't know if he could live with himself if he had let anyone die on his watch, again. 13 is unconscious and won't be interfering anymore. There was a student that managed to escape however. "I came to warn you that we should leave soon," Kurogiri spoke like a butler. Another complete 180 of Tamura's emotions ensued. "Are you kidding me? If you weren't our escape I would disintegrate you right here," he was said. Kurogiri didn't seem to be fazed by his aggression, though. "I doubt we will be able to take on All Might and the other heroes that he is sure to bring, especially with that broken arm," Kurogiri stated. Tamura began scratching at his neck incessantly. All the while, Aizawa and Tsuyu were left frozen. With another villain being introduced, they were both worried that it would be too much. Well, I guess you're right, it's game over. The heroes breathed a sigh of relief. It was short-lived. I do want to do one thing before we leave, however. What would that be, Tamura? I want to kill that DMN brat over there. He pointed at Izuku, who was counterattacking Nomu. A creepy grin spread across his face and he let out a disturbing chuckle. As you wish, Kurojairi agreed. This spurred Aizawa into action. He erased both of the villains' quirks and tried to engage them to stop whatever they were planning to do. Tsuyu followed soon after. She attempted to provide minor support to her teacher, but she was given very few opportunities, leaving her to just stand and reflect internally. Aizawa would get in a few good strikes against Tamura, but he couldn't land a single one against Kurojairi. All he hit was black mist. But he could only do this for so long, eventually he would have to blink. He yelled to warn Izuku of the incoming threat, Midoriya. Watch out for portals. He didn't know if his student heard him or not. He needed to focus on not blinking right now. With a quick left swing, he hit Tamura straight in the broken arm. It was an obvious weak spot that he kept aiming for. Tamura grew increasingly frustrated with his inability to defend properly. He lashed out in a fit of rage against Aizawa. He parried and avoided most of the attacks, only letting a few glancing blows get through. There was one attack though. It caught him in the right elbow. It hurt like hell. Aizawa was already squinting to avoid blinking, but this intense pain made him flinch too much. He was forced to blink. Just as this happened, Tamura disappeared with black mist obscuring his line of sight. Kurojairi hadn't engaged in actively fighting at all, only dodging when necessary. He'd been biding his time. When it faded, he wasn't looking at Tamura anymore, he was looking at Nomu. They had swapped places thanks to Kurojairi's portals. He had no time to dodge the incoming attack. Izuku was in another game of cat and mouse with Nomu. It would attack, he would dodge and counter, the same as before. No matter where he hit the thing, it wouldn't budge an inch. It was almost as if it was absorbing his attacks. He heard his teacher yell something to him just a bit after he re-engaged with Nomu. He glanced over and saw that Kurojairi had appeared down here with them. He couldn't think about what that meant for everyone at the entrance or himself, he needed to focus on dodging again. It was only when wisps of black mist began swirling around Nomu that he knew how much trouble Kurojairi brought with him. They had already been fighting a losing battle, but now they couldn't even delay until backup arrived. Nomu vanished in the mist and was replaced with Tamura, who looked surprised at this. They both looked back at the others. Izuku saw where Nomu had gone. Not caring about Tamura, who had just lunged at him, he began running towards his teacher. If he didn't get there? Just as Nomu's swing came flying at Aizawa's face, time froze. Izuku immediately knew this was a heroic boost, meaning he had been given a little more time to reach his teacher. However, he had already exhausted himself with his previous fights and had gone over his time limit twice, as well. This all meant that he did have enough time to push his teacher out of the way. But not enough to get out of the way himself. He felt his entire left side crumple in on itself. He heard bones snap like twigs and felt his muscles tear apart. He screamed, straining his vocal cords. As he flew backwards through the air, he suddenly came to a halt. He felt himself become wrapped in firm but gentle arms. Everything soon went black. All Might was finally here. I was too late, All Might said through gritted teeth. He held a limp Izuku in his arms. Even slight movements let him know that the young boy's body was in pieces. Directing his internal anger somewhere else, All Might glared at the three villains in front of him. Don't let that brat escape, Nomu, Tamura said in raspy tones. Nomu charged towards All Might. Holding Izuku meant All Might was unable to move quickly or counterattack. He took a punch directly in the jaw as he leapt backwards. Tsuyu began hopping her way over to All Might. Oh? Kurojairi questioned her decision to run. He tried to open a portal for her to fall into, but he couldn't. Aizawa was watching his every move. How are these DMN heroes blocking every attack I send at them? Tamura tore his skin on his neck. If only there wasn't anyone else here besides who I'm trying to kill. Then I would win. His signature smile grew across his dry, cracked face. All Might is preoccupied with saving the brat and Eraserhead can't erase Nomu's quirks, he thought. I've been thinking about this all wrong. This isn't an RPG, it's an RTS where I'm the player. As the pieces fell into place for Tamura, Tsuyu was able to get behind All Might near the staircase back to the entrance. I can take Midoriya, he yelled. All Might took another hit from Nomu. Quickly, he turned around and placed Izuku on the ground, taking multiple punches to his back. It hurt, but he could take it. Tsuyu picked up Izuku with her tongue as gently as she could and began to carry him back to the entrance. All Might couldn't turn back around yet, though. If he wanted to engage this villain with any advantage, he would need it to stop hitting him for a moment. When it did stop, he turned around fast enough to whip up a dust cloud. But the villain wasn't behind him. It was behind Izawa, who didn't even perceive it move behind him. This thing was too fast. All Might was off like a rocket, trying to stop the attack Izawa was blissfully unaware of. The strike would come to pass despite this effort. A hard punch straight to the unguarded back. It snapped. Izawa was sent flying forward. He landed hard, rolling a good distance before coming to a stop. Tamura approached the pro hero slowly. Nomu had engaged All Might again to stall for this moment. Izawa desperately tried to pick himself off the ground, but he couldn't. He wasn't that badly injured, though, right? He had plenty of stamina left thanks to adrenaline. It was his legs. They weren't moving. Where were his legs? Fear took hold of him as he looked over and saw that they were still there, he just couldn't feel them. Tamura grinned with a sick glee. I specifically commanded Nomu to paralyze you. After all, a dead hostage isn't useful to me. The fear broke through to Izawa's face. Tamura grabbed the back of his head and slammed him into the ground, shattering the yellow goggles he'd been wearing. Call this payback for the brat breaking my arm and saving you all those times before, the villain said as if he was talking to a toy. He placed himself in a position where he was pinning the hero down, but he couldn't be seen. He placed a hand on the ground and sure enough, his quirk was working perfectly. Hey All Might, he drones with a smile. Achiko was more than afraid, more than scared, more than frightened. She was terrified. Izuku was crushed by that thing. It was so fast. But now that All Might was down there, everything would be okay. Right? She battled her inner thoughts. The corners of her mind were telling her to just sit this one out, you would be useless anyways. She drowned them out by sprinting down the staircase. Uraraka? She heard several of her classmates call after her. Ignoring them, she pressed on towards Izuku. She saw All Might put him down and Tsuyu picked him up. He must be in so much pain. She made it as her classmate began walking to the stairs. Hey, let me help, she said, guiding him to the ground. Putting her 5 finger pads on him, he became weightless. The two of them began to carry him up the stairs. The sounds of battle and struggle began behind them again. Please be okay, Deku, she pleaded. His entire left side was purple. She could see obvious signs of internal bleeding, too. He wasn't going to last very long if he didn't get help soon. They were a few steps up when they heard a dry voice drone. Hey All Might, the sounds of battle stopped. This wasn't good. They both turned their heads to see what had happened. Their teacher was on the ground pinned underneath a villain. All Might stood to the side, fist raised ready to strike the creature in front of him. It looked like a freeze frame, everything was so still. Get off of him! All Might roared. He charged at Tamura, but was intercepted by Nomu. He couldn't make it to his colleague. This was a dangerous situation. You two, Tsuyu and Achiko both jumped at being called, bring that brat back down here. This wasn't a request. They knew that if they didn't, their teacher was going to die. All Might's eyes flashed with every conceivable emotion. They settled on determination. He struck at Nomu in an attempt to get past it. However, the feeling of concrete surrounded his knuckles. The punch had been sent through a portal, which the other end of was right next to Izawa's face. The next attempt won't be a close call, said Kurojairi from behind. All Might's face fell yet again. He wouldn't even be able to try to get past Nomu. The situation was hopeless. For now, they would have to play by the villain's demands. All Might nodded towards the two girls. They took shaking steps back down the stairs. Izuku groaned in his unconscious state, still aware of the immense pain from his injuries. He was laid down near Tamura and the girls backed away. Now, let me kill this brat and All Might and everyone else can walk away, Tamura said carefully. Like hell you're just gonna walk out of here. Backup is coming, right, All Might? Izawa spat out. Yes it is, All Might said this slightly less impactfully than how he normally speaks, you lot will not leave here except in cuffs. Is that so? Well then I'll make sure you won't leave unless it's in a body bag. Tamura's bloodlust flaked off like his dry skin. He picked Izuku up by his collar and held him like a trophy. Don't touch him! Achiko yelled. She tried to lunge forward, but was stopped by Tsuyu. Oh, is he your boyfriend or something? If you want to try and save him, be my guest, however Nomu has a knuckle with your name on it if you try. Tamura's grip shifted so that 4 of his fingers rested on the back of Izuku's neck. Only his pinky remained. Not another, not another, not another, not another, Izawa repeated in his mind over and over again until something inside him snapped. His elbow moved without him thinking about the consequences. He couldn't afford to think rationally anymore. It landed on Tamura's broken arm. The villain screamed like a child. His pinky fell onto Izuku's neck. But the boy did not decay. Tamura had lowered Izuku enough that Izawa was able to see the hand on his student's neck. "You're so cool, Eraserhead," the villain squealed in delight before smashing the hero's head into the ground. Aizawa didn't blink. Another slam, he didn't blink. Another. No blink. Everyone around the two were frozen by the sight. They expected Izuku to turn to dust with each slam, but it never happened. "Not another," Aizawa whispered weakly. He suddenly became very cold. Was he finally dead? No. Tamura had suddenly become encased in ice. "It seems I made it just in time," Shoto said. At the same time Kurojairi heard something from behind him. He was knocked to the floor by an explosion. "Don't you dare try and escape or I'll blast you to pieces," threatened Katsuki. "Man, I wasn't even able to make a cool entrance," whined Eijiro. The tables were turning once again. Shoto, Katsuki, and Eijiro all arrived on the battlefield in the nick of time. Tamura was now frozen up to his hands. The biting cold eventually caused him to lose grip on Izuku. The student fell onto the ground with a thud and a whimper. He also lost grip on Aizawa, so he wouldn't be decaying anyone for the time being. The teacher passed out before he even hit the ground, leaving the rest of the fighting to All Might and his students. Kurojairi was also disabled by Katsuki. Only Nomu was mobile, so now the villains were pinned. Tamura raged at this development, spitting nasty words and threats at the new arrivals and All Might. Most of it was incoherent, but one line cut through all the others. "I will kill all of you." Nomu continued to stand motionless, enabling All Might to get around it and recover both Izuku and Aizawa. He placed them a good distance away before returning to face Nomu again. Nomu barely budged with each attack, continuing to stand motionless. "Whatever this thing is, it seems to need orders to do anything," All Might hypothesized. Tamura was still angrily spewing insults and Kurojairi was going to be blown to pieces if he even twitched, so that left Nomu with no orders to follow. All Might continued to pummel it with little effect. "What the hell is this thing made of? He was specifically engineered to kill you, All Might." Tamura was finally finished with his childish tantrum. "He can absorb any attack you throw at him. Now fight back, Nomu." Nomu lurched forward, but fell over onto the ground. One of its legs had been frozen by Shoto, causing it to be ripped off when it attempted to move. All Might kicked the downed creature, successfully moving it a few feet along the shattered concrete. Suddenly, Nomu sprung back up with both legs intact. "What?" All Might yelled as he was smacked in the stomach. Tamura laughed. "I never said the shock absorption was his only quirk," he mocked. All Might gritted his teeth as he engaged in a head-on battle with a being specifically designed to kill him. Their fists clashed in massive explosions, kicking up a torrent of wind and debris around them. This wind was strong enough to begin cracking the ice that encased Tamura. The villain broke out in a flash and immediately went after Shoto, the closest student to him. Another wall of ice sprung out of the student's right side, but Tamura was able to extend his hand out in front of him. When the ice made contact it started to decay, allowing him to quickly break out. Shoto made a bigger wall of ice, but it too was ineffective at trapping Tamura. There was still a sizable amount of ice, though, so it was going to be some time before the villain emerged again. Katsuki stared at his best friend's limp body across the plaza. Never in his life had he wanted to go somewhere so badly. But he couldn't just leave Kurojairi. "Hey Kirishima," he said with caution, "help the girls over there to get Izuku and Aizawa out of here." Eijiro looked over to see Achiko and Tsuyu standing frozen in place. They were most likely still in shock from what had just occurred. "Yeah, I'll go wake them up," he said, trying to keep a smile and positive attitude during the situation. All Might and Nomu were fighting off in the distance, so it was somewhat safe for him to move across the plaza. Eijiro made it over and tapped the girls on their shoulders. "Wah!" exclaimed a shocked Achiko. "Kero." Tsuyu was equally as surprised. "Hey guys, can you help me carry these two up to the entrance?" Eijiro said, making his way over to the heavily injured student and teacher. Neither of the girls said anything, but they slowly began making their way over, too. Achiko picked up Izuku all on her own thanks to her quirk. She muttered apologies to him even though she didn't think he could hear them. Tsuyu and Eijiro lifted Aizawa off the ground, one under his arms, the other carrying his legs. Unlike Izuku, their teacher didn't have nearly as many broken bones, so they could afford to be a little bit rougher with him. "Why was I useless again?" Achiko asked quietly. It was just another one of her many small statements, but Eijiro didn't like the sound of this one in particular. "You aren't useless, Uraraka. If you weren't here, we wouldn't be able to properly carry him," Eijiro said with kindness. Tsuyu nodded to this. Even though giving Midoriya to the villains was a good idea, it was probably the only option we had. Aizawa would have died if we didn't and we would be next. The ends don't justify the means. Achiko wasn't in the mood to be cheered up. The others stopped talking and they silently carried the injured up the stairs to the entrance. All Might and Nomu continued to battle it out, neither being able to land a substantial blow to the other. Don't blame. Yura, Raka, a quiet voice was heard by all three students. They looked over and saw that Izuku's eyes had opened and he was speaking. Deku! Midoriya! They all screamed his name. Achiko had to hold herself back from hugging him. Honestly, they all had to stop themselves from doing that. Hey, can you put me down? It's kind of uncomfortable, floating like this. Although they were only about halfway up the stairs, they put Izuku and Aizawa down gently. Get Yaoyorozu and Shiro, Kirishima, asked Achiko. They can give us some supplies to help Izuku and Aizawa. Alright. Ijiro was pumped to find out that there was something they could do for their injured friend and teacher. He ran up the stairs to get some help. You shouldn't be talking. One of your lungs has probably collapsed, Tsuyu commented. Yeah, and don't even think about trying to move, Achiko almost threatened. Yeah, Izuku wheezed out. He was in immense pain, so talking and moving definitely hurt too much. Ijiro would be back soon, so hopefully he wouldn't be in pain much longer. Tamura was said. This icy brat just kept putting up bigger and bigger walls. It was getting tiring to tear them all down. He had the right to destroy what he hated, so that was what he was going to do. He was going to destroy every hero, be it pro or student wannabe, in his path. When his hand came into contact with the next ice wall, he felt different. From his fingertips all the way to his forearms, there was a tingling sensation. A sensation of growth. Instead of slowly cracking and shattering, the ice broke apart nearly instantly. He swung his arms in front of himself like a madman, disintegrating every piece of ice in his path. The massive commotion caught Shoto's attention. He turned towards it and saw a wave of decay encompass the entire icy structure, as it turned to dust. Tamura stood in the middle of it, smiling his creepy, gleeful smile. The villain's hands twitched and he shot off after the student. Shoto fired another ice wall of ice. It decayed in under a few seconds. Another wall. It decayed faster. Another. Faster still. Soon, Tamura was actually gaining ground on Shoto, decaying the ice faster than it could be made. Shoto also felt himself start to seize up from the cold. He wouldn't be able to keep this up for much longer. The thought of using his fire to warm up flashed through his mind. No, he told himself, I'll win without using his power. I don't need it to be a great hero. He needed a new plan. Tamura was only a couple dozen feet away from Shoto by this point and approaching rapidly. The villain would be on top of him in the next 10 seconds, maximum. He could hear the sick giggling now, coming from that cracked and dried mouth. He didn't want to even imagine what thoughts could be provoking that action. I'll throw off his footing, an idea popped into his head. The student covered the ground in a thin layer of ice. He could traverse it no problem, but the villain might have some troubles. It was true, as Tamura began slipping around and ended up falling down. He picked himself back up, still giggling away, and a wave of decay shot out from under his fingertips. It raced along the icy surface of the ground until it was only a few feet away from Shoto's shoes and thankfully stopped. The villain stared at him with crimson eyes, burrowing deep into his own. It was the most intense staring contest of his life. Suddenly, Tamura turned. Shoto also turned, following the villain's gaze and saw what he was fixated on. Katsuki had begun to move Kurogyri up the stairs toward the exit. Don't even think about looking back to help your friends, Katsuki snarled at his prisoner. He had begun to move the villain so he would be less of a threat to everyone else. Even though he was sure of his absolute dominance and control over his prisoner, it would still be a good idea to move him somewhere less dangerous. Just in case. Fast footstep approached him from behind. He swung around and readied his aim at the figure approaching. It was Tamura with Shoto in hot pursuit. However, every single ice blast fired at the villain by Shoto turned to dust in mere moments, and any attempt to trip him up with an icy ground was shortly turned to dust as well. I'm sorry, Shoto spoke words he didn't even know he had in him. He felt so powerless. If only he would use? No. He didn't need it. He didn't need it. Tamura would soon close into Katsuki's firing range. Making sure Kurogyri was going to try anything, he fired at the incoming villain. It did little to dissuade him. Katsuki fired an even bigger blast, successfully pushing Tamura back. But he regained his footing and charged in even faster. Katsuki decided he had no choice. He reached up to his gauntlet and pulled the pin. It was set for a full 2-tank blast. Tamura wouldn't be so quick to get up this time. But a black portal opened in front of him. DMN it, he screamed at himself. He had been forced to remove his hand from Kurogyri to pull the firing pin, and the villain had used that small amount of time to divert his attack. The explosion went off somewhere off in the distance. When he turned to blast Kurogyri back into SBMSN, the villain was no longer at his feet. He had slipped away too fast. Whoa there, Tamura exclaimed, you could kill me with that. A kid like you shouldn't have something like that. Flipping around once more, Katsuki saw the hand of Tamura reach out and grab one of his gauntlets, decaying it to dust instantly. He swung his other gauntlet around and fired a full blast at the villain. But the blast was diverted again. Now he would have to wait for it to recharge. He shot away like a rocket, propelled by his own explosions. Man, I don't think that I can catch him when he can fly, but I know who can. Kurogyri, bring Nomu back over. Katsuki heard this and immediately went on high alert. He began to move around at random and got ready to use his full power without the aid of his gauntlets. His flight wasn't infinite, though, and he was soon forced to ground himself or risk losing control. He continued to look around him, seeing Izuku, Aizawa, Ochiko, Tsuyu, and the returning Ijiro some stairs up. But after a few seconds, a massive black portal opened right on top of him. Nomu shot through like a rocket with its fist already pulled back to strike. It was too fast for him to move. He still attempted in vain, but the attack crept closer and closer. Time slowed down as he neared his imminent demise. Time slowed to a stop around Izuku, though. A luxury that only he had access to. Something that he needed to use right now to save his best friend. He judged that it was a heroic boost, since he hadn't consciously stopped time. This meant he had extra time to get to Katsuki. The injured boy tried to get up, but only ended up falling down several steps. Each bump sent waves of incredible pain through his whole body. It was like he was burning from the inside. Still though, he pushed himself to crawl down the stairs. As he got closer and closer, an intrusive image forced its way into his mind. It was Katsuki on the day Izuku got his quirk. He reached out towards his best friend as a car sped towards him. This rescue had been successful in reality, but this image showed a much more grim scene. Katsuki was turned to paste by the speeding car. Izuku had let him die. Nomu was the car. Izuku couldn't save him. Time began to resume as he felt his consciousness begin to fade like it had before. Nomu's punch inched forward, as if reality wanted him to see his gruesome dream become reality. But the punch never connected. Something had moved Katsuki out of the way. Just as his vision fully faded into darkness, Izuku looked over and saw All Might holding Katsuki the same way he had Izuku only a few short minutes ago. Unlike Izuku though, Katsuki was untouched by Nomu. I will not let that creature touch another one of my students ever again, the pro-hero bellowed. He had followed Nomu through the portal just before it closed, and by pure emotional drive had prevented Katsuki's certain death. Ochiko and Ijiro all ran down to the limp Izuku and immediately began rendering first aid to the even more badly injured boy. Tsuyu stayed with Aizawa and began her own first aid. Tamura began to cackle, "Ahahaha, oh Mr. Symbol of Peace, you can barely even keep up with Nomu. Your energy won't be able to last nearly as long as our creations. It is only a matter of time before I kill everyone here," he spoke maniacally, punctuating every sinister word with his intense bloodlust. "Well then, guess I'll just have to finish it now," All Might extended his counter-argument. "What?" Tamura was in disbelief. "Have you not been listening to a single word I've said to you? You can't just beat him by saying you will. Nomu is stronger, faster, more durable, and has more stamina compared to you. You will die by its hand, All Might." This rebuttal did little to shake the pro-hero. In fact, All Might's signature smile grew onto his face. "Yes, all of what you've said so far is true. But your creation is missing one key thing to defeat me. And what would that be? Emotion. It can't feel the desperation to save his friends. It can't understand how everyone around needs it to win right now. And it most certainly cannot even begin to dig deep into itself to go beyond its limits." All Might exclaimed his final words to the villains and engaged with Nomu for one last time. Punch after punch the two fought viscously. Even though they had done this before, All Might now had a new understanding of how Nomu worked. The shock absorption was only that, absorption, not nullification, meaning that it had to have a limit. All he needed to do was find it. He pushed himself harder and began to feel his blows push the creature back. Slowly, he overwhelmed Nomu until he was able to launch it across the entire USJ. You may have heard these words before, villains. All Might slammed Nomu into the ground, creating a massive shockwave. But today, I will change what they mean to you. Landing next to it, he wound up his final, finishing punch. Go beyond. The punch hit with a massive shockwave. Plus ultra. Nomu flew upwards and crashed through the roof of USJ. It continued to sail into the sky where it broke apart clouds and eventually vanished from sight. The fight was finally finished, with All Might being the winner. He stood proud as all the students watched in awe at the display of power. But the incident was not over, just yet. You cheated. Tamura tore at the skin on his neck. There is no way you beat Nomu with stupid emotions. You did something, or did that brat do something to Nomu when they were fighting? He was absolutely furious, scratching until he bled. Sensei lied. He's not weaker. Hold on a second, Kurojiiri tried to calm the raging villain next to him, we may still have a shot at All Might. Tamura stopped gouging his neck and looked in the direction of the pro-hero. All Might slowly walked towards them, taking large but careful steps. Steam enveloped him as he approached. All Might was nearing his time limit. He knew that if he moved too suddenly, he might drop out of his buff form and be completely defenseless. Thankfully, the villains had no idea. Oh yes, by all means give me your best shot. I'll be sure to let you meet Nomu on your way up. A complete bluff, but it sounded convincing enough. The villain duo continued to watch All Might as he got closer. Katsuki had helped move Izuku back up the stairs with Achiko and Ijiro. Shoto would soon join them, as he had made a long loop around the villains. They were safe for now. Look there, don't you see the shaking? Kurojiiri directed Tamura's gaze to All Might's limbs. They were indeed shaking from overexertion. It had taken everything he had and more to knock Nomu away like that. So, it looks like we still have a shot, Tamura said. He crouched before breaking into a sprint. Kurojiiri followed suit, creating a massive amount of black mist. Holy sheet, they are really trying it. All Might was in disbelief. He was sure his bluff would be enough to hold them off for a bit, but they had just charged right in. Backup still wasn't here, so he was on his own. Arms raised in a defensive posture, he prepared to fight with what little he had. Every student watched as the villains closed in on All Might, but in their eyes he was fine. He was going to blast them apart. Only the heavily injured 13 and unconscious Izuku and Aizawa knew how bad the situation really was. The two villains got closer and closer. Tamura stretched one of his arms out and prepared to strike. He didn't reach for All Might, though. Instead, he jumped into Kurojiiri's mist and reappeared on All Might's left side through a portal. He lashed out and gripped the hero's left arm and... no decay. All Might threw him off and he landed a few feet away. Kurojiiri attempted to open another portal, but he couldn't. Aizawa had awakened. His left eye was nearly swollen shut, but he could see the villains through a tiny slit. They were under the effect of his quirk. All Might had just barely survived. A gunshot rang out across the USJ. A bullet hole opened up on Tamura's right shoulder, knocking him to the ground again. Everyone looked to the entrance where the shot had originated. Sorry we're late everyone. Principal Nizu's voice yelled. The cavalry was here. Tamura attempted to get up again, but he was struck by more bullets. Kurojiiri found that his quirk was working again. Aizawa had closed his eyes again. He surrounded Tamura with black mist and created a portal for them to leave through. I will destroy you, All Might. Tamura's voice shrieked as he and Kurojiiri warped away. Any remaining villains were soon apprehended. It was over. Izuku woke up in a hospital bed. It wasn't a familiar place, but he'd been there before. He recalled the events that had led up to this point. The battle with Nomu. Getting hit. His bones snapping like twigs. Katsuki just barely avoided getting crushed by Nomu thanks to All Might. It all flashed through his head. He looked around him and saw All Might next to him. He had reverted to his skinny form and was staring at the ceiling covered in bandages. A distant look was in his eyes, as if he was regretting something. Hey, All Might, it still hurt to talk, but not as much as before. All Might immediately swung his head to the side. He stared at Izuku in surprise. Whoa, you're awake, he said. Yeah, I am. How are you feeling, young Midoriya? The concern in his mentor's voice was strong. Izuku's face softened dramatically. I'm fine, that wasn't necessarily true, but he believed he would be fine in due time. I gave you to the villains, All Might confessed. Izuku didn't understand. What do you mean All Might? The villains asked for you to be given to them, I gave you to them. Izuku was shocked. Had All Might really given him to the villains because they just asked? The hero continued, I am not proud of my actions. In fact, I deeply regret them. I thought they were the only way to stall the villains further. But, why? Why All Might? Izuku raised his voice and sent himself into a coughing fit. It was very painful. All Might tried to help him calm down. Recovery Girl was tending to other injured people at the time, so she wasn't there to help. They had Aizawa as a hostage. He was going to die if I didn't hand you over. I didn't want my inaction to cause some to die. So you would rather your actions cause me to die? Izuku was furious. All Might's expression continued to fall further and further into despair. I didn't want to, young Midoriya. The only reason I did was to give everyone time to figure a way out of that situation, and we did. All Might's voice fell off at the end. Something was wrong. That still doesn't mean that it's okay. Izuku settled down. His voice and body hurt too much to be in an argument right now. Besides you, no other students had any serious injuries. Just cuts and scrapes. But All Might should have been relieved by what he was saying, but he was still tensed up. What happened? Izuku was concerned. 13 suffered severe lacerations to her side and back, but she'll make a full recovery in due time. Izuku nodded his head and All Might continued, Aizawa wasn't so lucky. Recovery girl says he will never be able to walk again. The meaning of those words settled into Izuku's psyche. Aizawa was paralyzed? Their teacher? The pro-hero Eraserhead would never walk or fight again. What are you talking about, All Might? There's no way. Izuku was interrupted. Unfortunately, it's true, young man. Recovery girl entered the room and sat on her stool. Izuku stared at her with begging eyes. Please tell him it wasn't true. That there was some chance of him recovering, even just the slightest. We are looking into support items that would help his condition, but his legs will never move on their own. His spine was severed just above his waist. Don't blame yourselves, you two, both of you tried your best to stop this. Just as the words left her mouth, another person walked through the door. Atsukachi, welcome back. The man nodded. Wait, is it okay for him to see you like this? Izuku asked. Yes, he's my best friend in the police force, All Might reassured him. Did you find Nomu yet? Yes, we did. It was completely unresponsive, just like you said it would be, Tsukachi responded. All Might rested back against the bed. Then the rest of my assumptions are probably also true. It does seem like this thing was almost manufactured. We need to do DNA testing to be sure, though. Tsukachi tried to ease All Might's nerves, but it didn't work very well. How could he have started moving? I killed him with my own 2 fists, All Might thought to himself. Tamura landed in a heap on the cold bar floor. Kurogyri stood next to him as blood covered the area around them. DMN it. We were so close. If only those brats and Eraserhead would have stayed out of it. Tamura was enraged at his failure. Now, Tamura, a voice spoke through a TV on the other side of the room. It is okay to fail. That is why I am here. What should I do, sensei? Whatever you want. I will help you get back to your feet and provide you with the tools necessary to achieve your goals. The voice was so calming. It was as if it soothed your soul just by hearing it. My goals? Tamura thought back on the events that had just transpired. My goal is to kill All Might, but I think I could add a few names to that list. Even bleeding on the floor in massive pain wasn't enough to stop him from smiling. Izuku awoke to his alarm clock buzzing away. Normally, he wouldn't have enjoyed that sound, but he hadn't heard it in 3 nights. It was honestly music to his ears. He finally felt like everything was returning to normal. He turned the alarm off and got out of bed. It was a school day, the first day back since the USJ incident as the news dubbed it. Izuku, 13, and All Might were all seriously injured, but made a full recovery thanks to rapid medical treatment and recovery girl. Aizawa, on the other hand, was going to be paralyzed from the waist down for the rest of his life. Most of the class had visited their teacher in the hospital to see how he was doing. Izuku was unable to due to his own hospitalization, but from texts with Katsuki, Achiko, and Tenya he learned that Aizawa was doing okay and was handling everything well. That was good to hear. There were a few other repercussions for Izuku and All Might, though. All Might pushed himself to his limits and beyond in his fight with Nomu. This meant that his time limit was reduced to only around an hour and a half. Izuku got off a little easier. His left side was now substantially weaker than his right along with some nasty scarring. He also needed to go to physical therapy twice a week for his injuries. The duration that he could use time stop was also reduced back to 1/5 of a second. At least he was still alive. All of his injuries were worth it in his eyes. School started in an hour, so Izuku sat back and chilled on his couch. He winced in pain as his left side sent a shock through his body. His injuries weren't completely healed yet, in fact he probably shouldn't even go to school this soon. Izuku shrugged to himself, completely dismissing that thought. Him not going to the best hero school just because he was a little hurt? That was ridiculous. There were people who would give limbs to go to UA, let alone have minor pains. Izuku Midoriya walked in a few minutes later. Hey Izuku, sweetie, she spoke quietly. The incident had shaken her pretty badly. It was an even more extreme feeling of how she felt when Izuku had first gotten his quirk. Should she be proud of her son's heroics, angry that he almost died, happy that he was still alive, or just let it go? Hey mom, you feeling better today? Izuku had been concerned about his mother's health ever since he had gotten out of the hospital. Even in the hospital he worried about her. Unfortunately, these kinds of things just happened. I hope my mom won't stress about it too much, he had thought. Yeah, I'm feeling fine. Still just shaken up, you know? His mom did look a little better, but not by a lot, and I'm happy that you're still here. Inko settled on the happy emotion. Don't worry mom, I'll always be here for you. Izuku was sincere. He would fully support her emotionally. They hugged for a bit and were eventually split when Izuku had to leave for school. As he ran out the door, his mom called out to him one more time, don't go 2+ Ultra now. Izuku smiled. "I won't, Mom," he yelled back before running off to school. Izuku walked into Class 1A a little later than he would have normally. It wasn't easy to get ready with his injuries. Katsuki was already there, along with most of the class. As soon as he walked in, they all turned and locked eyes with him. Izuku had to be sure he hadn't stopped time, everything was so still. Good morning, he tried to sound unperturbed, but he was very uncomfortable with being stared at like this. Suddenly, they all sprang up and ran over to him. Izuku yelped from surprise as he was soon surrounded by most of his entire class. "Are you okay? How's your arm? Does anything still hurt?" "Thank you." Questions and thank yous bombarded the poor boy until he just shouted, "I'm fine, thank you everyone." This snapped everyone out of their frenzy and they all slowly backed away. Everyone except for Katsuki and Achiko. "I'm so glad you're okay, Deku." Achiko sounded so sad it broke every heart in the classroom. "I'm fine, just a little residual pain is all," Izuku reassured her of his state. This seemed to make her feel a little better. Achiko once again had to resist the urge to hug him. It probably wouldn't hurt him very much, but the entire class was watching. Maybe later? She split from the small group. Izuku made his way over to his desk with Katsuki following close behind. Their desks were next to each other, but Izuku knew something was on his best friend's mind. He looked so deep in thought. They both sat down without a word. As the time got closer and closer to class starting, the class resumed their usual chatter. It was a sound Izuku enjoyed greatly. A feeling of normality washed over him again. A few more students walked in after Izuku and asked if he was alright. He said he was fine to each of them. Denki was the latest, only a couple seconds from class starting. Kyoka gave him an earful for the stunt he pulled during their own fight. He apologized. A squeak of metal from outside the classroom cut through the noise. A few of the students had heard it before, but for many this was new. It got closer and eventually, the source made its way into the classroom. Aizawa rolled in with a wheelchair and a heavily bandaged face. "Whoa!" Exclamations went up from nearly every student. Some were surprised by the wheelchair, some were worried about his injuries, and others. "Mr. Aizawa, is it okay for you to be here, sir?" Tenya yelled his concerns out loud. The rest of the students murmured their agreements. "Yes it is, Ida," Aizawa answered the question very plainly. "I do have a few announcements before we get to the main part of homeroom today." No one liked the sound of that. First off, yes, I am paralyzed from the waist down. I will not walk without help ever again. A few students winced at this. They didn't know how bad it truly was or were still in the denial phase. On a brighter note, I've been in contact with multiple support agencies to get an item that could allow me to walk again. I will also continue to be your homeroom teacher here at UA even though my pro-hero duties are suspended for now. Second of all, everyone else who was injured is expected to make a full recovery, he said as he made eye contact with Izuku. Achiko was overjoyed to hear that 13 would be fine. Around 70 villains were apprehended along with the Nomu creature, however the two main villains escaped. Aizawa's expression soured. He felt personally responsible for letting them go. Had he been able to keep his eyes open for a few more seconds, they would have probably been caught. Third, I am very proud of all of you for showing your ability to defend yourselves in a crisis situation. I'm sure that you all are going to become great heroes in the future. This lightened the mood in the room significantly. The students also saw, for the first time, a hint of a smile underneath the bandaging on their homeroom teacher's face. Lastly, as most of you know, the UA Sports Festival is coming up. I will be passing out forms in a bit for you to sign up for it. It is held annually, so you only get 3 shots in the spotlight. Make them count. With that last remark, Aizawa grabbed a stack of papers and began to roll his way around the room. Is it really safe to have the sports festival after what just happened? Tenya thought out loud. Several students picked up on his concerns. Yeah. Should we really have an event so soon after we were just attacked? Denki spoke up the loudest. Kyoka stabbed him with a jack. Ow, I said I was sorry. I understand your concerns. I have them myself, Aizawa said as he continued to pass papers out. However, UA says that it is important to show strength in times such as these. So it will continue, although with much higher security compared to previous years. Isn't that disrespectful to those who were injured? Achiko asked, glancing between Aizawa and Izuku. Another valid concern that I agree with. But according to them, since the sports festival is in 2 weeks, that is enough time for everything to return to normal. Achiko slumped back in her chair. The people making this decision obviously didn't know anyone who was hurt. She glanced at Izuku again. Aizawa continued to pass papers out, but when he arrived at Izuku's seat he instead spoke to him, "Come outside with me in a moment." It was actually a little scary to hear that. Was he in trouble? Aizawa carried on without giving him a form. He finished soon after and began making his way to the door. Izuku stood up and proceeded to leave the classroom with his teacher. His mind ran wild with the possibilities as to why he was being called out here. His answer would come soon enough. Midoriya, you don't have to enter the sports festival, Aizawa said with a solemn expression and tone of voice. This was not what Izuku was expecting. Do you mean I'm not allowed to participate? He questioned. No, but due to the extent of your injuries I just wanted to talk to you personally about it. Well, I'm going to do it, injured or not. Izuku's resolve was strong. Aizawa sighed. I thought so. Aizawa didn't seem disappointed in his decision. I also just wanted to talk to you about your actions during the USJ incident. And here it comes. Izuku braced himself for a harsh verbal lashing about his actions. Even though he believed his actions were in the right, there was something telling him that he shouldn't have been there at all. That he was being reckless and had endangered others with his actions. He tried his best to ignore it, but it always ate away at his conscience. Aizawa bowed in his wheelchair to his student. I am deeply grateful for your support against Nomu. Without it I doubt I would have survived. Again, this was not what Izuku was expecting. And no, thank you, sir. You protected me as well. Izuku bowed deeply. I assume you were expecting me to criticize you. I should, as a teacher and a pro, but I owe you my life. That will be left to a later date. For now, you should hold your head high as you go into the sports festival and show the world what an amazing hero you can be. These words made Izuku raise his head to look at his teacher. Aizawa's smile was no longer a hint like before, it was very clear even under all of the bandages. Izuku smiled back. I'll do my best, sir. All right, take the form and fill it out back in the classroom. Aizawa handed Izuku the sports festival form. I'm also going to talk to many of the other students, as well. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them, too. It was very rare for Aizawa to allow himself to be vulnerable like this, but he felt that it was necessary to express how thankful he was that he was still alive. He didn't want the students to be upset or angry at themselves because he was paralyzed. They saved my life, too. I gotta thank them as well. Izuku decided on his social plans for the rest of the school day. That's a rational idea, Midoriya. Don't train too hard for the sports festival so you hurt yourself, and don't let your heroic instincts get you in trouble. Yes, sir. Aizawa immediately turned around and began rolling away. He really needed a nap. Izuku went back into the classroom and filled out the form, admitting himself into the sports festival. Everything else up until lunch was normal. It was a nice change of pace from a hospital room in Izuku's eyes. There were still weird happenings, though. Mainly how Katsuki was silent except for a few choice glances at Izuku. Something was wrong. The group of Izuku, Achiko, Tenya, Katsuki, and Momo all sat at their usual table. There was some tension in the air, centering around Izuku's injuries. Are you really okay? Momo broke the silence. She directed this question at Izuku, who looked at her with a slight smile. The class president needs to act tough in front of the class, right? He indirectly answered. The looks he got in return were screaming that he elaborated further. He sighed. I'm fine, you guys. My left side hurts sometimes and my quirk is a little stunted for the time being, but I'll get better. You don't need to worry about me. This was a more reasonable response. We can't help but worry about you, Deku, Achiko said. You almost died, Tenya added. I don't know what I would have done if that had happened. He trailed off, thinking about the possibility of losing someone close to him like that. But I'm fine. We need to worry more about the upcoming sports festival than dwell on the past. You don't get it, Katsuki thought to himself. You know, I really should be thanking you guys. Without any of your help I would have died. Izuku tried to change the topic. Achiko suddenly looked incredibly bummed out. I didn't save you, she quietly whimpered. I gave you to the villains. I put you back in danger just after you'd been taken out of it. She steadily raised her voice as she spoke. A deep frustration and regret with herself was clear in the words. If you didn't, Mr. Aizawa would be dead and it was All Might that told you to do it. Izuku expressed disdain for his idol for the first time in his life. You've already told me that. Everyone had already told me that. If it's supposed to help, then why isn't it? Everyone at the table became very sad with those words. This topic change had been a bad one. A few tables away, Ijiro sensed this sudden drop in emotions and got up. He grabbed Tsuyu on his way over. Hey guys, he greeted the depressed table with the biggest smile he could. Hello everyone. Tsuyu couldn't match the same level of positive energy that Kirishima had, but she could still help. Hey Tsuyu, how are you doing? Izuku asked. I've been doing good, she said normally. Hey Bakugu, you okay over there? Ijiro questioned. Katsuki hadn't moved a muscle since he'd sat down. His food was getting cold. I'm fine, he answered. It was the same kind of response Izuku had given earlier. Everyone wanted to ask him if he was truly fine, but they also didn't want to risk getting their heads blown off. I saw that you guys were kinda gloomy over here. Ijiro gave an honest explanation for his sudden intrusion. He tried his best to ignore Katsuki's lack of emotion. Let's talk about something more exciting, like the sports festival. What do you guys think they're gonna do this year? The group couldn't help but become a little happier. Ijiro's attitude was infectious to the core. Lunch soon came to an end with everyone significantly happier than how they entered thanks to the intervention from Ijiro and Tsuyu. Izuku was the last to get up and leave, insisting that he should always be the last out of a room as the class president. A familiar purple-haired boy took this opportunity to approach him. "Hey Izuku, how've you been doing?" he said with a hand rubbing his neck. It was obvious that he was anxious about seeing his friend again. "Oh, hey Hitoshi. I'm doing fine, how about you?" Izuku struck a ridiculous pose to emphasize his bluff. Unfortunately he was forced to flinch a tiny bit due to the sharp pain from moving that fast. "You don't look that fine, but at least you're in high spirits." Hitoshi continues to rub the back of his neck. Another person around Izuku was acting odd. "Well, I don't want people to worry about me too much. I can take care of myself for the time being." It wasn't an amazing explanation, but it was good enough. Hitoshi sighed and dropped his hand back down to his side. "You really scared me, you know? Hearing that you were in critical condition was not what I was expecting last Thursday. Sorry, I'll try not to spring any more surprises on you like that." Hitoshi had mostly relaxed, but there was still a nervous fidget in his movements. "Can we exchange contacts to make sure that doesn't happen?" There it was. He had a hard time asking that for some reason. Maybe because this person in front of him was one of his first friends at a new school. Of course. Izuku was ecstatic. He was happy Hitsuhai was being a little more social. "Have you been getting along well with your class?" Izuku asked as they exchanged info. "I'm talking to them a little bit," Hitsuhai said as he rested his hand back on the back of his neck. "One step at a time. When you get into Class 1A I'll be sure to introduce you to everyone." Hitoshi was initially nervous about meeting 18 new people on top of his own class, but he got caught on a word in Izuku's statement. "Did you mean if? It's not a guarantee that I'll even get into the hero course." Izuku sighed. Hitoshi still had doubts in himself. "Not with that attitude you won't. The sports festival is coming up and if you make a splash there, I'm sure you'll get in no problem." Izuku was still optimistic about his friend's hopeful course transfer. "Now you're just assuming that I'll do well in the sports festival. I'm not even that good at fighting, especially since everyone will know my quirk now. I think I know someone who can help you out." "Midoriya, why did you drag me out here after class? You know, I don't hold the final decision on Shinsu's transfer. Even if I wanted it to happen now, it can't," Aizawa said, as really wanted to go back to his nap. "Nope, I'm not trying to get him transferred now. I'm trying to get him to make such a massive show at the sports festival that no one could say that he didn't deserve to be in the hero course." Izuku puffed out his chest with pride as he spoke these words. Hitoshi buried his face in his hands next to him. "So, you want me to train him? Why would I even be your first choice? I'm in a wheelchair." Izuku smiled a smile that made Aizawa realize he'd just played straight into his student's hand. "Well, I see a lot of similarities between you two. You're effectively quirkless when fighting, forcing you to use martial arts and equipment to gain an advantage. Also, you both always seem tired." Izuku conveyed his reasoning. Aizawa sighed. "I don't know how much I'll be able to do when I'm stuck like this, but I'll try." As these words exited Aizawa's mouth, Hitoshi's head shot back up and looked at the teacher. "Why?" was the only word he could manage. He wasn't used to people believing in him. His performance during the battle trials also still left a lot to be desired. "You are a good fit for a hero. I'm sure that the irrational entrance exam was the only thing keeping you from getting into the hero course in the first place. It is my job as a teacher to give not just my students, but all students an opportunity to become who they want to be." Hitoshi was in disbelief. Izuku smiled brightly. "However, don't think I'll make this easy. I'll give you the opportunity, but I will rip it away if you can't hang on to it tight enough, understood?" It was a warning that bordered on threat. Aizawa's eyes glowed red and his hair flared into the air to emphasize this point. "Yes, sir." Hitoshi found his resolve. He wasn't going to let this slip by. Izuku was now satisfied with his work. He congratulated his friend and began to make his way to the front gate. Just as he was alone going to school, he would be alone walking home. At least, that's what he thought. Just as he passed through the massive front gate of UA, an extremely familiar voice spoke from behind him. "I see you're truly all better now, Deku." Sarcasm dripped from Katsuki's mouth. Izuku turned and saw his best friend leaning against the gate wall, seemingly lying in wait. He went to respond, but he was cut off. "Why the hell did you almost kill yourself to try and save me, huh?" I was fine. So this is what his silence was about. I'm a hero, Katsuki. I'm supposed to put my life on the line for others, Izuku rebutted. TCH, we aren't heroes yet. You of all people should know that. As much as I want to go out and kick some villain, but right now, I can't. You need to slow down. Katsuki tried to sound calm, but he was yelling the whole time. Izuku's rage also built. What are you saying? Am I just supposed to sit by while my best friend gets turned into paste by another DMN truck? Or am I supposed to try and save him with the power I have? Katsuki was about to fire back, when he noticed a certain word Izuku had used. Truck. Noma wasn't a truck. It was a hulking creature made to kill All Might. Why the hell would he say truck? Deku, Katsuki began slowly, what happened back then? 'Cause, from my perspective, there was no truck. Izuku went pale. He had messed up. Oh, I meant to say Nomu. It wasn't a truck. I don't know what you're talking about, Izuku trailed off, beginning a rare mumbling spree. Did you imagine that day? When your quirk first appeared? Katsuki questioned, is that why you leapt up when you could barely even move? Izuku tried to smile to throw Katsuki off his trail, but it came out sour. His face was contorted into a mixture of pain and sadness. Tears began to well up in his eyes. I need to save everyone around me. I've been given the power to do so. I can't stop even if my body says so. I can't. Izuku slowly sank to the ground, repeating that phrase over and over. He began to cry. What good is power if you can't use it? I need to use it. For everyone's sake, he cried on the ground. Katsuki knelt down next to him to comfort him the best he could. Placing a hand on his best friend's back, he felt his internal pain. Izuku, it had been a long time since he'd used his first name. You don't need to push yourself so hard for the sake of others. You'll just become another person in need of saving. Sometimes, relying on others isn't so bad. Katsuki knew he sounded like a hypocrite, but that didn't matter right now. All that mattered was helping Izuku. I just did my best, isn't that enough? He said in between sobs. You did your best, but now you need to take it easy. Izuku's crying intensified. They sat there for a long time. The sky soon darkened. Katsuki and Izuku had walked home without saying another word to each other. They didn't want to risk lashing out at one another again. Both were deeply frustrated with the other still, but they knew it was for the better that they had confronted each other. It was now 9 p.m., as Izuku sat on his couch. He made sure that he'd wiped off any tear stains from his cheeks and shirt, so his mom didn't worry. Dinner was almost ready and it smelled good. Another one of Izuku's senses was alerted. He could hear his phone ringing next to him. He picked it up and groaned as he saw the contact. Toshinori. He wanted to hang up or at least ignore it, but his own words echoed back into his head. I did my best, isn't that enough? All Might had also done his best. They had all gotten out alive after all. Izuku hesitantly answered the call. Hello Toshinori. It was a plain and boring tone. All Might felt his heart twitch a little. Hello young Midoriya, I want to meet at Dagoba Beach. I have a few things I need to talk to you about. All Might didn't want to force this decision on Izuku, but he did need to talk to him soon. Sure, tomorrow after school. Don't be late. Izuku hung up before an answer could come through. All Might wasn't upset that he was hung up on. In fact, he was very happy that Izuku had agreed to meet with him. He knew the young boy still harbored ill feelings towards him, but time was beginning to run short on his plans. He couldn't wait any longer. Sweetie, who was that? His mom called from the kitchen. It was Toshinori. He wants to meet tomorrow down at the beach to talk about the sports festival. It wasn't technically a lie. Okay, don't let him do anything that you think could aggravate your injuries. Dinner's also ready now. Izuku got up with a sigh. He had the feeling tomorrow was going to be another emotionally draining day. Izuku arrived at the beach a few hours after school. It had been fairly uneventful. He was still being excused from hero training in favor of physical therapy. Supposedly, he would get the green light to participate in a couple days. He was skeptical. Him and Katsuki were getting along better, although still not talking like they used to. He'd also seen Aizawa pull Hitoshi during lunch to talk. Izuku flashed him a thumbs up when he saw this. Hopefully the fruits of their training would be apparent during the sports festival. Toshinori had texted him when he would be there. The sun was getting low in the sky. Izuku saw the frail man looking out at the waves, seemingly lost in thought. It was a picturesque scene. He walked down the stairs towards his trainer. The beach was still as clean as a whistle. Apparently, it has become a popular place for couples to hang out. Izuku was proud of his work. There were very few people around right now, though. It was only when Izuku was within a few feet of him that Toshinori noticed his presence. He turned and faced his student, his pupil, his successor. A soft smile was on his face. This served to comfort Izuku and simultaneously PSS him off. It was a confusing mixture of emotions. "What a beautiful place you've created here, young Midoriya," Toshinori said softly. Izuku continued to walk up until he was next to his teacher. They both looked at the beach behind them. "It was always here. I just helped clean it," Izuku responded. There was a slight edge to his voice. Toshinori picked up on it, seeing that his student was still upset with him. "I'm sorry, for everything I've put you through recently. Those villains were there because of me. I put you in danger, willingly. And I haven't been there for you recently." Toshinori was speaking from his heart. A solemn mood filled the space between the two. "It's fine," Izuku said hesitantly, "we all did our best back there." The conversation with Katsuki still rang in his head. He needed to slow down and heal. "I'm sorry that this conversation must happen now, but I can't afford to wait any longer." Toshinori tried to change the subject. "This probably should have been our conversation in that hospital room." Izuku tried not to sound harsh in saying this. "Oh no, I'm talking about something else, although I do agree, that probably should have been said back then." This piqued Izuku's curiosity. What was his mentor talking about? "Ever since I met you, young Midoriya, you've done nothing but impress me. From your exceptional physical skills, to your incredible heroic mindset, I've been blown away at your latent potential." Izuku was floored by what he was hearing. He was pretty confident in his own abilities, but this was something else. The #1 hero telling you how amazing you are, it was a dream come true for anyone. Toshinori continued, "That was why I trained you personally. You will be an amazing hero in the future, I'm sure of it." Thank you so much, I didn't know how much I am meant to you." Izuku's old stutter showed its face again. Toshinori smiled brightly. "That is why I want to entrust my quirk to you." "Huh?" Izuku's mind, which was already running at 100%, screeched to a halt at those words. He looked up at Toshinori and saw him extend his hand out towards him. "My quirk, One for All, is not like many others, my boy. It can be passed on from generation to generation without any blood relation. I am the 8th user. I want you to be the 9th, he said. Izuku's eyes widened as far as they could. "What are you talking about?" he asked. "Ah," Toshinori yelled as blood flew from his mouth, "I want you to be my successor, young Midoriya. I want you to carry on the legacy of One for All." Izuku began to put the pieces together. "So you want to transfer your quirk to me, so I can succeed you?" Toshinori nodded. "Yes. I've been looking for a successor for many years now, ever since I got my injury actually." A nicely timed gust of wind blew up Toshinori's shirt just enough to catch a glimpse of the gnarly wound. "I can feel my time with the quirk is beginning to come to an end. Soon, it will leave me quirkless again." "What? You were quirkless, All Might?" "What? All Might's here," two voices called out from down the beach. "Quickly, say, oh I got the wrong person," Toshinori hissed to Izuku. "Oh, I got the wrong person," Izuku yelled down the beach. Several sounds of disappointment echoed from the two people. Toshinori and Izuku let out sighs of relief. "Yes, young Midoriya, I was once quirkless. This quirk that I was given is the crystallization of power. As it is passed down from person to person, it becomes stronger." "Wait, does that mean dash? You will become stronger than I ever was," Toshinori finished his sentence. "This is crazy. Why even give it to me? I'm sure there are a ton of other more experienced students or even pros that could use it much better than I could. You have something inside of yourself that I don't see in anyone else. A pure, raw heroic spirit. Even if you were quirkless, like me before, I would still choose you over everyone else." Izuku made a face of disagreement. "You're just saying that," he said. "It's the truth." Toshinori blasted back, "I know I can trust you with this power." "Wait a second. You said you were quirkless, right?" Toshinori nodded. "How will One for All mix with my quirk?" "Honestly, no idea," Toshinori gave a non-comforting answer. Izuku began to sweat a little bit. "My master before me did have a quirk. It let her float up in the air, but now One for All is much more powerful. I honestly don't know how it'll react." "Do you think it'll replace my current quirk?" "No, it won't. It has a way of adapting to whoever is using it, just like how I can buff myself up to use it now." Izuku nodded, understanding a little of what Toshinori was saying. "If you're expecting an answer right now, I don't know. This is all so much. I need time to think." Izuku's mind began to spiral into a frenzy of conflicting thoughts. "Don't worry, my boy, I was not planning on getting an answer now. In fact, I think it is a terrible time for you to obtain my quirk. With your body weak like it is now, it could overwhelm you and cause your limbs to explode off." "What? I thought you said it'll be safe." "You will be fine when you get back to full strength. The sports festival is also coming up. It would be a terrible idea to give you a quirk you don't understand just before a major event." Toshinori turned his head to the side. Why are you looking at nothing? Izuku asked. His teacher turned back to him. Just collecting my thoughts, he replied. I was thinking about giving it to you over summer break. If you choose to accept, of course. Izuku put a hand to his chin and sank deep into thought. You'll have plenty of time to think about this, young Midoriya, and don't worry about saying no. I will continue to support you no matter your answer. I see, thank you. Izuku was lost in his thoughts by this point, giving a standard answer. Just don't talk about this to anyone. There are very few people that know about my quirk. You can tell your mom, however, if you want another lens to view this through. I see, thank you. Toshinori smiled awkwardly at the same response he'd just gotten. You should go home now, it is getting pretty late, he said as he put a hand on his successor's shoulder. Izuku snapped out of his thoughts and saw that it was indeed getting late. Yeah, you're right. My mom is probably close to finishing dinner. I should also sleep on this, he reasoned. I'll see you tomorrow in school, young Midoriya. You have a lot of time to think, but do think. Toshinori gave his advice on that matter. Izuku agreed and they soon parted ways. The next 2 weeks flew by. Everyone at UA worked as hard as they could to prepare. Izuku was allowed to train after a couple more days of rest. The strength in his left side returned quickly. His quirk's time limit would remain the same, though. Hitoshi learned the basics of hand-to-hand combat from Aizawa. He began to feel confident in his ability to fight on equal ground with the hero course. Katsuki trained with Ijiro to improve his blast power, while Ijiro worked on his quirk's stamina. Achiko worked on improving her weight limit by constantly floating heavy objects. Tenya sprinted around the school track anytime it was free. Soon the day of the sports festival arrived. Izuku also arrived at his decision about one for all. I accept, he told Toshinori in private. The skeletal man smiled brightly. Izuku matched it. Gotta run now, he said as he turned to leave. Show the world what you're made of, young Midoriya. Toshinori yelled as Izuku sprinted off to the waiting area. With that off of his mind, he was ready to compete. Izuku didn't need to run to the waiting area, he was already fairly early as it was, but he was just too excited. It was the day every aspiring hero student dreamed of. The UA Sports Festival. If he made a big impact here, he was sure to get a lot of internship offers. Everyone across the country would know who he was and what he could do. But I already know and kinda intern with All Might, he thought. So technically, he was already set. But this was also an opportunity to show what he could do with his own powers. His next two would be with One for All. It was still strange to think about that quirk. He was going to get it, but what would it do to him? The working theory between him and All Might was that it would just increase his time limit, along with the other assorted power, speed, and durability increases that were also included. Izuku decided that it wouldn't be worth thinking about that right now. He needed to focus on the events ahead of him. Even if he didn't technically need to do well, he was going to try his hardest. Arriving at his class-designated room, he noticed a purple-haired student camped outside of it. However, it wasn't the usual Hitoshi. It was Minoru Mineta. Izuku felt his body tighten up a little bit. It was out of either nerves, defense, or both. He never did apologize to him for smacking him into a wall. Minoru noticed him after a short time and they just stared at each other. Hey, Izuku tried to break the stalemate between them. Minoru's eyes shifted away from Izuku a bit, staring into nothing, before returning back to him. They held a newfound resolve in them. I came here because I wanted to apologize, he said before bowing heavily. Izuku took a step back, slightly startled from the amount of conviction in the short boy's voice. I should really be the one apologizing, Mineta. I smacked you into a wall. Izuku scratched the back of his neck. He had been picking that habit up from Hitoshi, he guessed. He bowed slightly. Minoru didn't let up. You were trying to set me straight. I did something terrible. I'm sorry for that, he said. You should really be saying this to the girls, not me. Well, Minoru raised his head up and looked at Izuku. I was hoping you could just pass along my message. Izuku slowly began putting the situation together. You're being required to do this, aren't you? Izuku probed. Minoru's facial expression went sour. Why yeah. Then you have to tell the girls directly. And no. All I have to do is apologize. It doesn't matter how they hear it. Minoru tried to reason with Izuku. It didn't work. If you asked someone else, they probably would have let you do that. Unfortunately, you ran into me first. Minoru cursed his luck. Also, what were you going to do if a girl walked over here? I would have. He trailed off for a second, seemingly regretting every decision that led up to this point. Ran away. Izuku rolled his eyes. What a coward. Had he even changed his pervy attitude? Here's the deal, Mineta, Izuku said, as he approached the shorter student. Minoru began sweating nervously. I'm going to keep you from getting killed by the rest of the class and you apologize directly to the girls. And what if I don't accept this? Then you get sent into another wall, Izuku said brightly. That isn't a choice, it's an ultimatum. Minoru protested. Yes, it is. Izuku gave a non-comforting thumbs up. Minoru shrank in on himself. Why the hell is he here, Midoriya? Kyoka questioned. She'd been the most aggressive so far, trying to kill Minoru the instant she saw him. Achiko was surprisingly aggressive as well. Yeah, Deku, and why are you defending him? Izuku knew what he was doing looked bad, but hopefully his explanation and Minoru's apology would sort things out. He just needed. Sorry guys, I got caught up with a few friends back there and, why the hell are you here? Mina finally made her appearance. Sorry, to surprise all of you like this, Izuku began, but my Netta here has something very very important to say to all of you. He waved Minoru out from behind him. All eyes were on him. I'm sorry, he squeaked out. Izuku teleported away from him, forcing Minoru into the open. I won't do anything like that again, he immediately darted out the door. Izuku rolled his eyes, but didn't bother pursuing. The sports festival was beginning soon. So you brought him here to apologize? Asked a confused Tsuyu. The other girls nodded. Well, he came here on his own, but was going to ask one of the guys to apologize for him, Izuku explained the situation. At least he came to apologize, even if it was probably required of him, Momo threw her opinion out there. Well, this is all well and good, but Deku, Achiko smiled awkwardly at her friend. He perked up, listening, do you think you could leave the girls' changing room? Izuku suddenly became aware of where he actually was. His face slowly heated up as he began saying his apologies. Swiftly, he made his way out of that room and into the boys. Ah, there he is, Ijiro yelled out as Izuku entered. He made his way over and slapped the green-haired boy on the back. Where have you been? It's almost time to start. Sorry, I was negotiating, he trailed off. Yeah, there was quite the commotion from the girls' room when I walked by, Denki slyly added. Izuku got a few questioning looks. I was busy trying to get them to not kill my Netta. He wanted to apologize to them. Izuku tried to keep himself calm. The events from before still had him flustered. Midoriya, a cold voice sounded from beside him. Yes? Izuku yelled out of surprise. I'm here to issue you a challenge. Izuku turned and saw it was Shoto who was talking to him. They hadn't really spoken before. Why, though? Izuku was confused. You've shown yourself to be powerful. During the battle trials, you single-handedly took down the entire enemy team similar to myself. Izuku interrupted his speech. You're discrediting Yaoyorozu. She played a key role in gathering information and fighting Hitoshi, Izuku retorted. I guess that is true, but I'm not trying to challenge her. During the USJ incident, you held off Nomu for an extended period of time and injured the other villains. Everyone in the room flinched at the mention of the USJ. Get on with it, BSTRD, Katsuki screamed from the back of the room. Shoto rolled his eyes. I'll beat you here. Consider this a declaration of war, he finished. He glanced at Katsuki who was fuming in the back of the room. Izuku shook off that weird encounter and began to get changed into his gym clothes. The boys and girls converged as they were told to head out onto the field. It was time to start. The stadium had always looked big, even on TV. But seeing it in person, let alone being in the middle of it, made it seem so much bigger. Crowds of people, both civilians and pro-heroes, cheered as each class was introduced. Present Mike made all of 1A flinch again as he mentioned certain prior events. Normally, the first years didn't get much attention. But it seemed that those recent events had put a spotlight on them. It was going to be a huge event. Katsuki wasn't lost in the awe of everything around him. Izuku noticed after a bit of walking, what's the matter, Katsuki? That half-and-half BSTRD completely overlooked me again. I'm going to crush him, Katsuki raged. Izuku understood his best friend's attitude. Shoto had beaten Katsuki before during the battle trials. He wanted revenge during the festival. Hello everyone, Midnight yelled out, it's time for us to begin the first-year sports festival. It seemed that she would be the announcer for their events. To start us off, let's have Izuku Midoriya, the top scorer on the entrance exam, give a few words before we begin. Crap, Izuku thought. He'd been so caught up with thinking about One for All and the events that he'd completely forgotten that he would need to give a speech beforehand. He shakily made his way up to the microphone. Everyone around him went silent as they waited for him to speak. My name is Izuku Midoriya. It was a very awkward start. I'm glad that we're all able to be here today. We've had some rough first weeks at UA. Izuku scratched the back of his neck and chuckled quietly. He needed to make a point of some kind here or just leave. I wanted to say that. He looked down at the sea of his classmates and peers. They all looked back with a wide variety of expressions. Some were happy, some were angry, and some were indifferent. Izuku looked up and continued, I'm going to win. The crowd of students erupted into a mixture of boos and confusion. The crowd in the stands began to cheer slightly. Izuku didn't care about either. He smiled the whole way back to his class. Several of them, including Shoto, weren't happy with his declaration. Katsuki gave him a smirk that said, don't get too cocky. The first event is an obstacle course. Midnight announced, begin heading to the starting area. There was a clear starting line next to a large exit. So they would be going outside. Izuku and Hitoshi saw each other walking to the start line and gave friendly waves. There was a little idle conversation as they waited for everyone to line up, but most people were either stressed out of their minds or ready to slaughter the competition. Izuku fell into the latter category. He got as close to the start line as he could before the wall of people became too thick. It was only a few feet away, so he could easily make that up later. Katsuki had the same idea and was much more aggressive about it. Shoto also pushed his way through the crowd. The air of competition only grew thicker with each passing second. Izuku wasn't expecting a countdown, similar to the entrance exam. And sure enough. Start! Midnight yelled across the crowd of students. Izuku was off like a rocket, trying to make it to the front of the pack before they got to the tunnel exit. That was going to be a major bottleneck. Katsuki had flown into the air in an attempt to fly over everyone. He was fast in a straight line, but lacked precise control. Going through the tunnel at top speed would mean he had to get there before anyone else. Izuku needed to break out of the group. His solution was to stop time and wave his arm out in an arc in front of him. When time resumed, this created a massive wind gust that caused a lot of competitors to lose their balance or duck down. Izuku pushed his way through the confused and staggered crowd, knocking a few people over along the way. A cold breeze wafted through the crowd. The cold turned to freezing, as every student was suddenly adhered to the ground by ice. Shoto froze everything around him and used the icy surface to skate past everyone who was stuck. Multiple people, especially hero course students, were able to avoid the ice, but it still slowed them down. Katsuki assumed the lead, followed by Izuku, and then Shoto. Momo made ice skates and Mineta used his ball to bounce across the ice. They weren't too far behind. Wow! There sure is a lot of unique quirk usage out there, don't you think, Eraser? Present Mike screeched on the PA system. Aizawa was trying his hardest to sleep, but it seemed his buddy wasn't going to let him. Yeah, getting out of that bottleneck is the true first obstacle in this race, he said flatly. Present Mike wasn't bothered by his lack of energy. Izuku fired another blast of wind behind him directed at Shoto. Katsuki was too far away by this point. An obstacle would need to slow him down. Shoto was thrown off balance for a second by the wind, but righted himself quickly. Ice skating came naturally to him, and with practice he could travel faster by riding his ice. The slippery surface he left behind also inhibited his opponent's movements. He didn't know that he would catch Izuku this easily. The other student seemed to be on the defensive. Why isn't he teleporting? Shoto asked himself. From the long-distance run during the first day of school, Shoto knew he was slightly faster than Izuku and slightly slower than Katsuki. So why wasn't Izuku using his quirk to move faster? As Shoto passed Izuku, he fired a small bit of ice at the other student. Izuku broke it apart and Shoto was forced to shield his eyes from the icy shrapnel. Being this close allowed Shoto to see how heavily Izuku was breathing. He was already tired. Izuku's stamina was still limited from his injuries. If he ran while constantly using his quirk, he would eventually become exhausted. He instead chose to use it at key opportunities to get the most from each use. A deep rumbling was heard from up ahead. They both turned and looked to see multiple zero-pointers rise from the ground. A distant Katsuki was forced backwards away from them. More rose up behind the first line. It's time for our first obstacle. Robo Inferno. Present Mike cheered out. There were at least 8 of them in 2 rows. More might show up later. Shoto stopped creating ice. He would need to thaw out a little bit for his next attack. Izuku knew he could take one out, but that would put him out of the race. As much as he hated it, he would need to dodge around and deflect attacks. Just like Nomu? No! Izuku shouted out loud. He wouldn't just run from anything that reminded him of that creature. How could he hope to be a hero then? Katsuki debated on what he wanted to do. He could show off and take 1 or 2 down, or he could simply fly over them and try to win the whole race. Looking back, he saw Izuku and Shoto quickly approaching. They would catch up in a few seconds. Katsuki decided to fly over the massive robots. He attempted to fly up and over them, but a robot in the back row swung its fist at him. Firing a blast to the side, he avoided the attack. More swings followed, but he was able to avoid them all. A rush of cold air flew in from behind him. He moved away before turning to see the massive ice wall that engulfed two robots. This was Shoto's doing. Izuku ran up to one of the unfrozen robots. He noticed that there were smaller robots, too, but he paid them no attention. His focus was solely on the massive zero-pointers. It swung its hand down at him, but Izuku teleported out of the way. He began to run up its arm. The other arm of the robot tried to grab him, but Izuku, again, teleported out of the way. He reached its shoulder and gave an exaggerated wind-up before time-stop punching it in the neck. The fragile metal structure crumpled and sparks flew from the impact. A couple more hits and it was down for the count. Izuku leapt off as it crashed into the ground and began running towards the next robot in his path. Its massive fist flew at him as he approached, but he stopped time just before it hit. He punched it back and watched as it crumpled. He gave another punch to its side as he ran past for a parting gift. It tried to turn and attack him, but its movement had been disabled due to the last strike. Izuku ran past onto the next obstacle. Katsuki watched as this all took place. He scoffed at his best friend's showmanship. Another robot tried to attack him, but Katsuki darted out of its way and rushed its head. He fired a massive blast straight into it and watched as the rest of it went up in flames, crashing to the ground. Satisfied, he too made his way to the next obstacle. Shoto was frozen in place. Using his ice to skate on his way here and the massive attack early had left him immobile for the time being. He could use his? Shoto shook that thought away. It wasn't worth thinking about right now. The ice thawed slowly and he ran through the frozen debris towards the next obstacle. Momo created a cannon and shot down two more robots, only leaving one operational. This allowed most of the other students to get past without slowing down much. Only the smaller bots posed any issue now. Katsuki soared past Izuku, who sighed at the impressive speed. From high in the air he noticed the next obstacle was a series of pitfalls. Those wouldn't be an issue for him, he could fly after all. Just as he got over the pits, though, a bright flash and sudden bang threw him off course. There were anti-aircraft guns lining the perimeter of the obstacle. Oh. It looks like Katsuki Bakugo has found out the hard way what happens if you try and skip one of the obstacles. Present Mike yelled out. We understood that students with flight-based quirks would have too big of an advantage during the obstacle race. So we made it difficult for them to fly effectively, Aizawa commented. Indeed, Eraserhead. It's time for the students to face the fall. Katsuki growled as he was forced to dodge around more flak. The blasts didn't seem dangerous, but they would probably knock him out of the air if he got hit. He quickly made his way to the ground. A new strategy popped into his head. He leapt from one rocky pillar to another, using his explosions to propel him the distance. The AA guns didn't fire on him. Although it was slower than flying, he didn't need to risk getting shot down. Izuku was not very well equipped for this obstacle. He tried to think of a way he could apply his quirk, but he came up with a blank. The only option that came to mind was to just cross normally. Shoto arrived to find Katsuki nearly through the obstacle and Izuku around the halfway point. He needed to catch up. Most of the ice on his body had thawed away, so he decided to skate across the ropes. Katsuki leapt off of the last platform just as the rest of the students arrived. He rocketed off to the next obstacle. Izuku followed after a little bit and Shoto was not too far behind. His body was partly frozen again. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is time for our final obstacle of this race, a minefield. Be careful not to step on one, Present Mike ended with a taunt. How in the world are there already people at the last obstacle, wheezed Achiko. She was with Momo and Tsuyu at the beginning of the second obstacle. It's probably Bakugo, commented Tsuyu. Momo nodded her agreement. I hope it's Deku, Achiko thought to herself. They were all taking a small break to prepare for this next obstacle. Tsuyu leapt onto one of the ropes, Momo made herself a grappling hook, and Achiko floated across. She was careful to not get targeted by the AA guns. Hey! Don't steal my idea, a voice from behind the three exclaimed. They all turned to see a pink-haired girl covered in support equipment. It's time that I show the world what my babies can do. A grappling hook shot out from one of the pods on her waist and she swung across a gap. When she landed on the side of a pillar, she engaged some kind of hover boots and flew up the side. That's interesting, Momo said. Katsuki continued to use his explosions to hop over large areas of landmines. There was a small problem, though. Just as he fired an explosion to jump off the ground, a mine underneath said explosion was triggered. Katsuki was flung to the side and bounced a good distance back to the start. Angered by his loss of time, he leapt higher than he'd been doing before. He realized that he couldn't see where the landmines were anymore and tried to set himself down blindly. Multiple mines underneath him forced him back up in the air. The AA guns began to activate due to him flying for too long. He dodged flak and tried to find a place to land safely. During all of this, Izuku and Shoto were catching up. Izuku was marginally faster than Shoto in a dead sprint without quirks. They'd had a few scuffles with Shoto shooting ice at him and it getting blown away. Izuku smiled when he saw the AA guns begin to fire, as that meant that Katsuki was going to be slowed down. The two of them arrived at the minefield and saw Katsuki still trying to find a place to land. Izuku began to carefully make his way around the mines normally. Shoto followed suit. Neither one wanted to clear a way for the people behind them or make a landing pad for Katsuki. Izuku decided to have some fun and shot a wind blast at Shoto, causing him to be knocked off balance. He didn't step on any mines, but it did slow him down. Shoto couldn't retaliate since he would set off mines with his ice. As the three front runners were around the halfway point, the rest of the field got to the last obstacle. Most of them tried to carefully make their way around the mines. Others purposely set them off to try and blow away competitors. Izuku took note of the latter option. Katsuki eventually found a nice place to land a bit in front of Izuku and Shoto. He began to make his short hops again as he heard an explosion behind him. Another one rang out. About every second or so, there was mine being set off closer and closer to him. He turned and saw Izuku in a dead sprint teleporting over the mines. If Izuku stepped on a mine while in stop time, it would only activate when time resumed. This allowed him to just run over any mine he wanted to and not slow down. He was going to catch Katsuki in no time. Shoto was very displeased with this recent development. He threw caution to the wind and began to freeze the path behind him again. This gave the people behind him a clear path to take, but he needed to move faster. Izuku saw Shoto begin to close in on him and fired a blast of wind at the ground in front of him. It activated a few mines and forced Shoto away for a moment. He turned back and continued to advance on Katsuki. Katsuki needed a new strategy. Izuku was closing in on him fast. He entered a sprint as well, launching himself over any mines he saw. It was risky, but he would need to take the chance. Izuku and Katsuki exited the minefield neck and neck. Katsuki launched himself in the air and tried to break away. Izuku had other plans. He pulled out a few of the metal fragments he'd collected from the zero-pointers and threw them at Katsuki in stop time. 2 hits and Katsuki was sent into the ground. They didn't cause any major damage to him, but it still hurt really badly. Katsuki attempted to get up, but a wall of ice froze him to the ground. He blew it up and turned to Shoto, who had just exited the minefield, too. Shoto attempted to freeze Katsuki again, but it was avoided this time. He tried to freeze Izuku, but he was too far ahead. He would need to get closer. Katsuki shot off towards Izuku again, but was stopped by more metal fragments thrown his way. None hit this time, but he was slowed to a stop in the air. The finish line was getting close now, as Shoto got within range of Izuku to freeze him. Izuku felt the cold and tried to blow it away with a wind blast, but it was bigger than the others. He was temporarily frozen in place, allowing Shoto to catch him. Katsuki flew in as well and soon the three engaged in a free-for-all match, trying to stop the others from breaking away. Izuku was able to strike Shoto with the last of his metal fragments and knocked Katsuki off course for a moment. This small gap allowed him to enter the tunnel to the finish first. Shoto and Katsuki tried their hardest to stop him from breaking away, but both were too winded by this point. Izuku wins the obstacle race.
Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.